Simply equipping this sword instantly grants you 200 levels. There's just one problem. After only 2 swings, it shatters forever. At the moment, it's sealed away inside a museum, but this guy discovered a way to use it without limits. Here's why. Sana Haruto possesses one of the most overlooked abilities in the entire world. Watch him pick up this onigiri, make a copy of it, then casually create another one like a real-life version of Windows. He's basically walking. Control-C and Control-V. Seems completely overpowered, doesn't it? Except there's a drawback. Anything he duplicates disappears the instant it leaves his inventory. But imagine this, what if he keeps copying and duplicating the Kalasha longsword while it never leaves his inventory? He'd be walking around permanently with 200 extra levels above his normal strength. Completely busted. At first glance, you'd think his skill is insanely overpowered, but that's not actually the case. Right now, someone asks the so-called trash to provide mana, and Sana agrees. Sadly, the only thing he can do is duplicate his own mana and place the original into his teammate from behind. He keeps the copied mana inside his inventory so it won't disappear, then hands over the original, allowing the guy, after feeling our hero's warmth at his back, to unleash a massive lightning spell. You'd expect this copy ability to be ridiculously broken, but mana potions are incredibly cheap in this world, so everyone sees Sana as nothing more than a guy who saves people a little money. Every other hunter laughs at this poor, supposedly useless, ugly loser, and that's a huge mistake. They have no idea what's waiting for our boy. The real issue is this. For some reason, leveling up is far more difficult for Sana than it is for everyone else. He clears dungeon after dungeon but remains stuck at level 29. Yet reaching level 30 unlocks something enormous. Keep that in mind. As if things weren't bad enough, his guild decides to fire him because they believe he has no future. But Sana has that Sigma grindset mindset, and even after ending up practically homeless, he heads right back into the dungeon to keep grinding. A giant-mouthed spider suddenly swoops in, ready to devour everyone. But this time, the monsters in the area are about to learn a lesson. Everything nearby is thrown into chaos as the creatures are forced to pay the price. The blonde guy tells Sana to send that familiar warm mana from behind, and our boy comes through. Powered by it, the guy unleashes an enormous wave of fire. Even so, Sana remains stuck at level 29. Before long, the party reaches the boss room. The leader warns everyone to stay alert, but the blonde guy has that expression. You know, the one, I'm about to mess everything up look. He kicks a rock, it smacks into a web, and the boss immediately wakes up. Instant chaos. Blocking, slashing, shouting, everyone fighting with everything they have. But the blonde guy gets overconfident after Sana powered him up from behind and launches a gigantic fireball. Too bad for him, the spider has incredibly fast. The spider fires a barrage of webs that blocks and reflects the fireball straight back into its own eggs, forcing them to hatch and leaving our boy Sana completely shaken. At that point, it was over. The leader ended up wrapped from head to toe like an model in a photo shoot. The rest of the party received the same web cocoon treatment, followed by a gruesome death. Sana stayed alive for the moment until eventually it was his turn to die, or so it seemed, because this guy is basically exploiting the system. He creates copies of himself at the dungeon entrance. Unlike everything else, his copies remain where they're placed, effectively giving him a respawn point. Using this broken trick, he challenges the boss over and over, but he's still just an ordinary guy facing a level 80 monster. Now he's hiding behind a pillar, battered and barely able to move. He can't fight, yet he has no way to escape either. Then he notices one of the hunters still trapped in the webs. It's the same leader everyone knew was doomed, desperately crying out for help. But Haruto understands there's no way to save him. As the boss continues destroying everything around it, Haruto decides to take one last gamble. He's furious that after everything he's been through, he might die without landing a single blow. Just then, the boss strikes. Haruto swings at one of her legs, successfully knocking the attack off course. In that instant, he gains experience for connecting with a hit and finally reaches the next level. But the moment he checks the notification, the boss slams a devastating attack straight into his chest. Once again, his backup copy brings him back into existence. The problem is that his attacks still barely affect the boss, but our crafty hero is about to pull off a full re-zero strategy. It doesn't matter if he has to die hundreds of times. Eventually, he'll bring this monster down. The spider attacks again, and Haruto rushes forward, whispering that little by little, every scratch brings him closer to victory. 3 days pass. After dying countless times and watching nearly all of his teammates' weapons shatter, Haruto has become much stronger. Meanwhile, the Spider Queen is in terrible shape. None of the damage she's taken has healed. She fires another barrage of webs, but this time Haruto avoids every one of them. He's already adapted to the speed of her attacks. She swings at him once more, and he leaps up, races along one of her legs, then climbs all the way to her head. "Just die already," he roars. He plunges his sword directly into the Spider Queen's head, but the blade instantly breaks apart like a flimsy stick. She hurls him away, smashes him into the ground, and unleashes a deafening roar. Then, just as she's ready to sink her fangs into him, cracks begin spreading across her body. Her HP finally reaches 0, and she bursts into pieces. Haruto collapses where he stands, completely exhausted. After dying so many times, his mind is barely functioning. Then suddenly, notification after notification fills his screen with level-ups. The reward for defeating the Great Spider Queen has finally been granted. Our hero decides it's time to check on his teammate after being trapped there for 3 full days. But before he can leave, something crashes down beside him. He looks up and immediately realizes the area is swarming with spiders. "Get lost, you creepy albino freaks." The problem is, he doesn't have a weapon, and the hunter beside him is completely broken. He refuses to abandon the man and let him die. Flashback 2 hours earlier, on a bridge in Tokyo. Inside a car, a level 112 soldier named Morgrant asks the level 131 mage Subaru name errors how many times she's visited Japan. She answers that this is her second trip. He then asks whether it's her mother's homeland. She replies that it doesn't matter. She only came here for a single purpose. There's something hidden inside one of Japan's dungeons that she intends to find. Morgrant says he hopes she succeeds, but she warns him not to involve himself in her affairs unless he wants to get hurt. At that moment, an announcement over the intercom informs everyone that the truck is entering the Rainbow Gate dungeon, or the Rainbow Bridge dungeon, whatever you want to call it. It's got a rainbow, a bridge, and a dungeon. That's all you need to know. Because of the electromagnetic waves, every electronic device will be disabled for 5 minutes. Turns out there's a dungeon directly beneath the bridge. Nearby, inside an office, a level 21 hunter named Shinoda Satoru is complaining about how boring the job is. His coworker jokes that it's probably because Satoru only got the position through connections, and honestly, without connections, nobody gets assigned to a place like this. Then all of a sudden, a slime bumps against Satoru's leg. He kneels to pick it up, saying it's actually pretty cute, way nicer than the creepy ones found inside dungeons. He asks if it's normal for these little slimes to wander around outside. His coworker answers yes, though something in his voice sounds uneasy. Then, out of nowhere, something crashes into Satoru's back. He turns around, and the shadow alone tells him everything. A massive ogre is about to smash him into a puddle. Yeah, he's done for. Back in the present, our boy Sana Haruto survives once again thanks to his reliable Control plus C, Control plus V trick. His next goal is reaching level 50. That's the point where things usually become much easier. Better dungeon parties start accepting you, and with stronger teams come better loot and faster experience gains. Feeling optimistic, he starts believing his chance has finally arrived. Then suddenly, a crowd shoves right past him, shouting for him to move aside. Completely puzzled, he wonders why everyone is running around in total panic. Someone asks whether they're really planning to enter before the major guilds arrive. Another replies that they have no choice because the legendary sword is being transported there. Morgrant receives the report. The good news is that the sword is close by. The bad news is that a dungeon has just erupted in the same area. On the roof of the association headquarters, aircraft are already being prepared for deployment. Most of the hunters seem focused on protecting the legendary longsword since it's worth an absolute fortune. Then a woman steps forward, ordering everyone to follow her commands because she's leading the operation. The most serious woman we've seen in a while declares that the association's top priorities are eliminating monsters and rescuing civilians. As she boards the aircraft, she says everything else can wait until later. Just then, someone in the back starts shouting that they want to come too. Nanus ignores the interruption and orders everyone to board. Naturally, it's our boy Sana asking to join them. He explains that he spent 5 years in the guild and knows the area well. He admits he isn't particularly strong, but he still wants to help rescue civilians. She gives him a puzzled look, clearly wondering what this walking piece of trash expects to accomplish. Haruto responds with a passionate speech about how every extra pair of hands could mean another life saved. Nanus, looking far more interested in leaving than arguing, simply sighs and allows him aboard. A moment later, he's already inside. She casually mentions hearing that he rescued one of the junior hunters at the spider nest, saying he sounds like a genuinely selfless person. He thanks her while thinking to himself that he only saved the kid because there was something to gain. Just like this time, he's only here for the rewards. The other hunters begin wondering, didn't we stabilize the Rainbow Bridge dungeon just 3 weeks ago? Why is it opening again? Nanus replies that incidents like this aren't unusual. That's exactly why they have to stay prepared at all times. Their mission is to ensure the catastrophe from 15 years ago is never repeated. Then comes the flashback. Back then, countless dungeon gates burst open simultaneously. There simply weren't enough hunters across across the world to contain the outbreak, leaving monsters free to roam everywhere. During that disaster, Haruto's mother was crushed beneath a car. But on that same day, he encountered a transcendent being, something that seemed to exist beyond this world. That was the moment he received his ability, or perhaps his curse. The mysterious voice spoke only 2 words, 20 years. Even now, he has no idea what they meant. Was it the limit of his skill, his remaining lifespan, or something entirely different? What he does know is that a strange mark appeared on his neck, and its countdown has never stopped. He's convinced that being appeared only because of the great disaster. Maybe the mark is counting down to the next catastrophe. If he's right, then only 5 years remain. 5 years to become the strongest hunter possible. Back at the bridge, boom. The dungeon gate bursts wide open. Cars are hurled through the air like pebbles. Absolute chaos erupts. The hunters on the ground are already being overwhelmed, with far too few of them to protect the civilians. A small goblin lunges at a child, but the kid manages to drive a sword into its stomach. Just as another goblin rushes in from behind, someone cuts it down in midair. Wait, so these two actually managed to survive that enraged orc from before. They're a lot tougher than they first appeared. The man tells the spoiled rich kid to stay focused because he won't be there to save him a second time. It turns out that when the orc was about to crush them, he threw himself over the kid and shielded him with his own body. It was only just enough to save them. Looking overwhelmed, Satoru thinks, "This guy has saved me twice already." He asks whether reinforcements are coming, but the man replies that something feels wrong. Even so, they should arrive eventually. Now, the smartest option is to cross the bridge and regroup with them. No playing the lone hero until backup gets here. Meanwhile, a gigantic bear is smashing apart a truck. It's a level 190 monster. Inside, Morgrant nervously asks whether the vehicle can withstand the assault. Eris calmly tells him not to worry. She's maintaining her highest level defensive barrier. According to her, even a level 400 monster wouldn't be able to destroy it so easily. Everyone looks up and spots aircraft approaching overhead. Wait, no, those aren't the Great Sage's ships. Morgrant suddenly shouts for Eva to watch out. Turns out the massive object they were seeing was actually a gigantic wyvern named Keisha. Nanus immediately orders everyone to brace for impact. The beast gathers power before launching its attack. Boom! The explosion slams directly into the aircraft. The entire bridge trembles and begins collapsing. But hold on, where in the world are the guild airships? Judging by the situation, they're flying above the dragon. Or maybe that's not what happened. Honestly, it's confusing. One moment it's the bridge, the next it's the aircraft. The monster launches another fireball. This time, it lands a direct hit on the aircraft. Total chaos erupts. Hunters leap out to fight while Nanus has already landed on the ground. One of the association officials announces that they're taking command from here. They all look confident, but let's be honest, they've got disposable side character written all over them. Meanwhile, Nanus asks about a certain hunter, Sulhajin. Sometimes they call him by his Korean name, and other times by his Japanese one. It's confusing, but she's convinced he isn't going to die. Here, she immediately unleashes a blazing inferno spell, which somehow looks more like water, but it slams straight into the boss anyway. Meanwhile, Haruto is soaring through the air, using a spiderweb skill to latch onto a lamppost and swing to safety like a budget Spider-Man. While everyone else is dropping around him, he's still focused on copying that legendary dragon sword. The association squads continue advancing across the bridge. Every one of them looks nervous, saying the situation is far too dangerous. After all, nobody wants to face Keisha, but defeating it is the quickest way to seal the gate. Meanwhile, Haruto calmly walks through piles of sliced-up monster corpses. The wolves themselves aren't especially powerful. The real danger is that they always hunt in packs. Not far away, Shinoda Satoru is cutting through monsters while shouting at the top of his lungs. But the partner from earlier has been bitten in the ribs and is in terrible condition. Haruto quickly sizes up the battlefield, then decides it's not his concern. He has more important things to deal with. The large hunter who rescued his teammate earlier shouts for Haruto to run, saying there's no chance of surviving this chaos without an elite hunter. At that moment, a massive paw crashes down nearby and an entire pack appears. They were moon wolves. The problem? They're only level 15, but they attack in overwhelming numbers. Shinoda Satoru may not be the main character, but the guy has real courage. He shouts that if his senior was willing to get hurt protecting him, then he'll gladly die protecting his senior. Hearing those words, Haruto remembers, saving the team leader back in the spider dungeon. And here he goes again, about to do something reckless. A wolf leaps straight at Haruto, and it looks like he's about to become lunch. Wait, what? I thought Haruto was going to save him. Instead, the kid spins around and cuts the wolf's head off by himself. Then another one charges from behind. Once again, the kid manages to defend himself. Maybe Haruto really isn't planning to help after all. But then a third wolf jumps for the back of the kid's neck. That's when our our protagonist finally steps in, slamming the beast out of the air with a shoulder tackle. Seriously, Haruto, maybe bring a weapon next time. He asks if the kid is alright. The boy says he's fine, but tells Haruto to look around. The battlefield is still crawling with monsters. The kid urges Haruto to run, saying that even weak monsters become impossible to handle in numbers like these. Haruto only grins and replies, "This is exactly the kind of situation I was hoping for." The kid, who honestly feels more like Haruto's younger brother by now, can only stare in confusion. Haruto reaches into his inventory and says he'd been annoyed that he couldn't sell this item, but now he can't wait to see what happens when he combines it with his ability. The moon wolves leap forward and Satoru panics, letting out a terrified scream. That's when Haruto hits the ultimate control plus V, copying and deploying the giant spiderweb skill he stole from the boss. In an instant, the wolves are wrapped up, choking, thrashing, and crashing into one another. They end up tangled together like a giant knot of spaghetti, completely incapable of fighting back. Within moments, an enormous pile of trapped monsters has formed, while Haruto calmly stands there collecting level-ups. Just as he predicted, a large-scale immobilization skill is the perfect counter against enemies that rely on numbers. Satoru lies there in disbelief, wondering who this guy really is. He asks if Haruto was sent by the Hunter Association, and Haruto, without technically lying, answers yes. After all, he did arrive on the same helicopter. The injured hunter humbly asks Haruto to take Satoru to safety so the kid won't die. But Satoru immediately refuses, insisting there's no way he'll abandon his senior. Impressed by their unwavering loyalty, Haruto thinks to himself that these two would gladly die for each other, while he wouldn't give his life for anyone. Somewhat touched by the scene, he opens his inventory, takes out a healing potion, and gives it to them. He explains it won't be enough to get the injured man back into battle, but it should at least keep him alive. The wounded hunter stares at him in disbelief, pointing out that the potion is unbelievably expensive. Haruto simply tells him that he wants both of them to make it out alive, so he should take his junior and leave. Satoru is practically overwhelmed with admiration at this point. Fighting back his emotions, he thanks Haruto and introduces himself as Kang Shaon. And from here on out, new characters will keep their Korean names, while the older ones stay in Japanese. Haruto couldn't care less about any of that. He starts walking away, then suddenly stops, turns around, and asks whether they've seen the international hunters. After all, he knows they're the ones transporting the legendary sword. Meanwhile, the enormous bear continues closing in on the truck. Eris effortlessly keeps the massive bear under control, calmly putting it to sleep as if it were nothing. Morgrant is impressed by how many non-lethal techniques she possesses. Out of nowhere, a projectile comes flying toward them. Morgrant reacts without hesitation, slicing it out of the air. He mutters that it was only a matter of time before someone tried to steal the sword amid all this chaos. Eris' expression immediately hardens. A group of masked figures steps forward, praising him for noticing so quickly before demanding that he hand over the sword. Before Morgrant can even answer, they launch their attack. He blocks the assault and shouts that they didn't become easy targets by accident. There's a reason. They were entrusted with protecting the legendary blade. He orders Eris to stay back, but naturally he charges forward instead. Eris tells him not to because everyone can already see where this is heading. Sure enough, he suddenly freezes in the middle of his attack, then collapses to his knees, coughing up blood. Completely shocked, he has no idea what just happened. Eris explains that the enemy is using a potion that prevents mana absorption. The moment he tries to activate a skill, it becomes fatal. The masked leader congratulates them, saying they never make the mistake of underestimating their opponents. Eris remarks that they must be incredibly desperate to rely on items the association has outlawed. A magic circle appears around one of her fingers as she calmly says things are about to become very unpleasant. One of the masked attackers fires a fireball at her, mocking the idea that a mage without mana is as good as dead. Huge mistake. In a single instant, nearly a third of his head and shoulder disappears. He drops on the spot, knocked out instantly. The enemy leader makes a desperate rush for the legendary sword, but his squad is being wiped out, torn apart, thrown from the bridge, and devoured alive. The masked commander suddenly realizes, hold on, Eris never actually killed the monster. She only put it to sleep. With no other option, he retreats, abandoning every one of his fallen comrades. Morgrant immediately understands they won't be able to put that beast back to sleep. Eris confirms she has no mana remaining, explaining that everything she did earlier only suppressed its strength. Morgrant mutters that, just as he'd always warned, her refusal to use lethal force would eventually get her killed. She smiles and quietly answers that maybe he's right, but he won't be the one to die. Then, without another word, she dashes forward, activating what looks like one final desperate power-up. Morgrant desperately screams for her to stop, but she keeps charging straight at the bear. Of course, the anti-mana poison is still affecting her. Blood pours from her mouth with every step as she forces herself onward, unable to absorb even a trace of mana. Then the monster swings its enormous paw straight at her. That's when someone presses Ctrl+V. Seriously, just when things were getting good. The chapter ends right there. I was sure he was about to restore her mana so she could put the monster back to sleep. But nope, it turns out, instead, he trapped the boss inside an enormous web cocoon and smashed it into the ground. Seriously, what is that skill? It's completely broken. The monster ended up looking like a giant mummy. Once again, Satoru and his companion could only stare in disbelief, praising Haruto for how incredible he was. Haruto wanted to get the two of them out of there as quickly as possible, but things weren't that simple. He asked if they were alright and whether they belonged to the association. Eris looked puzzled, as if she couldn't understand the language he was speaking. Morgrant, however, got back to his feet and immediately demanded to know whether Haruto had come to steal the sword. The king of bluffing instantly denied it, claiming he was there to protect it, of course. But after the ambush, they weren't about to place their trust in some stranger. Looking around, Haruto finally understood what had happened to everyone who had gone after that legendary sword. At this point, getting out alive without being cut to pieces would be a miracle. Then Satoru pulled out his hunter registry and questioned why the people who had saved them were being treated like criminals. Haruto couldn't have been happier. At last, the kid had proven useful. Seeing the opportunity, Haruto took out 2 mana potions and offered them, telling the pair to drink because they were obviously in rough shape. Those potions had cost him countless dungeon runs, but he was willing to sacrifice them if it brought him one step closer to the legendary sword. With few options left, the two accepted the potions. After a brief hesitation, they drank them. Meanwhile, Eris never took her eyes off the boss. More association aircraft began arriving overhead. At last, the remaining guilds had reached the battlefield. The burly hunter remarked that they were safe for the moment, but the newcomers would be the ones forced to deal with the boss. That was still standing there. Running across the monster's back, she shouted that the boss was about to enter its 3rd phase. With the rest of the guilds finally arriving, the top priority was getting every civilian to safety. Then someone asked when he'd finally be allowed to do whatever he wanted. A tattooed man wearing glasses called out to Nanu's. Acting completely relaxed, he greeted her like an old friend. His name was Shirasaki Masato. Level 503. Class Dark Mage. Yeah, this guy was on another level. Nanu's, still as kind and sincere as ever, asked why he had come. He simply shrugged and replied, "Isn't it obvious?" She begged him not to do it, but she was already too late. A gigantic magic circle spread out beneath his feet. Even as the spell was taking shape, she continued pleading with him to stop, because if it failed to kill the boss, the situation would become far worse. Masato replied that worrying about details like that was exactly why she'd never reach the top. He intended to kill the monster by himself and claim all the high-tier loot. Then boom, black lightning erupted, engulfing the boss in a violent storm as blazing energy dragged it into the air. Nanu's immediately screamed for everyone to run, but the ground began breaking apart. The bridge started collapsing once again, and everything began to fall with it. Meanwhile, our beloved Haruto reappeared looking completely unharmed. At least he survived. He even managed to use his spiderweb skill to rescue the 4 unlucky people who were about to fall. But the moment he climbs back up, he finds himself staring straight into the boss's enormous jaws. He can't tell whether it's dead or if someone has already subdued it. That's when Shirasaki appears and remarks that a low-level hunter like him has accomplished quite a lot. The instant Haruto notices the emblem on his chest, he realizes this man belongs to Future Guild, one of the country's top 3 guilds. And Haruto has some nerve. He actually asks Shirasaki why he isn't helping evacuate the civilians. I honestly expected him to get shut down with a, "Who do you think you are?" But instead, Shirasaki calmly explains that the civilians have already been evacuated, and Keisha no longer looks remotely alive. He walks over to the giant web and seems genuinely impressed by the way it was used. Then, without warning, every strand of Haruto's web vanishes, and the bear boss is torn to pieces. Naturally, Haruto is stunned because Shirasaki did it with nothing more than a flick of his finger. But since Haruto was the one who immobilized, the monster experience starts pouring in, and he levels up repeatedly. On top of that, he receives the reward for defeating the bear. Hearing the constant level up notifications, Shirasaki asks if Haruto was the one who restrained the creature. He's genuinely surprised that Haruto managed to pull it off and admits he never expected it to be him. Apologizing for taking the finishing blow, he places one of the beast's claws on the ground and tells Haruto he can keep it, saying that stealing trophies isn't his style. Haruto is just about to say something when Nana suddenly appears, calling his name. Relieved, she's simply happy to see that he's still alive. Shirasaki notices they know each other and assumes Haruto works for the association. For some reason, he likes the kid less with every passing second. Nana asks whether anything happened, and Haruto casually shrugs. Not really. Then she asks him to help move the monster, leaving him confused. Wouldn't it be simpler to just kill it? She explains that once a boss reaches its second phase, it enters a permanent berserk state, and considering this monster's enormous size, it could even possess a third phase, which would result in destruction across the entire city. As Haruto silently processes everything while staring at the beast, it suddenly opens one eye and fixes its gaze on them. Nana looks terrified, while Shirasaki seems thrilled. He says this just means he'll earn an even greater reward. Strangely enough, Nana turns to Haruto and says she believes he'll survive. But Four Eyes immediately dismisses the idea, insisting there's no chance. That kid is dead. They should focus on the boss. The two of them charge forward as Nana shouts for Haruto to run. Haruto picks up a horn lying on the ground and says, I wasn't planning on this, but now I'll have to subjugate Keisha before those two do. Wait, what? This guy's confidence just skyrocketed out of nowhere. Satoru, always Haruto's biggest supporter, shows up again asking why he came back. Eris continues watching the webs as Haruto tells her he needs a favor. The situation has become critical. Keisha is on the verge of entering its third phase, and once that happens, it'll unleash an attack aimed at Eris that could wipe everything out. If that happens, countless people will die, and the legendary sword will be lost as well. That's why Haruto says he has to borrow the sword so he can defeat the boss before that happens. He promises to return it immediately after using it, or rather, after making a copy of it. No matter how many different ways he explains it, Eris simply says it's impossible. The truck can't be opened because it requires an enormous amount of mana, and they don't have enough at the moment. Morgrant immediately catches the important detail. She never refused. She only said it couldn't be done because they lacked mana. And if there's one thing Haruto can provide, it's mana. Without hesitation, he begins pouring his mana into Eris. Flustered, she blurts out, what is this feeling flowing through me? Easy there, don't make it sound weird. With that, the seal on the truck is effortlessly released. Haruto leaps inside, thanking them and promising he'll keep his word. Morgrant is understandably anxious. Either the kid steals the sword or he dies while holding it. Neither outcome is good. Eris, however, chooses to trust him. After all, he immobilized the bear instead of killing it. Morgrant argues that isn't nearly enough reason to place their faith in someone. At last, Haruto opens the truck and steps inside to claim the legendary sword. But of course, bam, one of the masked thieves appears behind him and drives a blade straight into his stomach. His two companions cry out from above, while the two level 100 enemies stand there watching like emotionless NPCs. Haruto collapses inside the truck like a discarded rag. The thief throws open the case, laughing as he declares that the legendary sword is finally his. But the moment Haruto begins losing consciousness, his spiderweb skill disappears. The truck breaks away from the bridge and falls into the river beneath. Is this the comeback? Ctrl+V activates, and Haruto suddenly reappears, right behind the thief. Without saying a word, he drives his blade into the man's shoulder. With full force, the thief crumples to the ground like a sack of trash, and at last the legendary sword is in Haruto's hands. The very first thing he does is exactly what you'd expect. He tries to hit Ctrl+C, but an error message appears. User level is too low to copy this item. I knew there had to be a catch. There was no way a level 30 hunter could duplicate a legendary sword. Before Haruto could do anything else, the man he had stabbed in the shoulder, yeah, that guy, gets back up and stabs him in return. Seriously? Does this guy have Ctrl+C and Ctrl+V too? He's regenerating like an absolute monster. What the hell? He reaches for the sword once more, and this time the thief is clearly trying to finish him off. Barely conscious and racked with pain, Haruto wonders whether his Ctrl+V was still active. Then a system notification appears. After interacting with the legendary sword, the absorption skill has been copied. It increases defense by 35%, grants lifesteal, and includes a berserker mode. Since Haruto's HP has fallen to 25%, berserker mode activates automatically. Meanwhile, high above on the bridge, Keisha begins charging another devastating attack. Shirasaki and Nanu struggle to hold it back. Then something suddenly shoots out from the center of the bridge, and before the monster can complete its attack, it's sliced clean in half. No way, that had to be our boy. The system immediately confirms it. Keisha defeated. Dungeon cleared. Sure, Haruto technically got his hands on that absurd legendary sword that grants over 200 bonus levels. He couldn't duplicate the weapon itself, but at least he managed to copy its skills. Back at the Hunter Association, everyone is talking about the battle at the bridge. Even though the entire incident was resolved in less than 2 hours, the media is still flooded with criticism. A man named Fuotoku, the president of Japan's Hunter Association, a level 570 priest, switches off the television. He announces that they'll launch an investigation into how Keisha was defeated. Nearby sits Takeuchi Gusho, covered in tattoos like Mike Tyson, level 701. He admits he's curious as well. At this point, it It feels like walking into a party where you don't know anyone and suddenly having to memorize everyone's name. Then another figure appears, Shinoda Mikoto, a level 610 healer from a different guild. Yep, now everyone's arriving. It looks like a turf war is about to begin over the rights to farm that dungeon. Technically, it belongs to the Great Sage Guild, the guild Haruto belongs to, along with Nanu's team. Speaking of which, Nanu's looks surprisingly sharp in that business suit. She's fully embracing the businesswoman look now. Then Mr. Tattoo, Mr. Mike Tyson himself strolls in with a smug grin, accusing Nanu's guild of failing to deal with the monster. Nanu's lets out a quiet sigh before slamming her hand onto the table. The entire room freezes. She didn't just hit the table, she shattered the whole thing. Shirasaki even throws up a barrier to avoid getting caught in the debris. Everyone stares at her, wondering if she's alright. Spoiler, she isn't. Calm and emotionally stable? Definitely not. Takeuchi is just about to lose his temper as well when someone suddenly calls his name. It's the association president. He steps in, tells everyone to settle down, and apologizes on Nanu's behalf. Takeuchi warns that if Nanu's keeps behaving like this, she'll eventually get herself killed. Honestly, it's a little confusing. He's over level 700, while she's only around level 200. So maybe raw levels aren't everything after all. Nanu's completely ignores the remark, stands up, and announces that she'll personally explain everything that happened on the bridge. Shirasaki was present during the battle as well, making him an official witness. He agrees, but says he can't verify much because he didn't see everything clearly, so he isn't certain who actually deserved credit for the kill. The association president tries to smooth things over, suggesting that Shirasaki's involvement likely helped minimize the damage. Shirasaki clicks his tongue in frustration. It's obvious he knows he's missing an important piece of the story, and it infuriates him. He vows to make Nanu's pay for humiliating him, and naturally, he also wants revenge on the person who stole his Keisha kill, our boy Haruto. No one really knows why he's so furious, but Nanu's declares that she'll personally investigate everything that happened inside the dungeon. She also intends to question every guild that was late sending reinforcements. With that, she turns around and walks away like she owns the room, announcing that the matter is over. Just then, Morgrant and Eris enter, saying they have additional information about what happened. Morgrant reports that during the chaos, the legendary sword was stolen. He requests everyone's full cooperation and hands over an official document from the International Hunter Association. Takeuchi, still suspicious, points out that he'd heard they were the ones who originally unsealed the sword. Eris confirms that's true, explaining that they received help from two hunters, Sana Haruto and Shinoda Satoru. The entire room erupts in surprise. Wait, our boy Haruto was involved with the legendary sword? Along with his partner, everyone starts scrambling to figure out who this Sana Haruto actually is. The association president says he knows Satoru, but has never even heard of Haruto. Meanwhile, Nanu's bites her tongue. She knows exactly who that idiot is. Standing beside her, Shirasaki smirks. He's already looking forward to getting his revenge. He asks Eris if she's referring to the hunter who used the Spider Queen's web ability. He says he watched the kid struggling throughout the battle, but he's convinced the boy belonged to the association. He also clearly remembers seeing Nanu's talking with him. Scene change. Elsewhere, someone is examining the legendary sword. They ask whether this is the Kalisha sword that was successfully stolen. A level 301 man named Kurosaki Takumi stares at the weapon in amazement. Besides granting 200 bonus levels simply by wielding it, so you're level 101 now, huh? Clever little rat. Kurosaki remarks that spending millions to trigger the dungeon collapse and force the boss to appear was worth it. Even the masked subordinate seems confused. They were responsible for the entire incident. Kurosaki then demands to know why all of his men died in the process. Without hesitation, the defeated subordinate drops to his knees, apologizing as he explains that they encountered a strange hunter, but that he's already dead. You can already tell this poor fool just revealed a crucial piece of information about the entire incident. There's no chance this guy is making it out alive. A suitcase packed with cash sits on the floor, and Kurosaki tells him to take it and enjoy the rest of his life however he likes. The man celebrates as if he'd just won the lottery. But I'd bet every dollar in that briefcase he's about to be killed. Kurosaki then casually asks whether he plans to sell information about the sword after leaving. Doesn't he? The man immediately jumps to his feet, insisting he'd never even think of doing something like that. As he nervously backs away, he starts ranting that the boss intended to eliminate him from the very beginning. At that exact moment, Kurosaki cuts him down, calmly stating that the fewer people who know about the sword, the better. He has no interest in unexpected visitors showing up at his door. The unfortunate man crashes into the wall, his body split clean in two. So yeah, anyone who bet against me owes me money. I told you. And with that single swing, the sword's durability drops from 10 all the way to 2. Seriously, that's only a few more swings before it's done. The scene changes, and the mysterious glass glass-like entity appears, whispering, "Remember, this was a gift." Haruto suddenly jolts awake in a hospital bed. The tattoo-like mark on his neck is burning again. He wonders whether that curse is acting up once more. Then Satoru, the absolute menace, rushes over and hugs him tightly, saying he really thought Haruto was dead. He immediately starts rambling about the massive attack that came from the ocean and destroyed the boss. Another injured man in the room asks whether they were at the bridge. Haruto already looks completely exhausted by the conversation. He gets out of bed, remarks that the guy is far too energetic for someone who nearly died, and heads off to get some rest. The patient lying nearby comments that, despite how he acts, the kid genuinely wanted to help. Turns out Satoru was the one who rescued Haruto before Nanu's and the others arrived. Then Haruto remembers something. His guild leader is Shinoda Makoto, and this kid is Shinoda Satoru. He immediately dismisses the thought. There's no way a weak hunter like this could be related to someone like that. Scene change to the Hunter Association headquarters. Nanu's asks whether Sana Haruto is truly dead. Morgrant confirms that he is, though he notices she doesn't seem particularly surprised. She simply replies that hunters dying is nothing unusual. The association president explains that several guilds have already been contacted to help recover the legendary sword. Ira adds that they'll need powerful hunters because she's already pinpointed the sword's current location. The president compliments Ira, saying he always knew her team was talented, but he never expected them to locate the sword so quickly. She explains that the weapon releases a unique energy signature, one she's capable of tracking. Nanu's adds that before the incident, no one had any reliable information about the sword. That's exactly why it's so easy to detect once someone steals it, and that's also why they allowed Haruto to use it. Ira quickly reminds everyone that the sword only had 10 durability points to begin with, and it's already been used. At this rate, it could break completely and disappear, taking with it the only clue she has to finding her mother, who vanished 15 years ago. Both of them are visibly surprised. Nanu's pulls out a file and remarks that Ira isn't the only one investigating people's pasts. She already knows Ira has been protecting the sword because it's the only lead she has to finding her missing mother. Suddenly, Ira rises from her seat. For a second, it looks like she's about to explode in anger. Instead, she quietly asks Nanu's for help, saying they can't allow the sword to disappear. The scene shifts to the hallway, where the businesslike Nanu's walks through the corridors, lost in thought. She's convinced those two are hiding something. And honestly, the story about Hunter Sana Haruto dying just doesn't add up. He never seemed like the kind of person who would simply give up. Just then, Shinoda Makoto appears and asks why she looks so troubled. She brushes the question aside and asks what he's doing there. He tells her it's time for her to return to the Sage Guild. I'm pretty sure this guy is the guild master, and he's almost certainly connected to Satoru somehow. After all, his name is Shinoda Makoto, while the kid's name is Shinoda Satoru. Nanu's replies that the number of dungeons keeps rising while hunters continue dying every day. Meanwhile, the other guilds are doing little to help, choosing instead to operate like corporations obsessed with profit and reputation. The bridge incident proved that none of them were prepared to act when it truly counted. That's exactly why she refuses to return. She says the association still needs her far too much. Then she casually adds, "Besides, there are still too many things I need to resolve here." Dad. Wait, what? So she's Satoru's sister, and this guy is their father? The whole family is involved now. At this point, all they're missing is a son-in-law, and I happen to know a certain guy who'd fit the role. Makoto simply laughs, telling her not to carry the entire world on her shoulders. Still, he suggests she stop by the hospital before returning. Speaking of hospitals, the scene shifts back to Haruto. Somehow, the guy has already reached level 76. Seriously, what is going on? He's become the undisputed king of leveling up. He's a little disappointed that he couldn't duplicate the legendary sword, but the abilities he copied more than made up for it, especially Berserker mode, which ended up saving his life. The sword didn't just grant him a temporary bonus of 200 levels, it also doubled all of his stats while Berserker mode was active. That's how he was able to cut down a level 400 monster, and defeating it earned him a fascinating new reward. Turns out Haruto absorbed Keisha's shockwave ability. The system then evolved it into a brand new skill called Resonant Frequency. As an added bonus, his spiderweb skill also advanced to level 2. Now, whenever he activates it, he can combine spiderweb, shockwave, and lifesteal into a single attack. So yeah, our guy is riding the elevator feeling unstoppable. Not only is he collecting powerful skills, they're naturally beginning to fuse together. Hold on, check this out. His level 76 plus another 200. Hey editor, throw the status window back on screen so everyone can see it. You guys seeing this? Hopefully the editor actually listened. That little goblin better have done what I asked. When I said Haruto copied the sword's effects, I thought he only copied its abilities. Turns out he duplicated the plus 200 level boost too. That's why he's confidently strolling through the hospital like a certified level 276 elite hunter. Then he hears a familiar voice echoing through the hospital lobby. It's Nanu's, scolding someone for not evacuating after she warned them the area was too dangerous. Our boy immediately hides. He had no idea she could be that terrifying. But wait, what's she even doing at the hospital? Turns out she's scolding Satoru. He even calls her big sis. He complains that she should have dealt with the monster properly. That's when Haruto finally connects the dots. Her full name is Nanu's Shinoda. Everyone's a Shinoda. Seriously, now it all makes sense. Why that powerful hunter was so desperate to keep Satoru alive, and why Nanu's has no problem giving the kid a hard time. Then she asks about Sana Haruto, wanting to know if he's there. Haruto immediately hides. After all, he pretended to be an association hunter when they first met. No one realizes he's actually just an unknown member of another guild who's supposedly weak. He tries to slip away quietly, only to crash into someone. So, you survived. Oh no, this Morgrant, calling him the sword thief, couldn't have happened at a worse moment. Haruto was trying to disappear without anyone noticing, but Morgrant grabs him by the collar and slams him against the wall. Easy there. Do you even see a sword on him? But Morgrant is already convinced. He's figured out why Haruto pretended to be part of the association. Haruto tries to explain, but Morgrant cuts him off, accusing him of working with the thieves. At that moment, Haruto realizes there's no reasoning with this guy. Morgrant summons a sword through a portal and prepares to strike. Just then, Eris rushes in, shouting for him to stop. She warns him not to unleash an attack like that inside the hospital. But Morgrant is furious. He says he won't be satisfied until this kid is dead. Easy there, Blondie. Haruto might need to hit Ctrl+C about now. Resonant frequency activates. Morgrant's sword shatters. In an instant, Nanu's and Satoru, who are only a short distance away, hear the commotion. Nanu's is left completely speechless. Wait, Haruto has Keisha's ability? Scene change. Now we're at what looks like a full-blown K-pop concert. A young woman is performing on stage, covered in sweat, her abs glistening under the lights, while a crowd of devoted fans cheers wildly. The next moment, she's climbing into her car. Her name is Erida Sarah, and she's a member of an idol group. Wait, is she a hunter too? They never even revealed her level. She waves goodbye to the other idols, starts up her Ferrari, and drives away. The girls immediately begin gossiping. Is she rich? Does she come from some famous family? And where is she going in a Ferrari? Sarah speeds down the road, takes a sharp corner, and nearly crashes into a Jeep. She slams on the brakes, barely managing to avoid the collision. Leaning out the window, she yells, "Watch where you're going." The driver calmly steps out. Oh no, it's Kurosaki Takumi, the man who stole the legendary sword. Sarah instantly goes silent. She obviously knows exactly who he is. Without a word, he casually drops the sword onto the hood of her Ferrari as though it were nothing. He asks how the concert went, then tells her they're heading to a dungeon now. If she cooperates, he says, things can go back to the way they used to be. Whatever history those two share, one thing is obvious. She's anything but happy to see him. The story cuts back to the place where Haruto blasted Morgrant away with resonant frequency. Unfortunately, the building is already completely deserted. They arrive too late. Nanu's wonders if that means they'll have to wait until the legendary sword is used again before they can track. The silence that follows answers the question. Yet then Haruto suddenly remembers something. The blood tower. It's the phrase the man who stabbed him muttered while Haruto was drifting in and out of consciousness. No one recognizes the name. It sounds like some kind of hidden underground organization. Morgrant starts getting anxious, pointing out that if they keep wasting time, the sword's remaining durability won't last much longer. Nanu's tells him not to worry. She knows someone who has information on all of these shady organizations. Scene change. A young girl is crawling across the ground. She received her ability from the mysterious being that appeared 15 years ago. At first, she believed she had simply awakened as an ordinary hunter. But later she realized her power was something far stranger. Ready for this? She's basically got Ctrl+Z. That's right, the power to undo mistakes. Now I'm just waiting to find out who ended up with Alt+F4. Although, I guess that one only works once. The first thing she did was buy broken secondhand items, restore them, and sell them for profit. Even though her power wasn't technically a healing ability, she earned a fortune simply by repairing damaged objects. Alright, now it makes sense. Her power isn't healing at all. It's more like rewinding something back to an earlier state. But now I'm curious. Does it have limits? How exactly does it work? The young girl worked tirelessly to earn money because both of her parents were hospitalized in critical condition. She tried using her ability to restore them to their healthy state, but the problem was that it required far more mana than she possessed. With her current reserves, the best she could manage was healing small injuries. That's why she became obsessed with increasing her mana, entering dungeons as a porter. Whenever someone got hurt, she even pretended to be a healer. The problem was that people who awakened with support sword-type talents instead of true hunter abilities had a much harder time surviving in dungeons. One day, she asks a hunter, basically a discount gojo, for a little mana, and he just sighs, asking why she's always begging for help. Of course, being a young woman alone inside dungeons meant plenty of shady guys tried to take advantage of her. What they didn't expect was for her to slice them clean in half. Then someone walks in and says, "Now that's interesting." It's none other than the snake himself, Kurosaki Takumi. And yes, this girl is none other than Erida Sarah, the idol we met earlier. He's casually tossing stacks of cash around her apartment like it's nothing while asking where all the money she earns keeps disappearing. After all, her place looks surprisingly run down. Meanwhile, she's surrounded by piles of champagne bottles while eating sushi she ordered through a delivery app. "Honestly, I'm broke too," Kurosaki teases her, saying it's pretty strange for a famous idol to survive on takeout 3 times a day. Then he answers his own question. She eats whatever she wants because whenever she gains weight, she simply presses Ctrl+Z and returns to perfect shape. He says she's always been like this. After all, the day someone was dying right in front of her, she stole their shield just so she could sell. He's convinced the two of them are exactly alike. Once again, Sarah looks completely unhappy to be dealing with him. She tells him she doesn't care what the job is, but wants to know why it has to involve a dungeon this time. Why can't he simply bring her the mana like he always does? That's when he reveals the legendary Kalisha sword, saying he needs her to use Ctrl+Z on it. Naturally, the mana required would be enormous. He tells her not to worry because this will be her final dungeon. Surprised, Sarah asks if he finally found the infinite mana generator artifact. He says he hasn't, but there's a good chance they'll find something similar. Then he asks her to accompany him one last time. Honestly, it sounds more like she's about to repair that sword and lose her life in the process. Scene change. Haruto and Nanu's arrive at a place known as the World of the Future, and Haruto finds it strange that these people seem to know more than even the top guilds. Nanu's explains that when it comes to understanding dungeons and finding a way to eliminate them, no one possesses better information than the man they're about to meet. Inside the meeting room sits Shirasaki Masato. That's right, the smug guy with the scar and glasses. And, as expected, he's talking about the rumored infinite mana generator. Apparently, in this world, an item capable of producing endless mana is treated like it's just another ordinary legend waiting to be found. Nanu's explains that, according to the information she's gathered, the artifact occasionally appears as a reward from the Snow Mountain Golem dungeon. The problem is that its boss is incredibly difficult to defeat. Shirasaki nods, saying he's well aware of that. That's exactly why they're assembling an entire team to investigate the dungeon. During that investigation, they uncovered information about a group known as the Blood Tower. He had never heard of them before, but they're apparently targeting the very same Snow Mountain Golem dungeon. On the surface, they look like an ordinary exploration team, but they're far more dangerous than they appear. They murder, assassinate, and rob other dungeon parties. To Haruto, an infinite mana generator doesn't seem all that useful. Unlike literally everyone else in the room, what he can't understand is how any of this connects to the legendary sword. Why would Blood Tower be after the Golem dungeon? Maybe they're planning to use the sword to defeat the boss, but the sword's durability is already running low. Are they really willing to risk such a priceless weapon for a single mana-related artifact? Nanu's asks whether Blood Tower has already located the dungeon boss. Otherwise, why would they suddenly start moving? Eris immediately shakes her head. No chance. That dungeon was discovered 15 years ago, and even now, no one has ever found the artifact. Haruto is about to ask how she knows all of that, but she cuts him off, telling him to relax because she'll explain everything. She's been researching the dungeon for years. The Snow Mountain Golem dungeon is infamous for its difficulty. Most hunters refuse to set foot inside it. Shirasaki adds that places like that are perfect hunting grounds for assassin organizations, and he's convinced there's another secret hidden within that dungeon. Haruto asks when Blood Tower plans to make its move. Turns out they just finished recruiting, so it won't be long now. Just as Haruto suspected, this operation has been in the works for a long time. Nanu says that if that's true, then they need to act immediately. She turns to Shirasaki and asks whether he already has a strike team prepared. Patting his chest confidently, he says he doesn't. Nanu presses him, reminding him that the future guild always keeps an emergency response squad on standby for unexpected dungeon incidents. After all, that's how he showed up at the bridge that day. Looking a little embarrassed, Shirasaki admits she certainly has a lot of information, but not all of it is correct. The truth is, he doesn't have a team capable of entering a place like that on such short notice. This isn't just another dungeon. It's the infamous Snow Mountain crawling with golems. To be fair, the golems are only around level 40, which doesn't sound all that intimidating. Even so, Shirasaki soon heads out with an entire squad. And guess who's with them? Boy Haruto. The team advances, crushing golem after golem, only 4. The monsters to regenerate immediately immediately and launch a counterattack. Shirasaki sighs in frustration, muttering that this is exactly why he hates dungeons like this. Then, out of nowhere, a guy who looks like discount Harry Potter pulls out a magic wand, gathers all the golems together, slices through them with a spell, and blows them to pieces. Countless red crystal fragments begin falling from the air. Those are the golem's cores. He shouts for everyone to destroy the cores, explaining that's the only way to kill a golem for good. Oscar, whoever he is, starts pounding the ground in excitement, praising the mage like he's some kind of hero. Meanwhile, Haruto is just standing there holding his little sword, contributing absolutely nothing. Earlier, Eris had explained that once they entered the dungeon, their objective was to eliminate as many golems as possible. That was the condition required to summon the mini-boss. She also revealed that this type of dungeon is known as an induction dungeon. Haruto, and honestly the rest of us too, has absolutely no idea what that means. Kurosaki, of all people, jumps in with an explanation, saying he can't stand these kinds of dungeons. Basically, it's a dungeon hidden inside another dungeon. In a normal expedition, you can ignore weaker areas and head straight for the boss to save time. But in an induction dungeon, every section has to be cleared before the next one unlocks. If you fail at any point, you lose access to everything beyond it. Eris adds that 15 years ago, someone made a mistake that caused a rupture inside this dungeon. Ever since then, nobody has known what truly lies beyond or whether the rumored reward even still appears. That's why they not only have to defeat the golems, they have to do it quickly. Their rival team is also searching for the key, and they need to reach it first. Back in the fight, Haruto is feeling much more confident now that he has the sword's abilities. He hits Ctrl plus V on his spiderweb skill, and boom, one of the golems is completely torn apart. The others stare at him in disbelief. Wait, did that guy just use a boss class skill? Even Eris is busy freezing the golems with ice magic while the others finish them off. Another golem charges straight toward the unfortunate side characters. Yeah, they're finished. But then she appears. She doesn't even attack. She just arrives and strikes a dramatic pose. Then she raises her hand and activates Keisha's shockwave. Wait a second, she can use that skill too? I thought Haruto was supposed to be the special one. She checks on everyone, asking if they're alright. The group nods, but then she notices someone desperately trying to hide behind the others. She calls them out, and of course it's Satoru again. Here comes the little agent of chaos. He quickly defends himself, insisting that he's officially a member of Haruto's party now, so naturally he's supposed to be here. Hold on, since when did Haruto have his own party? Flashback to the hospital. When Haruto mentioned he was heading into the dungeon, Satoru threw an absolute fit, begging to join him for one more adventure with his senpai. He refused to let Haruto go alone. The moment Haruto finally agreed, the kid lit up like the main character of a shoujo manga. But Haruto made him promise that if he wanted to come, he'd have to join as an official member of his party. Back in the dungeon, Nanus has no idea what Haruto is really thinking. Satoru tells her she should show senpai more respect. Looking her straight in the eyes, he declares that he personally witnessed Haruto cutting Keisha in half. Nanus begins to wonder if he might actually be telling the truth. Ever since they last met, Haruto really does seem much stronger. And now even his spiderweb ability explodes with the same force as Keisha's attacks. Maybe the story really is true, but how is that even possible? Meanwhile, elsewhere inside the dungeon, the unlikely duo, the K-pop idol Erida Sera and the infamous sword thief Kurosaki Takumi, are standing on a mountain ledge, quietly watching the other teams struggle below. The rest of their group is nearby, disguising themselves as another raid party while waiting for the perfect opportunity to strike. The only problem is that the main expedition includes 2 high-level hunters, making a surprise attack far from easy. As long as they keep their distance, though, they might still be able to carry out their plan. Kurosaki reminds everyone that efficiency is the guiding principle of their guild. He then turns to Erida and asks whether she's collected enough mana. It turns out the mana storage devices he gave her are unbelievably expensive to charge. Filling just one requires defeating more than 100 monsters. And that dungeon rupture at the bridge? He caused it himself by overloading a huge number of those devices. Erida is only worried about one thing: how many more of them they'll need to restore the sword. Kurosaki answers that they'll need at least 20. She sighs and asks if they're really just going to sit there hiding until then. He calmly confirms that is exactly the plan, especially because the next section of the dungeon is sealed behind a barrier that can only be cut open with the Kalisha dragon sword. Erita narrows her eyes. And where did you learn that? Kurosaki tells her to stop asking questions. He's not about to reveal his sources. She lets out a sigh, saying his plans are always bizarre. But after receiving a single cold glare from Kurosaki, she immediately apologizes, insisting she was only joking. As long as their contract remains in effect, she doesn't care what he's planning. Her true objective is the infinite mana artifact, so she can finally restore both her mother and her father. Back on the battlefield, Haruto points out that they've already defeated more than 200 golems, yet it still doesn't feel like they've made much progress. Another core falls from a defeated golem and Haruto picks it up. This one feels different and strangely suddenly slips from his hand before falling to the ground all by itself. At that moment, Shirasaki steps forward and announces that the process has begun. They've completed the first subjugation phase, and now the second area is opening. Time to confront the Snow Mountain's mini-boss, a shape-shifting golem. Level 150. A massive golem suddenly comes charging in and sends half the squad flying with a single slap like they owed it money. Shirasaki immediately orders everyone to fall back. The monster shatters from the impact, but come on, it's called the shape-shifting golem. You already know it isn't staying down. Sure enough, only seconds later, it rebuilds itself and charges back into the fight. Shirasaki smashes it apart again, but every time the monster breaks, its core shoots away, hides somewhere else, and reconstructs an entirely new body around itself. Haruto suddenly gets an idea. He'll use his spiderweb ability to stop the core from escaping. He activates Ctrl+V, firing the web with perfect accuracy and trapping the golem halfway through its regeneration. No luck. The monster effortlessly tears itself free and completes its reconstruction. The web accomplished nothing. They need a way to destroy the golem before all of its pieces can reassemble. Someone suddenly shouts for Haruto to move aside. As he turns around, Nanus unleashes a massive blue explosion straight into the golem's chest. Once again, though, the monster barely reacts. Physical attacks. Magic? Couldn't care less. Nanus says they'll have to coordinate all of their attacks, and Shirasaki replies with a sarcastic, "Yeah, no kidding." Haruto is finally beginning to understand why so many hunters avoid this dungeon. Eris had warned him that this mini-boss was the reason the dungeon was so infamous, and because it's an induction dungeon, there's no way to skip it. To make matters worse, the core keeps absorbing the remains of every defeated golem, giving it what feels like limitless health. Shirasaki explains that they aren't just fighting a single boss, they're battling every golem they've already defeated. The sheer amount of time and effort required is exactly why most hunters refuse to come here. But this time, they don't have a choice. If they want to reach the final boss, they have to defeat this one first. Nanus says they only have two options: destroy the core or erase everything it has absorbed so far. Back in the battle, the mini-boss is engulfed in blue flames, and judging by the sweat running down Nanus's face, things are going very badly. The monster begins rebuilding itself right behind her. She notices it at the last possible second, and fires another hellfire spell straight into it. Haruto wants to help, but if he starts using the sword's abilities, Eris, who knows all about them, will immediately realize something is wrong. He's being extremely cautious. No one can ever learn about his Ctrl+C and Ctrl+V abilities. Smart decision. Then he remembers the item he obtained from the bear during the bridge incident. Its first ability temporarily immobilizes a target. The second continuously inflicts damage over time. He immediately uses Ctrl+C and Ctrl+V on the item. Better yet, he layers those effects onto his spiderweb. Now the web doesn't just unleash a shockwave, it also pins enemies down with the crushing grip of the bear's strength. On top of that, the bear's second ability steadily drains both HP and mana. Haruto charges into battle, finally ready to make a real difference. Meanwhile, Nanus is standing alone in a sea of flames. Morgrant watches the battle, wondering if she's seriously trying to melt every single fragment of the golem. And once again, the monster begins reconstructing itself behind her. She unleashes yet another enormous wave of flames. Seriously, where is she getting all this mana? But the golem marches straight through the fire and draws back a devastating punch. It looks like Nanus has finally reached her limit. But when the heroine is in danger, it's time for the hero to step in. Haruto rushes forward and wraps the monster in layers of webbing, sealing it inside a massive cocoon. Even Nanus and Shirasaki are left speechless. He immobilized a mini-boss as if it were nothing. Nanus quickly snaps back to reality and shouts at him to quit showing off an attack already. That's when Haruto reveals he's figured out how to stop the core from escaping. Shirasaki decides not to question it. He simply mutters, "Fine, but you'll owe me for ordering me around later." Then he unleashes another massive flame spell, and the golem's body begins to crumble. At that exact moment, the core finally reveals itself. Haruto activates Ctrl+V, spiderweb time, but this time, enhanced with the bear's abilities, the web doesn't just restrain the core. It transforms into a gigantic snapping maw filled with razor-sharp teeth that clamps down and locks the core firmly in place. Shirasaki recognizes the technique immediately. It's the bear's seemingly useless skill, but somehow Haruto transformed it into something unbelievably powerful. Nanus begins connecting the dots. He had the Spider Queen's abilities, and he was with that mysterious man back then. He also fought during the battle against Keisha at the bridge. Nanus begins to wonder, could Haruto be the one with the mysterious Control plus C and Control plus V ability, but instead of dwelling on it, she's simply relieved. Somehow, he always appears exactly when they need him. Even Eris praises his quick thinking, and the entire squad is fired up again. They finally have a chance to destroy the core. The only person who isn't pleased by this turn of events is Kurosaki Takumi. Even Erida is confused, wondering how Haruto managed to stop the core from moving. The problem is that they need the battle to continue so they can keep gathering mana. There, Kurosaki immediately announces that it's time to move on to the next phase of the plan and orders everyone into position. The masked group quietly slips in behind the expedition without anyone noticing. The thing, Erida asks whether he really intends to get personally involved. He replies that Haruto's interference has complicated things by preventing the core from escaping. Meanwhile, Erida remains standing beside countless mana storage devices, while Satoru secretly watches everything from nearby. He notices that the group's apparent leader has stepped away, but he isn't sure what he should do next. At the same time, he can't understand why that girl is there or why she's surrounded by so much stored mana. Now it finally makes sense why that guy was invisible. Before entering the dungeon, Haruto had given Satoru an item that granted camouflage. His instructions were simple: avoid fighting whenever possible, and when the right opportunity appeared, turn invisible and secretly observe the enemy group that Haruto suspected was hiding nearby. Back in the dungeon, Satoru feels completely at ease, especially knowing Haruto is fighting alongside Shirasaki and Nanu's. Honestly, when I first saw the scene, I thought he was about to say the two guild leaders would handle everything. Instead, the kid has so much faith in Haruto that he sees all three of them as equals. As far as he's concerned, the guild leaders don't mind letting Haruto land the finishing blow now that the enemy has finally been pinned down. He quietly gives the signal, and then, without hesitation, throws the immobilized core into the middle of the attack where it explodes. With that, the shape-shifting golem is finally destroyed. Haruto is immediately showered with level-up notifications and, of course, obtains the most important reward of all, the sealed heart key, which unlocks access to the next hidden section of the dungeon. Nanu's can't hide her excitement. Every step brings her closer to finding her mother. Haruto, meanwhile, is thrilled over getting a tiny key. Calm down, man. Nanu's reminds him that the real challenge is only beginning. Meanwhile, Haruto is far more interested in checking his status window. He gained another 9 levels, and every one of his stats increased. If he activates the legendary sword's power, he'd be roughly as strong as a level 205 hunter. Before long, he'd be powerful enough to clear dungeons entirely on his own. He's celebrating like an idiot while rummaging through his bag, wondering if he's finally lost it. From his perspective, it's ridiculous that everyone is celebrating so much over defeating what he considers an average boss. Nanu's immediately points out the irony. They're making fun of him for celebrating, even though he was the one most desperate to defeat that monster. Haruto starts saying it was only a matter of time before they finished it off when, all of a sudden, something appears behind him. Not just behind him, enormous pillars rise from the ground all around the entire group. They quickly realize they're special devices normally planted by hunters to eliminate monsters. Only this time, someone has turned them against the hunters themselves. At that moment, Shirasaki shouts for everyone to get down. The entire area erupts in a massive explosion. Seriously, it looks like a miniature nuclear blast. What the hell was that? Most of the hunters are instantly blown off their feet and left sprawled across the ground. Poor guys. Someone really needs a Control plus Z ability right about now. Walking through the aftermath surrounded by fallen hunters, Kurosaki calmly remarks that setting up all of those explosives cost an absolute fortune. As cruel as it was, he had to admit it really was the most efficient strategy. Then, all of a sudden, someone shouted that they'd found him. From the spiderweb flying straight toward them, you already know exactly who it is. Haruto charges into the battle without a second thought. In the next instant, he recognizes that cursed Kalisha sword, but as always, he ends up taking a direct hit to the chest. Then again, with his Control plus C ability available, why not push his luck? The full force strike to the stomach sends him crashing into a wall. Nanu struggles back to her feet and calls out for Sana. Haruto, after noticing he isn't far away, she unleashes another devastating hellfire attack. The surrounding area is completely engulfed, and this time she's the one coughing up blood. Good grief, did she really burn through that much mana? Where's our K-pop idol when you need a Control plus Z? Sure, she's technically the enemy, but with an ability like that, we all know she'll probably end up joining the good guys eventually. Kurosaki is about to activate a recovery ability to help her, but Eris immediately tells him to stop. Once again, the enemy is relying on that technique, the one that prevents people from absorbing or using mana without suffering severe consequences. A dark rift suddenly opens and Kurosaki retreats away from Haruto. At that moment, Shirasaki recognizes it as a forbidden ability, an invisibility technique considered so dangerous that the Hunter Association has completely banned its use. The masked thug glances down and notices Haruto's sword lying on the ground. The instant he picks it up, ownership of the weapon transfers to him. Thinking about it, that's exactly how this world's rules work. Whoever picks up an item becomes its new owner. Everything is designed to function like a video game. Believing he'd already won, the man celebrates for a moment before grabbing Haruto, declaring that he can't allow such an unpredictable variable to stay alive. Even while being choked, Haruto calmly agrees, saying he was thinking exactly the same thing. He activates his spiderweb ability once again, remarking that he loves it when the villain is this overconfident. At the same time, he triggers the bear's restraining skill, trapping the man inside a cocoon lined with razor-sharp teeth that crushes and stuns him. The hidden assassins watching from the shadows are left wondering how they're supposed to break. But Haruto keeps walking forward, warning the thief that stealing the sword was a mistake he'll regret. Haruto then releases the web to deliver his finishing blow, but his opponent has already disappeared. Kurosaki suddenly appears behind him, admitting that Haruto almost caught him off guard. Without the shadow user nearby, even a seemingly harmless ability like that could have finished him. At that moment, he finally understands the frustration high-level hunters must have felt when they couldn't figure out what was happening. Haruto tells him to relax and asks whether he doesn't even know his own nickname. The mana supplier, right? It was Haruto's first time sending mana over such a long distance, but apparently it worked perfectly. In that instant, the masked man feels an overwhelming surge of pressure. Kurosaki admits he has no idea what just happened, but suddenly his mana reserves are overflowing, giving him the power to take revenge on that bastard. A gigantic magic circle appears in the sky, and Kurosaki instantly realizes that if the spell lands, there's no way he'll survive. Without hesitation, he orders the ability to be deactivated. Then the bastard activates Ctrl+Z, causing all of the stored mana to disperse at once. With that single move, the Snow Mountain Golem dungeon was completely reset. Seriously, how does that even work? Does time actually rewind? Don't think it's anything like that. Instead, the scattered golem fragments begin rebuilding themselves, and naturally, every golem in the dungeon is revived from the beginning. At that exact moment, the first golem charges straight at Kurosaki with a devastating punch. The problem is that he's still affected by the gas, preventing him from absorbing mana. The only mana available to him is what Haruto had already supplied, and on top of that, he has to keep the protective barriers active until everyone regains consciousness. Then, when he looks back, he sees Nanu's once again taking on the boss. Confused, he learns from her that he apparently doesn't even know Haruto's nickname, the mana supplier. What a sneaky guy. Eris, standing beside him, comments that Haruto's ability appears to let him distribute virtually limitless mana to his allies. But Kurosaki finds that hard to believe. Normally, mana distribution on that scale should only be possible for a priest, and someone as powerful as Nanu's would require an absurd amount of mana, far beyond what an ordinary hunter could ever provide. More importantly, it isn't just her. Everyone on the battlefield is still fighting at full strength, which makes no sense unless Haruto truly possesses the ability to generate seemingly infinite mana. He never imagined such a unique power could exist. If that's really the case, having Haruto join their guild would be far more valuable than endlessly chasing after the legendary infinite mana artifact. It makes sense to a point, but it's still strange because no one usually craves mana unless they're close to running out. That's the only time it truly becomes invaluable. Nanu's then explains everything, revealing that the Blood Tower organization was responsible for everything that happened at the bridge. Morgrant agrees, but points out that the dungeon has now been reset, meaning the same thing could happen all over again. Eris disagrees, explaining that resetting a dungeon isn't nearly that simple. Otherwise, the enemy wouldn't have waited until such a critical moment to use it. At the very least, she's convinced this reset has dramatically increased the chances of the hidden dungeon appearing. Nanu's, however, feels that something isn't right. There were noticeably fewer golems after the reset. Shirasaki quickly realizes that the ones Nanu's incinerated with her blue flames never regenerated. Now both of them begin worrying about Haruto, afraid he may have been killed. At last, people are finally starting to care about our boy. Meanwhile, he's badly injured, furious with himself for allowing Kurosaki to escape. The moment the dungeon reset, Haruto charged straight at him, but Kurosaki blocked the attack with ease, mocking him by saying that a low-level hunter like him never stood a chance. Haruto simply grabbed his arm and activated his spiderweb, binding it tightly in place. Furious, Kurosaki struggles to break free, shouting that Haruto is nothing more than a filthy insect. Then, without warning, a massive explosion erupts beneath them. Kurosaki unleashed the power of the legendary sword. A moment later, Haruto found himself lying in the snow, and when he looked around, everyone had vanished. Meanwhile, back at the Hunter Association, two officials remark that there shouldn't be much to worry about since Master Shirasaki is leading the expedition. expedition. The man with the goatee replies that the real issue is figuring out how to deal with the mysterious Blood Tower organization because they have almost no information on them. The man in the black suit slams a tablet onto the table, announcing that the Midas Guild has uncovered new intelligence. Takeuchi explains that Blood Tower is acting so confidently because they're backed by an international guild known as Starfield. Both men are stunned. The goateed official asks why a massive international guild would bother causing trouble in a relatively small country like Japan. The bald man responds that this is exactly what worries him. Whatever is hidden inside that dungeon must be something incredibly important. 15 years ago, when the disaster occurred, this very dungeon ruptured, releasing countless golems into the city. Back then, one of the world's greatest priests, Nishihara Tomoka, managed to seal the dungeon once again. I even bothered writing down her name, only to learn in the very next panel that she's supposedly dead. What a waste. Takeuchi continues, explaining that whatever artifact is sealed inside that dungeon is so extraordinary that it's attracting powerful forces from overseas. He also reveals that Nishihara's daughter is caught up in all of this. And yes, that's our heiress. At least, she firmly believes her mother is still alive. The man with the sideburns asks whether Eris is pursuing the legendary sword or simply searching for the truth behind her mother's disappearance. The bald official explains that Nishihara's death was never officially confirmed, leaving everyone puzzled. If all those people were declared dead, then why is her case still considered uncertain? He goes on to reveal that 5 years ago, a hunter emerged from this dungeon claiming to have personally seen Nishihara alive inside, within her own territory. The problem is that Starfield hasn't shared anything beyond that. All they know is that countless secrets remain hidden inside the dungeon. Just as he's about to continue, the meeting room door suddenly swings open as someone rushes in with urgent news. The association president immediately orders the messenger to explain what was important enough to interrupt the meeting. Activating the display, the man reports that a dungeon collapse has begun. Meanwhile, someone hiding behind a car desperately sends out a request for help. Countless golems have suddenly appeared throughout the city and are roaming the streets. Everyone in the meeting room reacts in shock. Takeuchi immediately realizes they're the very same monsters that were supposed to remain trapped inside the Snow Mountain dungeon. Back inside the dungeon, Kurosaki is still badly wounded. Erida asks whether everything will be alright, admitting it's the first time she's ever seen him so seriously injured. He simply tells her to see for herself. At last, they've discovered the hidden heart of the mountain. Beyond the bridge lies the secret entrance. Erida's eyes light up. She's finally about to obtain the giant golem's heart. The group advances across the bridge, completely unaware that Satoru is nearby, invisible, silently watching everything unfold. He never expected these people would actually uncover a place like this. One of the masked men reaches out and feels a mysterious barrier, immediately informing Kurosaki that something is blocking the path. Kurosaki extends his own hand, thinking those Starfield people really did possess incredible intelligence. This is undoubtedly the location that the legendary priest Nishihara Tomoka sealed away 15 years ago. He orders everyone to prepare to break through the barrier, warning them not to let their guard down. In response, Erida uses every one of her mana capsules to restore the legendary sword to its previous state. Suddenly, Kurosaki turns around and announces that there's a rat lurking nearby. Pointing the legendary sword toward the bridge, he comments that whoever it is has guts. His men immediately activate their stealth abilities. Satoru instantly realizes they're in serious trouble, and Kurosaki swings his sword directly at him. The scene then shifts to another part of the dungeon. A rabbit is peacefully hopping around when, out of nowhere, a tiny golem appears and taps it. The little golem takes the rabbit's crystal and begins absorbing it. Hold on, our boy somehow ended up with a miniature pet golem. Where did that even come from? It almost looks like he's feeding the creature monster crystals so it can keep multiplying without limit. Then, after touching the little golem's core, Haruto naturally copies and acquires its abilities. He gains the power to create a level 1 golem, summon level 1 golem armor, and even share the creature's vision and hearing so he can monitor everything it sees. The only drawback is that he can't permanently absorb those abilities with a simple Ctrl+C and Ctrl+V. Fortunately, possessing the core itself is enough. Better still, he can duplicate the core, which would allow him to clear an entire dungeon without relying on anyone else. If a level 1 golem is already this useful, just imagine how powerful it would become at level 10. Then out of nowhere, the little golem suddenly darts to the side. When Haruto looks up, he sees Satoru sprinting toward him in complete panic. The kid immediately throws his arms around Haruto and clings to him, saying he thought he was going to die. So much for a dramatic reunion. The very next second, the two of them are already running together as Satoru explains that he discovered the hidden dungeon. It turns out one of the future guild members was caught in Kurosaki's attack. In other words, Kurosaki, the tattooed man, had come up with the same idea as Haruto, leaving someone behind to secretly observe the enemy while remaining invisible. Satoru also mentions that there was a girl with them. For some reason, she was carrying a huge number of mana storage devices and had started activating some kind of process. Satoru wanted to stop her, just as Haruto had instructed, but he got so frightened that he ran away instead. Haruto tells him it's fine. The information he gathered is already more than enough. Then Satoru says he noticed something that looked strangely familiar, but before he can explain what it was, he asks why there's a tiny golem following them around. Haruto casually tells him not to worry because it's simply one of his minions. The kid just stares at it, thinking it's unbelievably cute. In the next scene, they're already standing on the bridge outside the dungeon, searching for Kurosaki. Haruto tells Satoru to bring Nanu's and the others while he waits there. Satoru looks nervous, but Haruto reassures him, explaining that his little golem will be watching everything nearby. Satoru reluctantly agrees, and Haruto even hands him the golem's core. That way, Satoru can have a minion of his own, which may look weak but actually packs a surprisingly powerful punch. The kid is absolutely overjoyed to receive such a valuable item. Of course, Haruto isn't giving away the original. He simply keeps all the duplicate cores he created. Haruto is starting to grow fond of the little troublemaker. Even though the kid comes from an incredibly wealthy family, he's surprisingly humble. After that, Haruto activates another duplicated golem core. When the ability activates, and I forgot to mention this earlier, it states that the summoned golem can take on any shape the user imagines. So this time, Haruto transforms it into a tiny bird, and through their shared senses, he can effortlessly observe everything happening around them. Haruto, watching through his tiny scout, spots the girl holding the sword and realizes she's the one Satoru was talking about. The real question is what's happening to that sword, and why there's such an enormous amount of mana surrounding it. Erida activates her Control plus Z-like ability, and a tremendous surge of energy begins flowing into the blade. Just like that, its durability jumps from 6% all the way back to 100%. Seriously, that Control plus Z ability is unbelievably overpowered. I thought it would only repair the damage a little, but it completely restored the sword as if it were brand new. The effort leaves Erita completely exhausted, and Kurosaki thanks her for restoring the sword to perfect condition. You'd better be careful, girl. Now that you've used up your value, this guy looks ready to chop your head off. Watching everything unfold, Haruto realizes that an ability capable of restoring a weapon like that shouldn't even exist. Maybe she's like him, someone whose power isn't an ordinary hunter skill, but something closer to a gift or perhaps a curse. And naturally, the sneaky bastard immediately starts plotting how to copy her ability. Although taking her out probably won't be easy. Then another thought crosses his mind. Could he really copy another person's unique power? Before testing it on anyone, though, he decides he'd much rather recruit that girl as an ally. Kurosaki smiles in satisfaction, declaring that the time has finally come to destroy the barrier sealing this place. Without hesitation, he drives the Kalisha sword into the seal, and countless chains begin snapping apart. A gigantic magic circle appears as a powerful gust of wind erupts, while Haruto observes everything from a distance, realizing this is the very barrier that had kept everyone out until now. Kurosaki celebrates, saying that without the information provided by Starfield, and without the key, they never could have reached this place. According to him, only this sword is capable of breaking the barrier Nishihara created. Erida asks him why that is. He explains that the sword's original owner was Nishihara's husband, a legendary swordsman named Frederick Hugh. He vanished inside this dungeon 15 years ago. Afterward, Nishihara sealed the entire area, leaving only this sword with the power to break the barrier so that one day he could return. There are so many hidden details that Haruto never knew. The name Frederick even sounds familiar to him. The man was revered as the sword god of his era, and Haruto realizes Eris's family is far more important than he ever imagined. Kurosaki says he's done talking and that it's finally time to finish this. Planting the sword firmly into the seal, he activates its power. A massive level boost erupts, and the entire area is engulfed in brilliant golden light that blinds everyone while vaporizing the nearby golems. Now it all makes sense why they needed to restore the sword's durability first. There was no way the remaining 6% would have been enough. Finally, the barrier begins to collapse. Kurosaki lets out a triumphant laugh, saying he never expected the barrier to be nothing more than a hologram. Now all that's left is to enter the sealed area and finally obtain the giant golem's heart after all these years. The only problem is that, thanks to Haruto, he can't decide whether to wait for his allies or go inside alone. Meanwhile, far away in southern Italy, inside an S-rank dungeon, the sight is horrifying. A hunter has been sliced to pieces across the ground. Barely clinging to life, he asks why killing him alone wasn't enough. Why slaughter everyone else as well? The man wearing white gloves calmly replies that if only one person died, he'd be branded a murderer. But if everyone dies, dies, people simply call it a dungeon accident. With a snap of his fingers, the wounded hunter disintegrates into nothing. Wait, another bizarre ability? This mysterious man possesses a Control plus A-like power. Whenever someone dies, their abilities are transferred to the nearest compatible person. Honestly, calling it Control plus A actually fits pretty well. Then he swings his blade toward another hunter's neck. And if you look closely, he has a tiny companion just like Haruto's little golem. Wait, did he just use Control plus A, selecting everyone at once, and then press Control plus X to cut out every chosen target? A massive spatial rift opens, swallowing everyone in the area as if they were simply erased from existence. A moment later, he senses someone approaching. When he turns around, an elf, at least I think it's an elf woman, stands before him. She compliments him, saying his Control plus A ability keeps evolving. He replies that he despises this power because the only way it grows is by forcing him to kill people and steal their cursed abilities. So that's how it works. He's collecting everyone else's shortcut abilities. Haruto had better be careful. If word spreads that someone possesses Control plus C and Control plus V, this guy is definitely gonna hunt him down. The elf is wearing a skirt, but honestly, I don't even trust the authors anymore. They've tricked me way too many times. She explains that the only ability that can be copied without killing its owner is the legendary Control plus C. The man replies that they've been searching for its user for a very long time, but they still have no idea where that person is. Maybe Control plus C doesn't even exist, though I'm starting to think its owner might actually be a man. Nice try, author, you almost fooled me. He then explains that someone with Control plus C existed in his original dimension, so that person must exist in this world as well. One of the others jokes about where Control plus F is, while another wonders what ever happened to Control plus Z. Seriously, there are way too many of these shortcut abilities. Just then, they learn that the barrier created by Nishihara has finally been broken. Control plus Z is valuable, but obtaining the giant golem's heart is even more important since it's essential for bringing those cursed abilities to their full potential. Back inside the dungeon, Shirasaki finally arrives. It seems everyone rushed over, only to discover the area completely deserted. Luckily, Haruto returned and gathered everyone together. Smart move. Let's be honest, if he'd confronted Kurosaki alone again, he'd have been in serious trouble. With only a single path ahead, Haruto concludes that the only option is to push forward. Nanu still has no idea who's really behind all of this, while Eris says that, based on everything she knows, Starfield itself might be involved. Nanus is stunned, asking why an international guild like Starfield would interfere in something like this. The world's #1 international guild shouldn't be working together with an organization like Blood Tower. Eris quietly says she believes her mother is the reason all of this is happening. Listening to everything they've uncovered, Haruto begins connecting the pieces. Ever since the bridge incident, every event seems to have led to this exact moment. Looking at Eris, he starts wondering if the true objective was never the key at all, but her. Could that really be the case? Seriously, where did that conclusion even come from? I'm not seeing the connection yet either. Shirasaki, at least, stays focused on what actually matters and orders everyone to keep moving. They have to catch up with the enemy before it's too late. Instead of wasting time making guesses, they should capture Kurosaki and force him to reveal the truth. Meanwhile, Satoru races ahead alongside his tiny golem, and Shirasaki asks what that little creature is. When Satoru proudly explains that Haruto gave it to him as his own minion, the man looks genuinely puzzled. Nanus then asks Haruto why he would hand over something so valuable. Haruto casually replies that expensive things are safest in the hands of someone who's rich. Even if Satoru loses it, he'll just get it back anyway. Nanus can't help smiling, just like she always does whenever Haruto says something unexpected. Then, all of a sudden, Satoru steps on something. A huge magic circle instantly appears beneath him and Shirasaki. Before anyone can react, Nanu steps into another shadowed area and triggers the exact same trap. A second magic circle activates beneath the two of them as, well, they collapse onto the ground, and when they get back up, they immediately begin calling out for Shirasaki and Satoru. Strangely, there's no sign of anyone else. It looks like they've been transported into a forest. Haruto looks around beside him, only to find a massive dragon standing right in front of him. The monster lunges forward, ready to sink its fangs into him, and he has no idea where it came from. Fortunately, Nanus reacts in an instant, unleashing a slash that cleanly severs the creature's head. The enormous head crashes onto the ground, and Haruto can't understand why a dinosaur-like monster is roaming a mountain dungeon. At that moment, Eris warns everyone that this place appears to be an entirely different world. She believes they've entered a multidimensional dungeon, and she's right. They're standing in the middle of an enormous prehistoric forest. Nanus says that shouldn't be possible. As far as she knows, every multidimensional dungeon disappeared 15 years ago. Eris nods, explaining that it was her mother who sealed all of those dungeons back then. Those magic magic circles beneath their feet must have been portals linking this world to another dimension. It's the same method monsters use whenever they invade the human world. Nanus finally understands why this dungeon had to be sealed. Meanwhile, Haruto realizes that Satoru and Shirasaki must have been transported to different parts of this dimension as well. Most likely, the only way back is to clear this dungeon before returning to the giant golem's domain. Haruto draws his sword and declares that if there's no other choice, they'll have to move fast. Unfortunately, more than a dozen dinosaur-like monsters are already charging straight toward them. Only now do I realize that Morgrant got dragged into this place too. The guy finally decides to show up. Meanwhile, the entire city is engulfed in flames. The golems that were supposed to remain inside the dungeon are now rampaging across Japan. The hunters on the front lines are completely exhausted after fighting without a break. And, of course, that self-repairing boss is still standing. No matter what they do, they can't bring it down. They call for a large-scale attack, but the mage replies that he's completely out of mana and needs more time. The exhausted hunters continue, holding back the weaker golems until one of them suddenly rushes over and smacks the bald hunter. At that moment, a flash of light appears, and a blonde young man casually walks onto the battlefield with a backpack slung over his shoulder. The mage is relieved to see him and quickly realizes that the newcomer is a foreign hunter. The young man explains that he's only in Japan on business, but he couldn't ignore people in danger. Everyone thanks him, impressed that he can speak Japanese so fluently. In the middle of the battle, the bald hunter sighs, saying he misses Haruto and his ability to supply unlimited mana. The blonde hunter overhears that and immediately asks if they're talking about someone capable of producing infinite mana, but the bald man shrugs it off, saying it's nothing special, just some useless guy whose only purpose is supplying mana. Now the blonde hunter is genuinely interested and asks where he can find him. The bald hunter admits he has no idea. Every now and then, they simply happen to meet inside a dungeon. From that moment on, the blonde hunter becomes determined to uncover the identity of this mysterious infinite mana supplier. Funny how everyone used to call him useless, yet now everyone's searching for him. Just then, someone behind the blonde hunter announces that he's finally here. It's Taikuchi, the mysterious doctor we all know so well. After looking up at the golems descending from above, they immediately recognize them as the very same monsters from the Snow Mountain dungeon. Shinoda remarks that these creatures are the perfect opponents for Taikuchi, who immediately heads forward after informing the president that he'll take care of everything himself. Armor activated. Come on, that's totally a Fantastic Four reference, isn't it? Now it's golem against golem as the massive blue monster charges straight at Taikuchi. One punch later, the creature explodes into what feels like hundreds of thousands of fragments. A shower of sparkling magic fills the entire battlefield. For a second, I honestly thought some magical waifu was about to appear, but nope, it's just the goateed doctor showing off another one of his flashy abilities. The giant golem immediately rushes Taikuchi and throws a devastating punch, but there's no way he's losing a contest of raw strength. Taikuchi answers with a punch of his own, and the instant their fists collide, the monster's entire arm shatters into pieces, revealing its core. He grabs it and crushes it effortlessly. For him, this was nothing more than a warm-up. The boss goes down in moments, while our protagonists end up struggling against similar enemies for what feels like 30 chapters. With that, the boss is defeated and the dungeon is officially cleared. Surprisingly, the invasion of the city ends up being resolved far more easily than expected. Meanwhile, someone activates a Control plus F-like ability on Taikuchi, one that can locate other people possessing shortcut powers. And guess who used it? Our sleepy blonde hunter, who quietly jots everything down in his notebook, satisfied that he gathered some valuable information. Now he just needs to determine whether Control plus Z is still active inside the dungeon. At the very least, it seems its owner didn't die in there, except at this exact moment, she has a massive hole straight through her stomach. At least she has Control plus Z, so maybe she can simply restore herself. Assuming she still has enough mana left to use it, let's rewind about 20 minutes earlier, when a horde of zombies suddenly appeared. Kurisaki's group had also been transported into another dimension and immediately found themselves surrounded by the undead. As he readies his sword, Kurosaki says the only problem is that they have no idea what awaits them beyond this point, but dealing with zombies like these should be laughably easy. A single slash, and the entire area would be wiped clean. Then the dungeon would be cleared, allowing them to move on toward the giant golem's heart. Soon afterward, the entire team arrives in front of an enormous door, and one of the masked members excitedly announces that they've finally found the hidden boss. Without wasting a second, Kurosaki pulls out the key and drives it into the lock. The massive door slowly opens, and the group steps inside. They're immediately greeted by countless statues, each one holding a different weapon. For some reason, this place feels strangely familiar. Everyone cautiously walks forward, dragging their swords across the stone statues while searching for the boss. Meanwhile, Erida suddenly feels an overwhelming pressure crushing her body. Oddly enough, no one else seems to notice anything unusual. One of the masked members is about to comment that they're only here for the reward when something begins approaching from behind them. The poor guy is crushed as easily as an insect, and it's immediately obvious that one of the statues has come to life. The entire group freezes in shock before finally realizing what's happening. It isn't just one statue, the boss was hidden among them, and every single statue in the chamber is an enemy. Erita begins acting strangely, breaking down in tears even though she has witnessed countless deaths before. Kurosaki can't understand her reaction. He knows she's seen scenes like this many times, so why is she falling apart now? He orders her to pull herself together and use her ability before everyone dies for good. He immediately rushes toward one of the fallen bodies and tears away one of its mana storage devices. The problem is that every one of them is completely empty. In fact, all of the mana appears to be flowing somewhere else. Out of the corner of her eye, Erida watches more living statues effortlessly slaughter the masked fighters. Kurosaki shouts for everyone to stop panicking and fight back instead of standing there getting killed. He strikes one of the giant statues across the ribs, staggering it, then orders the others to unleash their strongest abilities. One of the masked fighters suddenly realizes that none of their skills, not even their invisibility techniques, are functioning anymore. And then things get even worse. Another masked fighter is instantly killed, crushed and sliced apart in a single attack. When Kurosaki turns his head, he sees the last surviving masked fighter is grabbed with one hand and crushed to death as well. In just a few moments, a mountain of corpses begins piling up before Kurosaki's eyes. He's furious, not because his people are dying, but because their combat efficiency has completely collapsed. Now he's the one standing alone against three gigantic stone warriors directly in front of him. He commands the Kalisha sword to activate its level-up ability, but the system informs him that he doesn't have enough mana to unleash its power. He's completely bewildered. At level 300, he should have far more than enough mana, but he doesn't have time to figure it out. It looks like he's about to become the next victim. Meanwhile, acting purely on instinct, Erida rushes toward the mana source. She finally realizes why no one in this place has any mana left. Everything is being drained away. The instant she places her hand on it, the giant golem's heart appears before her. The problem is that it should be generating mana, not absorbing. Suddenly, the enormous heart begins to crack. Erida immediately tries to run, but it fires a powerful beam straight through her torso. She is blasted backward, tumbling down the stairs like a ragdoll. She crashes across the floor like a discarded piece of trash, stopping right in front of one of the living statues. These statues don't hesitate for even a second. They immediately swing their blades at her. Then, from the shadows, someone suddenly emerges. It's Kurosaki. He leaps in front of her and blocks the attack, making the villain look more like a hero for a moment. He quickly pulls out a high-grade healing potion, tosses it to Erida, grabs her, and takes off running like an action movie protagonist. The problem is that the instant she touched the giant golem's heart, the battle against the final boss was triggered, and the entrance they used to get inside begins sealing shut. Kurosaki tries activating Shadow Step, but he no longer has enough mana to use it. With no other choice left, he does the only thing he can. He runs. But when he sees the closing doorway, he realizes there isn't enough time for both of them to escape. Honestly, this villain is saving more people than the protagonist right now. Kurosaki grabs Erida and throws her through the closing exit. The stunned girl scrambles to her feet, demanding to know why he did it. Kurosaki tells her that as long as she's alive, she can simply use Control plus Z and restore everything. Erida breaks down in tears, calling him an idiot. She's only a hunter, and she doesn't have enough mana to pull off something like that. Restoring everything is impossible. So he wasn't acting out of pure heroism. He believed she would eventually rewind everything and save him as well. Still, compared to the usual villains who would simply abandon everyone and run for the exit, this guy is surprisingly reasonable. Meanwhile, Erida silently curses herself for ever agreeing to come to this place, when suddenly she feels a warm energy flowing into her body. It's Haruto, pouring an enormous amount of mana directly into her. As soon as she opens her eyes, she recognizes him. She's seen him do the exact same thing for Nanu's before. Haruto calmly tells her that with enough mana, she should be able to restore her own body. That completely catches her off guard. How could this stranger possibly know about her ability? Meanwhile, everyone else remains stranded outside the sealed entrance, frustrated that they made it all this way only to be locked out. Erida explains that as long as even a single person remains alive inside, the door cannot be opened from the outside. Shirasaki is, unsurprisingly, far from pleased, grumbling that the entire trip was a complete waste of time. He then glances toward Erita and asks who she is. Someone explains that she's one of Blood Tower's healers and survived thanks to the mana Nanu Nanu's provided. Shirasaki barely pays attention. What he really wants to know is whether they'll remain trapped outside and fail to clear the dungeon. Eris confirms that's entirely possible. Only then does Shirasaki smack his forehead, finally realizing why so many people vanished while attempting to conquer this place. Nearby, Haruto wonders whether he should mention the fact that he already made a duplicate of the key. Of course he did. Did anyone really think Mr. Control plus C would leave such an important item without copying it? Now he's awkwardly trying to figure out how to pretend he simply found it lying on the ground. Yeah, that excuse would be a little too convenient. With her hand resting against the entrance, Eris realizes this is the very seal her mother created, and she's convinced something extremely important lies beyond it. Suddenly, her hand passes straight through the barrier, and the enormous door begins shining with brilliant light. The entrance slowly opens, leaving everyone staring in complete disbelief. Eris explains that the cloak she's wearing was made by her mother, so it may be resonating with the sealed door. Haruto had already begun suspecting that Eris herself was the true key to all of this. Suddenly, a sinister aura spreads through the entire area. Masato wonders what kind of overwhelming pressure they're feeling, while Nanu's immediately warns everyone to stay back. Something inside is draining everyone's mana. Haruto asks Erita if this is what she was talking about earlier, and she nods. Instead of generating mana, the giant golem's heart is consuming it. Now Haruto is left trying to figure out how they're supposed to deal with this disaster. In desperation, Erita tells everyone they need to run. Hunters stand no chance against the monsters that are about to appear. At that exact moment, golems materialize directly in front of Satoru. By now, Nanu's already knows exactly what Haruto is capable of, so she asks him to do the one thing he does best. Haruto calmly tells everyone not to panic, promising that he'll replenish everyone's mana. Control plus C, Control plus V, Control plus C, Control plus V, Control plus C, Control plus V, again and again. Look at all those windows popping up. Haruto spreads his arms, flooding the entire area with mana. Erita is completely stunned, unable to understand what she's witnessing. Even though the giant golem's heart is continuously absorbing mana, Haruto is generating it even faster, causing it to overflow throughout the battlefield. Erita realizes that if Haruto can supply her with just a little more mana, she might finally be able to restore everything. With everyone's mana completely restored, they now have more than enough power to eliminate the golems. A single swing is all it takes to reduce them to rubble. The rough-looking delinquent kid raises his staff and unleashes. Lightning crashes down, but moments later an even larger barrage of stone projectiles comes hurtling toward them. For someone with effectively unlimited mana, though, it's hardly a challenge. Haruto unleashes a massive chain lightning spell that tears through the battlefield, annihilating everything in its path. Erita glances over and sees Kurisaki's pitiful body collapsed on the ground with his sword lying beside him. He's missing an arm, barely breathing, and she has no idea what she should do. Just as she considers saving him, Haruto walks over. He stares at Kurosaki with an icy expression, then picks up the legendary sword. Naturally, he duplicates it, finally obtaining the very item he'd been after all along. By now, Haruto is convinced that Erita possesses a unique ability much like his own, one he absolutely wants to copy. But first, he decides to test another theory. Haruto leans over Kurosaki's face and attempts to use his Control plus C ability to copy Shadow Step. The system immediately rejects the attempt, explaining that the target's level is higher than his. On top of that, the target harbors intense hostility toward him. Under those conditions, only two methods remain for acquiring the ability. He can either kill the target and steal the skill, or forcibly extract it once the target's HP falls below 15%. The drawback is that doing so permanently deprives the original owner of that ability. So Haruto is left with only two choices: steal the power or kill its owner. Honestly, it's just as ruthless as the method used by that mysterious white-gloved man. Haruto is convinced Kurosaki's HP has to be below 15% after taking such a brutal beating. Forced extraction may sound cruel, but he knows this ability will be incredibly useful in the future. Just then, Kurosaki regains consciousness and orders Erita to heal him, but only enough to keep him alive until they extract the information they need. Under no circumstances can he be allowed to escape. Erita keeps a close watch on Haruto as well. She walks over to Kurosaki, activates Control plus Z, and his body immediately begins restoring itself. Haruto watches in fascination. To him, this ability seems even more impressive than the resurrection clone he created for himself. Although I'm not completely convinced, Haruto can literally die from a sword strike and come back, while everyone else stays dead unless Erita intervenes. The moment Kurosaki regains consciousness, he smirks and says he knew the two of them would survive. Haruto simply gives him a cold, emotionless glance before turning away. The villain is already completely surrounded, and Nanu's warns him that if he even thinks about escaping, she'll cut him him in half. Kurosaki calmly replies that they can make threats after they actually survive, because the dungeon is about to begin its next phase. At the center of the chamber, the giant golem's heart suddenly begins glowing, and an instant later it shifts to one side. A massive laser fires straight toward Nanu's, sweeping across the entire room. Satoru, watch out! Someone shouts as the boy breaks into a frantic sprint, but even more laser beams begin firing, with one headed directly toward him. Haruto yells his name, but it's already too late, or so it seems. Suddenly, the tiny golem companion rushes in to protect him. As usual, let's jump ahead about 30 minutes to see what happened in the area where Shirasaki and Satoru were sent. Like a tattooed version of Harry Potter, Shirasaki was hurling lightning spells from his staff, vaporizing every monster in sight. Defeated creatures rained from the sky, providing the perfect feast for Satoru's tiny golem. Shirasaki even encouraged it to keep eating, figuring the monster cores were useless otherwise. So the little golem happily devoured them all and leveled up to level 2. Satoru was grinning from ear to ear when the creature suddenly activated a new skill and began wrapping itself around his body. Back in the present, Satoru is now wearing a massive suit of golem armor. Everyone is shocked that he managed to evolve his little companion so quickly. Meanwhile, Shirasaki realizes this armor resembles the same ability Taikuchi used earlier. Suddenly, another barrage of attacks comes flying toward them, and one beam nearly pierces Satoru's stomach. It misses his head by the smallest margin. Eris immediately tells everyone to stay focused because these attacks are made of incredibly dense mana. Even magical barriers can't stop them completely. Without hesitation, Nanu steps forward and says that's exactly why it's easier to block them with physical force instead. Watch this, she declares, and immediately charges forward, knocking the attack off course with a direct strike. Haruto quickly realizes she's right. The mana is so densely compressed that its trajectory can actually be altered. The problem is they can't afford to remain on the defensive. They have to keep advancing instead of simply blocking attacks. After all, because Haruto was supplying everyone with unlimited mana, the giant golem's heart was also draining an endless amount of mana directly from him. He had to find a way to get close to it or everyone would eventually die. Then our genius protagonist activates his shadow step, combining it with his spiderweb skill while repeatedly using Ctrl+C and Ctrl+V. He sinks into the ground through the shadows created by the spiderweb effect, disappearing completely from everyone's sight. Even Morgrant is left wondering where the kid went. A moment later, Haruto suddenly appears behind the giant golem's heart, or rather, inside a shadow cast by one of its own attacks, and immediately slashes at it, activating the Kalisha sword's resonance ability. Unfortunately, that turns out to be a terrible idea. The impact is reflected straight back at him, and he coughs up what feels like liters of blood. Even so, Haruto gets back on his feet with the confidence of a true protagonist, declaring there's no way he'll lose to something powered by his own mana. He activates another Ctrl+V, this time combining it with spiderweb once again. In an instant, the giant golem's heart becomes completely entangled. For the first time, its relentless barrage of attacks comes to a stop for a few precious seconds. Everyone immediately begins celebrating, and Haruto allows himself a small smile. But don't celebrate too soon. This battle is far from over. The moment Haruto realizes a single attack isn't enough, he casts another spiderweb. As soon as the giant golem's heart is trapped, he activates the Kalisha sword's resonance from within the web. Finally, something begins to crack. The protective core shatters, Haruto levels up, and the giant golem's heart itself starts breaking apart. A brilliant light suddenly bursts from its center. The system announces, the giant golem's heart has been destroyed. Dungeon cleared. Immediately afterward, another flood of level-up notifications fills the screen. And the best reward of all? The heart of the giant golem. This item can generate an unlimited supply of mana while also absorbing nearby mana up to a certain capacity. Of course, Haruto is probably the only person alive who looks at such an absurd treasure and thinks, it's not that useful. Even so, he duplicates it anyway and stores a copy safely inside his inventory. As an added bonus, his Ctrl+C ability evolves as well. From now on, it automatically copies any object that is eligible for duplication. Wait, seriously? So if something copyable is nearby, it basically gets duplicated automatically? That's unbelievably broken. Out of nowhere, Satoru comes running over, proudly showing off and asking Haruto for a hug. Before he can reach him, however, someone else calls out, it's Shirasaki. Shirasaki says it's a miracle the kid actually managed to obtain the giant golem's heart. Satoru can't even tell whether he's being praised or made fun of. Nanus tells Satoru to stop behaving like a child. Shirasaki adds that once they return, he wants to have a private conversation with Haruto. Haruto casually replies that if Shirasaki plans to buy anything from him, it definitely won't come cheap. Nanus cuts the conversation short, saying they can discuss business after returning to the Hunter Association. Soon afterward, the group gathers around Erida and their captured prisoner. Satoru walks over to Eris and hands her the sword, saying that her mother's treasured weapon has finally returned to its rightful owner. Eris gratefully accepts it, smiling as she says everything turned out just as promised. Morgrant, however, lets nothing slide. He asks Haruto whether he used Blood Tower's shadow step technique. Shirasaki backs him up, saying he clearly saw Haruto cover an impossible distance in an instant. Haruto desperately tries to explain it away, saying he was simply fired up. He claims that after his spiderweb ability evolved, it allowed him to latch onto distant objects and pull himself across the battlefield at incredible speed. Needless to say, nobody believes that excuse. Fortunately, Nanu steps in to rescue him, reminding everyone that prying into another hunter's abilities is rude. She orders the group to move out since they still need to interrogate the two captured enemies. Meanwhile, Kurosaki turns to Erida and reminds her that she still owes him for saving her life. He tells her it's time to reset the dungeon. Erida asks if he's lost his mind, but Kurosaki quickly reminds her that she has very few choices. Thanks to the contract bracelet binding them together, she's incapable of betraying her partner. In other words, as long as that bracelet remains on her wrist, she's completely under his control. Poor Erida breaks down crying. Even with Control plus Z, her emotions are a complete mess, and now she's trapped with the very man ordering her to reset the dungeon because he supposedly saved her life, especially now that the surrounding area is overflowing with more than enough mana to make it possible. Suddenly, all of that mana begins flowing directly into Erida. Nanus immediately senses that something is terribly wrong. Erida drops to one knee and places her hand against the ground. Before the dungeon can reset, Haruto shouts for everyone to get out because everything is about to start over. Erida knows exactly what that means. Resetting the dungeon now would be absolute madness. They could all end up thrown into another dimension again. Without wasting a second, Haruto slips into the shadows and races straight toward her. Activating his spiderweb ability, he demands to know why she's doing this. Erida says nothing. A single tear rolls down her face as she slams her hand against the ground, and the reset begins. Or at least it almost does, because Haruto reaches her just in time and grabs hold of her. In the next instant, the entire area erupts in a massive explosion. Chunks of stone are launched everywhere as everyone instinctively activates their defensive barriers. Suddenly, they're swallowed by a strange blue void, completely disoriented. What is happening now? It almost feels like they've been dropped into some bizarre new world. Before they can make sense of it, a gigantic portal opens, and they suddenly find themselves in an unfamiliar city. It seems everyone has been expelled from the dungeon, and Satoru immediately starts shouting Haruto's name. When everyone looks around, they realize they're suddenly floating high above Tokyo. What on earth just happened? Erida admits she has absolutely no idea either. Just then, someone calls out for Nanus. She turns around and sees her father asking what happened to her. Shirasaki is just as confused, wondering why Shinobu is there. Honestly, I'm asking the same thing. I still want to know what actually happened inside that dungeon. More importantly, why were only these people sent here? Where did everyone else go? Shirasaki clenches his teeth in frustration, while Nanus can only think about Haruto. They've only been separated for a few seconds, and she's already worried about him. Meanwhile, back inside the dungeon, Kurosaki is furious that the reset failed. Erida explains that Haruto interrupted the ritual halfway through, causing the reset spell to be cancelled. Kurosaki simply shrugs, saying that's fine since everyone else seems to have been expelled anyway. Their restraints disappeared along with the others, so as long as they obtain the giant golem's heart, everything will work out perfectly. Of course, Haruto has no intention of letting that happen. He activates Spiderweb, but then realizes something. Weren't his Control plus C and Control plus V abilities supposed to detect the copied item? Oh, no, he mutters. Erida quietly explains that it seems she didn't just reset the dungeon. She accidentally reset him as well. Haruto can't believe it. His memories are still intact and his body is still here, but his level has been reset all the way back to 1. She reverted him to the exact condition he was in on the very first day he awakened. Worst of all, even his Control plus C and Control plus V abilities have returned to level 1. Then a system notification appears, stating that previously copied objects remain available. But the real problem is this. While Haruto is stuck at level 1, Kurosaki walks over and drives his sword straight through Haruto's chest. Laughing triumphantly, Kurosaki mocks him, saying the look on his face proves his level was reset. To him, this is the perfect chance to kill Haruto once and for all. As the blade pierces him, Haruto suddenly comes up with one desperate, brilliantly reckless idea. After all, he always keeps a backup copy of himself for resurrection, and that copy was created before the reset ever happened. Maybe, just maybe, that's the loophole he's counting on. But just as Kurosaki is about to finish him off, Morgrant steps in and shields Haruto. Kurosaki sneers, saying Haruto should run while he still can. Otherwise, an International Hunter Association member is about to die. Haruto demands to know why Morgrant would risk himself like that, but the only answer he gets is to stop asking questions and run. Morgrant insists he'll hold Kurosaki off, so Haruto needs to escape immediately. Haruto refuses, saying there's no way he can leave him behind. Annoyed by the exchange, Kurosaki laughs, calling them both idiots. The difference in strength between them is overwhelming, yet they're acting as if either of them actually has a chance to escape. Meanwhile, Morgrant desperately struggles to hold his ground, taking wounds from every direction. The poor man is completely outmatched. His sword finally shatters, and he's thrown across the ground like a ragdoll. Once again, the protagonist's allies are getting completely overwhelmed. Kurosaki raises his blade for the finishing strike, remarking that killing an International Hunter Association member will be the perfect bonus. Morgrant realizes there's no way to avoid the attack, but at the last second, Haruto throws himself in front of him, using his own body as a shield and taking the slash across his back. Morgrant angrily demands to know what Haruto is doing, insisting that Kurosaki is his opponent and that he doesn't need anyone's help. He tells Haruto to move aside. Instead, Haruto stands his ground, and before anyone can react, Kurosaki cuts the boy clean in half. Morgrant is left speechless as Haruto's body collapses before his eyes. The very next moment, Kurosaki reaches out and seizes the giant golem's heart. He then turns toward Erida, declaring that from now on, he's the only person she can rely on. He warns her not to look so upset. After all, Haruto only died because she reset him to his original state. Maybe death was a mercy. It must be miserable to lose everything you've built and return to square one. Then, without warning, a sword slices straight through Kurosaki's arm, and someone dryly remarks that maybe he should be grateful Haruto died after all. His severed arm bursts apart like a champagne cork, and Kurosaki collapses to the ground screaming in pain. Then, out of nowhere, Haruto reappears, radiating an overwhelming aura. Everyone is frozen in disbelief. The kid had literally been cut in half just moments ago. So how is he standing there as if nothing happened? Kurosaki turns around and realizes Haruto's original body has completely disappeared. He tightens his grip on his sword, desperately trying to figure out what kind of ability could make someone effectively immortal. But Haruto has already coated the battlefield with spiderweb and channels lightning through it, pinning Kurosaki in place. Even while restrained, Kurosaki laughs, insisting it's pointless because he can simply escape with Shadow Step. However, the moment he activates it, the system announces that the ability has already been transferred and is no longer available to him. In a panic, he screams at Erida, ordering her to reset everything again. For the first time, she stands her ground and quietly says she doesn't want to. Furious, Kurosaki struggles against the web, shouting whether she's forgotten that they're bound by contract. As if to remind her, the bracelet suddenly begins electrocuting her arm. At that moment, Haruto finally understands why Erida has always obeyed him without question. It's all because of that cursed bracelet. Without hesitation, Haruto slides forward on one knee, grabs Erida's hand, and activates one of his abilities. Using Ctrl+C, he embeds the Kalisha sword's resonance frequency directly into the bracelet. It's destroyed, Haruto announces. Was it really that simple? That was way easier than I expected. I thought he'd pull off some galaxy brain strategy, like flooding her with billions of mana points so she could rewind time to before she ever wore the bracelet. Instead, he just hit it with the resonance effect and shattered it. Kurosaki stares in confusion, wondering why he suddenly can't use any of his abilities. Haruto calmly looks at him and says, "Why don't you see for yourself?" In the next instant, Kurosaki tries to use Shadow Step only to realize it no longer works. Haruto tells him the reason is simple. He already stole the ability. Then Haruto drives his attack straight through the middle of Kurosaki's chest. Kurosaki collapses onto the ground, his battered body finally giving out. Haruto walks over to the giant golem's heart and picks it up. He can't believe people were willing to sacrifice so much just to keep resetting dungeons. How many lives have been ruined because of this obsession? Without another word, he activates the resonance ability. In an instant, the giant golem's heart is completely destroyed before everyone's eyes. The good news is that Haruto is now the only person left with an unlimited source of mana. The bad news? Being the only person with infinite mana means the entire world will eventually come after him. Just then, the system announces that because he destroyed the reward of an advanced dungeon, he has earned a unique bonus. A small crystal sphere materializes in his hand as the system declares that he has cleared the secret dungeon of the giant golem's heart. Wait, now I'm confused. Didn't he already clear the dungeon? Or was there an even more hidden dungeon inside the secret one? Let's keep going. At that moment, the massive doors finally begin opening for the rest of the bewildered hunters, who are still trying to understand what just happened. One of the hunters notices Haruto and immediately calls out to him. They ask what happened to the rest of the team. Haruto calmly explains explains that they were transported somewhere else, so there's no reason to panic. Looking at the devastated battlefield, and Kurosaki still lying there like a wrapped-up corpse, they can't help wondering if Haruto accomplished all of this by himself. Haruto simply tells them they'll discuss everything later. Right now, everyone needs to return safely. The following day, Haruto sits through a meeting at the Hunter Association, visibly on edge. For a moment, the entire room falls silent. Shinoda finally breaks the silence, saying it's unbelievable that the dungeon turned out to be multidimensional. That's an extremely serious discovery. Taikuchi, however, is relieved that they finally understand why those mysterious dungeon resets happen. The chairman reminds everyone that the most important consequence is that Nisihara's seal has now been broken. On top of that, this multidimensional dungeon appears to be connected to the catastrophe Morgrant experienced 15 years ago. The room immediately erupts in concern, with several people insisting it's still far too early to draw any conclusions. The discussion quickly descends into chaos until Nanu's finally loses her patience. As always, she slams her hand on the table, stands up, and announces she's leaving. She has more important things to do, starting with investigating Blood Tower. Taikuchi tells her to calm down, pointing out that Blood Tower wasn't the only problem. The dungeon collapse in the middle of the city was a disaster in its own right. Shirasaki steps in and tells everyone to settle down. Ironically, the rough-looking delinquent is the calmest person in the room. Taikuchi then rises from his seat and says he isn't interested in talking about his own accomplishments. Instead, he walks over to Haruto and asks who he really is, the young hunter who became the key to clearing the secret dungeon. Haruto humbly replies that he's just an ordinary hunter. Of course, Taikuchi isn't satisfied with that answer and asks whether Haruto even knows who he's speaking to. Haruto responds with a hint of sarcasm, saying he's still trying to understand what this meeting is even supposed to be about. After risking his life to clear a multidimensional secret dungeon, instead of receiving thanks, he's the one being interrogated. Come on, Taikuchi, are you seriously trying to start a fight? Everyone in the room is immediately startled and tells the two of them to calm down. The association president then calls Haruto over and warns him that if he keeps this up, he'll lose every reward he earned from the mission. That instantly gets Haruto's attention. Like a true businessman, he calms down immediately and leaves the room, muttering that the rewards are the only reason he's letting it go. Even so, Haruto can't stop thinking about Taikuchi's stone armor ability. He already wants to copy it. Later, inside the president's office, Haruto is questioned privately. He explains that he used to be an ordinary hunter in the Great Sage Guild, but he's now working as a freelance hunter. The president praises him, saying that surviving alone as an independent hunter is difficult enough, and what he accomplished inside the secret dungeon was nothing short of extraordinary. Haruto thanks him as usual, but the president isn't finished yet. He wants to know what Haruto plans to do from now on. Eris explains that she'll be returning to her homeland to report everything that happened, while Morgrant says he'll remain in Japan for a little longer. He also announces that he intends to resign from the International Hunter Association. For some reason, the scene suddenly shifts to Haruto's apartment. Unfortunately for him, his living room has turned into a gathering spot. There isn't even enough space on the couch for everyone anymore. Naturally, Haruto asks what everyone is doing there. Morgrant casually explains that since he left the International Hunter Association, he needs somewhere to stay. Eris asks why he resigned, but he simply replies that he can't talk about it yet. Meanwhile, Satoru cheerfully announces that he just wants to stay with Haruto. No excuses, he's already decided. Just then, Nanus arrives carrying a message from Erita. At that moment, Haruto asks where. Haruto asks what happened to the other two. Nanus explains that Kurosaki is currently hospitalized because Erita refused to use Control plus Z on him. Once he regains consciousness, he'll be transferred to prison for interrogation. As for Erita, she's also being questioned, although questioned might be the wrong word, since she's exercising her right to remain silent through the entire interrogation. Nanus, however, is already convinced there's something going on between those two troublemakers. What, are you jealous? Then she reveals that Erita is actually a member of the famous idol group AF. Satoru immediately recognizes the name and says he knew he'd seen her somewhere before. Haruto then explains the truth about the cursed bracelet, that it forced Erita to remain by Kurosaki's side. He believes she won't keep acting that way anymore, and as soon as he gets the opportunity, he'll visit her at the association. Nanus then asks why Shirasaki came over. He awkwardly admits there's only one reason. Morgrant immediately warns him that if this is about the giant golem's heart, he's out of luck because Haruto destroyed it inside the dungeon. Everyone is stunned, and Shirasaki instantly grabs Haruto by the shoulders, demanding to know why he would destroy such an unbelievably valuable treasure. Then the king of sneaky tricks finally confesses the truth. Embarrassed, Haruto admits that the one he destroyed inside the dungeon was only a duplicate. Morgrant insists that's impossible. If the real heart hadn't been destroyed, destroyed, the dungeon shouldn't have been cleared. At that very moment, Shirasaki casually offers 20 billion yen right there in the middle of the room. That's how much he's willing to pay for the item. Haruto is completely stunned, but Nanus tells him that's actually a low offer. According to her, the giant golem's heart is worth far more than that. Another bidder was even willing to pay 8 billion before the price skyrocketed. Satoru then pulls up an online auction for legendary artifacts, pointing out that similar items start bidding at 10 billion. Shirasaki declares he didn't come all this way for nothing and reminds Haruto that he promised to sell it to him. Without hesitation, he raises his offer to 20 billion, insisting that he'll pay whatever it takes to obtain it. Later that night, Haruto lies in bed in complete disbelief that someone actually offered 20 billion for a single item. And the craziest part? That wasn't even the original, it was just a duplicated copy. Imagine if he started selling multiple versions to different countries. For anyone wondering how Haruto can now duplicate items and hand them to other people, here's the explanation. Earlier, the system unlocked a function that lets him set the duration of duplicated objects. That's why his copied items no longer disappear immediately and can now be given to others. Haruto is still celebrating his unbelievable payday when he suddenly sits upright, remembering that he completely forgot to check his unique reward. The reward turns out to be a small crystal sphere, a sealed artifact that can only be activated by pouring mana into it. For Haruto, supplying mana is the easiest part. As soon as enough mana flows into the sphere, a glowing golden triangle materializes inside it. It is revealed to be a dimensional fragment. Collecting 5 of these allows the user to open a gateway to any dimension they choose. The fragments naturally resonate with one another, making it easier to locate the remaining pieces. However, the highest ranked dimension that can be accessed depends on the level of the completed key. Haruto is completely puzzled, but one thing is clear, he still needs 4 more fragments before he'll be able to open any dimensional gate. Of course, the first thing he tries is using Ctrl+C on it. Unfortunately, the system immediately informs him that this item cannot be copied or duplicated. Haruto instantly starts complaining, saying this useless restriction always appears whenever he actually needs his ability. Just then, someone knocks on the door, and Haruto tells them to come in. It's none other than Morgrant, who says there's something he wants to confirm. The two silently lock eyes for a brief moment before Morgrant slowly reaches for his sword. Haruto is about to ask what he's doing, but before he can finish speaking, Morgrant steps forward and swings, slashing straight across Haruto's chest. Yeah, it's pretty obvious he's trying to find out whether Haruto really possesses some kind of resurrection or time reversal ability. But before we learn the answer, the story suddenly jumps back 15 years to the day of the Morgrant disaster in Europe. A massive dragon dominates the battlefield. Oddly enough, it almost looks like it's smiling despite casually holding an entire bus in one of its claws. Several hunters shout to the mage that the dragon has surrounded itself with flames, so an ice spell would be the best counterattack. Like an acrobat, the mage leaps from the dragon's head to its arm and then onto its back before unleashing a devastating ice attack directly at the monster. However, the dragon effortlessly blocks the attack by folding its massive wings around itself before sending the mage flying away. No one has any idea how they're supposed to defeat an S-rank monster that appeared out of nowhere. The dragon immediately charges up another blast of fire and engulfs the entire street in flames. Meanwhile, Morgrant is standing right in its path, frozen in place, while his companion desperately tries to pull him away. The appearance of this abnormal monster transformed the city into a living nightmare, and the newly awakened Morgrant was about to throw his life away. The inferno races straight toward him, yet he can only stand there until someone suddenly asks if the kid is alright. When Morgrant looks up, he sees a towering warrior standing before him, protected by an enormous shield and clad in crimson armor. Morgrant recognizes him immediately. It is Frederick Hugh, the strongest hunter of that era and the legendary hero who also happens to be Eris's father. In the very next instant, however, the dragon bites straight through him, leaving only what little remains of his body. Morgrant cries out in horror, but then the dragon's expression suddenly twists and blood erupts from its mouth. Its enormous body begins swelling with strange bubbles until the creature violently explodes from the inside. Honestly, everyone probably saw that coming. It was Frederick himself, standing there unharmed, calmly wielding his legendary sword. Morgrant couldn't believe his eyes. He had just watched the man die only moments earlier. Then Nishihara Tomoka appears. Seriously, how is she still alive after all these years? At this rate, she could probably survive in another dimension forever. Eris clearly inherited some of that incredible vitality. Nishihara sighs and reminds Frederick that she already warned him never to use that ability where other people could witness it. Morgrant finally realizes that she survived the explosion by protecting herself with a barrier. Frederick explains that this time he had no choice. The dragon had to be eliminated immediately. Nishihara walks walks over to him and gives him a gentle hug, remarking that it makes perfect sense the monster's scales were as tough as solid steel. Frederick then asks Morgrant to keep everything he witnessed an absolute secret. Morgrant agrees, and just then the other hunters arrive, amazed that the dragon has already been defeated. Frederick wraps an arm around his beloved and says it's time for the two of them to leave. Morgrant, still overwhelmed by everything he witnessed, places a hand over his chest and asks Frederick not to forget him. He introduces himself as Morgrant, a newly awakened hunter. Frederick smiles warmly and replies that he'll remember that name. From that day on, Morgrant believed the world's strongest hunter possessed an ability that could overcome death itself. What he never expected was that one day he would encounter someone else with that exact same power. He knew it sounded unbelievable, but he had to witness it with his own. After driving his sword through Haruto's chest, the very next moment Haruto was standing behind him, asking what exactly Morgrant thought he was doing. At that point, Morgrant finally relaxed. Just as he'd suspected, Haruto possessed the same mysterious ability as Frederick. He immediately apologizes, admitting he attacked only to confirm the suspicion that had haunted him for years. Haruto, naturally, calls the whole thing completely insane. Before they can continue talking, someone nearby calls out to Haruto. Of course, Satoru witnessed the entire scene as well. Things have suddenly become a lot more complicated for Haruto. In the very next scene, Morgrant is kneeling with his forehead pressed against the floor, begging Haruto to forgive him. Haruto can't help asking where he even learned to perform such a perfect ajiza. Eris proudly admits that she taught him. She explains that in Asia, bowing that deeply is the proper way to apologize after committing a serious offense. Morgrant then solemnly declares that he'll spend the rest of his life making up for his mistake by staying at Haruto's side forever. Haruto immediately cuts him off, telling him to stop making life-changing decisions without asking first. Meanwhile, Satoru can't contain his curiosity. He asks whether Haruto really possesses the same resurrection ability that Frederick Hugh once had. Haruto tells them to stop giving his ability a name already. But since he never actually denies it, Satoru becomes even more excited, saying it's unbelievable that someone could literally come back to life. Haruto decides it's probably easier to let them keep believing that's how his power works. Just then, Eris calls him over, saying she has something important to show him. Could it be another dimensional fragment? The moment Haruto sees it, he recognizes it immediately. Eris explains that she had been tracking dimensional energy, and that's how she discovered the fragment. Haruto tells her that he obtained his own piece after destroying the giant golem's heart in the Snow Mountain dungeon. It appeared as a special one-time reward. Then Eris reveals something even more surprising. Her fragment wasn't something she found. It was inherited from her mother. According to everything she's learned, these fragments naturally resonate with one another. Finding Haruto carrying one of them suddenly makes everything click. Haruto realizes that's actually good news. If the fragments attract each other, locating the remaining ones should become much easier. Naturally, Satoru asks the question everyone is thinking: what exactly can these triangular fragments do? Eris, as always, explains that collecting them allows their owner to open gateways between dimensions. Satoru stares at her in complete disbelief, acting as though he never heard that information before, despite Haruto already receiving the same explanation from the system. Eris then adds one crucial detail: they may not only be able to open dimensional gates, but also seal them shut. That's the moment Haruto finally understands why Eris had been so interested in that dungeon from the very beginning. Eris explains that she believes her parents are still alive, but imprisoned somewhere in another dimension. Morgrant agrees, saying it's hard to imagine anyone actually being capable of killing those two. Satoru wonders whether the dimensional fragments might exist only in this world, or even worse, whether the gateway to wherever her parents are can only be opened from the outside. Eris admits that's entirely possible. Another possibility is that her parents deliberately chose to remain in that other dimension for a reason. Haruto says the only explanation that makes sense is that they stayed behind because they were trying to prevent something even more terrifying than the Great Catastrophe. Whatever the truth may be, one thing is certain: they now possess not only a method of traveling between dimensions, but also a way to seal those gateways. As everyone studies the dimensional fragments lying on the table, Satoru wonders how they're supposed to fit together. Then the little golem accidentally nudges one of them, activating some kind of magnetic force. Instantly, the fragments snap together on their own. The entire room begins glowing, and everyone watches in anticipation, expecting something incredible to happen, but they simply lock together. Eris carefully picks them up and says she's certain the resonance has become much stronger. She can actually feel it now. Whoever possesses these fragments is clearly connected to something far beyond an ordinary human. Everyone is excited, believing they've finally taken a step toward finding their way home. Meanwhile, back at Starfield Guild headquarters in Europe, someone asks a man named Midshield why he's smiling when the Blood Tower operation ended in failure. failure. Elf Lauren quickly apologizes to Lord Michael, explaining that Midshield is simply happy because Michael finally absorbed Control plus F. With that ability, he's now one step closer to reaching transcendence. Michael demonstrates the power by teleporting a short distance before taking a seat, explaining that for now the ability only works over limited ranges. To fully evolve it, he'll need to obtain Control plus C as well. Midshield confidently says it won't be long. His own fragment has suddenly begun resonating powerfully, meaning that 2 of the 5-dimensional fragments have finally been connected. Michael remarks that Midshield certainly seems eager to return to his homeland. Michael asks whether there aren't any dimensional fragments left in the elves' homeland. Midshield replies that the fragments still exist, but the dimensional gates there can no longer be opened. 15 years ago, Nishihara Tomoka sealed every dimensional pathway connecting the elven world to Earth. She attempted to do the same on Earth, but instead of disappearing, the gateways transformed into dimensional fragments. Michael immediately realizes that's why joining the fragments together allows the dimensional passages to be opened again. Midshield explains that their first priority is returning to the elven homeland and reaching the sacred tree, Yggdrasil. There exists an ability similar to Control plus C. Once someone absorbs it, it enhances the growth and evolution of their other abilities. Michael asks whether he's absolutely certain, especially considering that when they first met, Midshield seemed genuinely shocked by Michael's talent. The elf immediately begins trembling, clearly struggling to answer. That's when Michael stands up and says he already knows the real story. 15 years ago, the elven dimension became corrupted, and the sacred tree was on the verge of collapse. That's why the elves established a connection with Earth, to dump the disaster threatening their own world onto this one. Their plan only failed because Nishihara sealed every dimensional route. Michael asks whether that's the truth, and Midshield's silence makes the answer painfully obvious. Michael simply shrugs it off. He doesn't care about any of that. His goal is to reopen the multidimensional gateways and absorb even more powers, even if it means sacrificing Earth. He declares that he'll personally make his move. Midshield quickly warns him that the timing is wrong. As the leader of a multinational guild, he would attract far too much attention if he acted now. Michael calmly replies that there's no need to worry. He has already instructed Lucas to begin Plan B. The scene then shifts to the Forest of Death, an advanced dungeon located in Japan. There, someone is battling a horde of level 90 ghouls. As expected, it's Haruto, accompanied by his usual crew. Seriously, after meeting so many amazing girls throughout the story, he somehow keeps ending up in dungeons with nothing but guys. Meanwhile, Morgrant clings to Haruto's side while desperately trying to retreat because even he thinks these monsters are way too powerful. Of course, Haruto has no intention of leaving. It took an enormous amount of effort just to gain access to this dungeon, and he's determined to make the most of it by grinding as many levels as possible. Confidently, he tells everyone not to worry because he'll head in first. The ghouls immediately prepare to attack, and Satoru tells Haruto to be careful. Seriously, the guy's already acting emotional before the battle has even started. The monsters charge straight toward Haruto, and he immediately begins spamming Control plus V without holding back, summoning an entire army of golems. As expected, the 2 men beside him are completely bewildered, wondering where all those golems suddenly came from. Haruto watches proudly as his stone army tears through the enemies, while a confused Morgrant asks what Haruto's real ability even is anymore. The last thing he knew, it was supposed to be resurrection. The first ghoul lunges forward, sinking its fangs straight into a golem's head. Satoru is convinced that's the end of it. There's no way the golem could survive a hit like that, except it does. Not only does the golem shrug off the attack, it immediately drives its fist into the ghoul's face and smashes the monster into the ground. With that, Haruto's stone army surges forward and begins completely overwhelming every monster in the dungeon. Satoru eventually just sits down, realizing Haruto doesn't need anyone's help anymore. After a while, the golems have exterminated every last werewolf in sight. Just as Haruto expected, the monster's resistance and overall stats are far higher than those of ordinary dungeon creatures. Haruto opens his inventory and realizes the only problem now is storage space. It simply isn't large enough to maintain the massive golem army he wants to build. Thinking out loud, he says he'll have to develop a more efficient system. Satoru suggests asking Kurosaki about it, while Morgrant quietly walks away, regretting his decision to leave the International Hunter Association. Compared to everyone else, he feels completely useless. Later, inside the car with Satoru, Haruto can't help laughing at the fact that this spoiled rich kid received a luxury car as a birthday present. Just then, he receives a call from Nanus, asking him to come to the Hunter Association immediately. Satoru asks what happened, and Haruto says he doesn't know, although deep down, he's already certain it has something to do with Erida. A short while later, inside the association's interrogation room, Erida sits silently, her lips cracked from dehydration after days without eating or drinking. Nanu's explains that Erida has refused both food and water for 3 straight days, but she specifically requested to speak with Haruto. Haruto asks whether it's possible to turn off the recording equipment for their conversation, but Nanu's immediately refuses, saying that's against protocol. Haruto quietly considers whether revealing his ability would be worth the chance to copy Erida's power. If he could obtain another broken ability, the risk might be worth taking. Once inside the room, he gently places a cup of water in front of her and politely asks her to drink. After staring at him for a moment, she finally takes a sip. Nanu's remarks that at least it'll help with the dehydration. Haruto, meanwhile, wastes no time getting to the point. Haruto tells Erida that his ability is the power to generate infinite mana. She starts to respond, but he stops her first and asks whether she's also been affected by the curse tied to the Control plus Z ability. He expects her to hesitate, but she answers without the slightest pause. Yes, that confirms Haruto's suspicion. He's not the only one carrying the mysterious mark on his neck, which means that if he can somehow copy Control plus Z, he may eventually be able to obtain every control ability. Eris overhears the conversation and realizes that an ability capable of restoring something to its original state is far more terrifying than one that simply heals damage. Satoru, meanwhile, is completely confused, still trying to understand what this mysterious Control plus Z curse even is. Erida finally reveals why she wanted to see Haruto. She asks him to help restore her parents, who have remained in comas for years. The process would require an unimaginable amount of mana, and he's the only person capable of supplying it. Haruto stands up and promises that he'll provide all the mana she needs. However, from this point forward, he'll have to take a much more direct approach. Without warning, he reaches toward her handcuffs, leaving everyone watching through the window completely confused about what he's trying to do. A brilliant flash suddenly fills the interrogation room as a wave of energy spreads outward while Haruto holds Erida's hand. His real objective is to copy Control plus Z. At least that's the plan. The system immediately shuts him down, informing him that this ability cannot be copied, so that idea fails instantly. Haruto expected it wouldn't be easy, but he didn't think he'd hit a complete dead end. Still holding Erida's hand, he wonders what he's supposed to do next. Erida, completely innocent and unaware of his intentions, quietly asks what he's doing. Haruto quickly lets go of her hand, awkwardly says it was nothing, and apologizes. Then a new system notification suddenly appears. It explains that because Control plus Z is not a standard ability, it cannot currently be copied. However, it may become obtainable through force absorption, and Haruto immediately understands exactly what that implies. The only problem is that force absorption only works after killing the ability's owner. Haruto has no intention of murdering Erida just to obtain her power. Looking at her, he desperately searches for another solution. Meanwhile, Satoru is completely lost, wondering what in the world is happening. Then, out of nowhere, Nanu's picks up the intercom and asks whether something went wrong. Haruto calmly replies that everything is fine and there's nothing to worry about. Deep down, however, he decides the smartest option is to keep Erida close until he finds another way. He then offers to accompany her to the hospital where her parents are staying. Later that afternoon, they arrive at the central hospital. Erida explains that both of her parents suffer from mana poisoning, a condition they developed during the mysterious incident 15 years ago. Haruto realizes that, just as he suspected, she always had a reason for remaining beside Kurosaki. He then asks Nanu's whether Kurosaki is also being treated in the same hospital. She confirms that he is, although he's being held in the underground ward. The plan is to interrogate him the moment he regains consciousness. Nanu's asks whether Erida is worried about that, but she quietly says she isn't. Suddenly, Morgrant senses that something is wrong. At the same time, the mysterious blonde young man from earlier walks past and appears to notice the same disturbance. Deep beneath the hospital, outside the secure room where Kurosaki is being held, 2 guards stop the blonde man and inform him that only authorized personnel may enter. He simply hands them an identification card, thanks them for their hard work, and politely asks them to take a look. But when one of the guards examines the card, the only thing written on it is Control plus F. In that very moment, the blonde man disappears, and both guards are swallowed by darkness. Their eyes instantly turn completely black, and a second later they obediently step aside, calmly telling him he's free to enter and look around as much as he likes. The blonde man walks through the security door and approaches the capsule where Kurosaki is being confined. He activates a glowing purple orb in the palm of his hand, recalling how someone once told Lord Lucas that he alone was capable of carrying out this mission. It was Midshield, the elf, who had given Lucas his orders. If the Blood Tower mission failed, Lucas was to scatter several of those orbs throughout Tokyo. At the time, Lucas had asked what those bizarre objects actually were, and Midshield explained that they were contaminated fruits from Yggdrasil, brought from the elven homeland. Their purpose was to create a barrier capable of opening a passage into subspace. Lucas naturally asked what exactly existed inside that subspace. Midshield simply told him to see for himself, and the moment Lucas looked, he was left horrified. Beyond the dimensional barrier stood a gigantic monstrous creature with an enormous gaping mouth, lurking within another dimension, an eldritch horror unlike anything a normal person should ever witness. Midshield quickly stopped the vision, explaining that this was all Lucas was allowed to see for now. The mission was essential if Starfield and the others were going to move freely between dimensions. Lucas realized they intended to use those orbs to trigger a massive dungeon break in the middle of Tokyo. The problem was that his own family was connected to Starfield, leaving him with no choice but to obey. It seems everyone has one unavoidable weakness: family. Even the strongest hunters can't escape it. Meanwhile, back at the hospital, Erida's father slowly regains consciousness, confused as he asks what happened. When he turns his head, he sees Erida embracing her mother, tears streaming down her face with relief. Satoru is on the verge of crying himself, while Nanus looks over at him as if wondering why he's getting so emotional. Satoru says it's all thanks to Haruto. Even the greatest healers in the world could never have supplied enough mana for Erida to fully activate her ability. Meanwhile, Nanus is deep in thought. An ability capable of restoring anything to its original state is unbelievably dangerous. She realizes they'll have to keep a close watch on Erida from now on. Just then, Haruto asks where Morgrant went. The scene cuts to Lucas casually walking through the hospital corridor, acting as though nothing is out of the ordinary. Then, without warning, a system notification suddenly appears. Control+F has detected a nearby user possessing control-type abilities, and that's when everything finally clicks. Walking nearby is none other than Kurosaki. The guy somehow managed to get out. Lucas accidentally mutters out loud that there's a control user somewhere close, and of course Kurosaki overhears him. He immediately assumes the system must be referring to Erida. Just then, someone calls out Lucas's name. It's Morgrant. He says Lucas was hiding his face so well that he almost didn't recognize him. Then, he demands to know why a Starfield hunter is in Japan. A second later, he notices Kurosaki as well and scoffs. So there are two Starfield dogs here. Lucas fires back, asking what a former International Hunter Association member like Morgrant is doing there instead. Morgrant ignores the question, summons a sword into his hand, and declares that Kurosaki is a wanted criminal. Lucas tries to calm the situation, arguing that fighting in the middle of a hospital would be madness. Meanwhile, Kurosaki complains that all of his equipment and inventory were confiscated, leaving him without even a weapon. At that exact moment, Haruto arrives behind Morgrant and announces that he's here as well. The instant Kurosaki sees him, rage fills his face. Haruto is now wielding abilities that once belonged to him. Then another system notification appears before Lucas. It identifies the person standing in front of him as the user of Control+C and Control+V. Lucas's expression changes instantly. This is the exact person he has been searching for. Before anyone can react, another presence approaches down the hallway, and someone mutters that the situation just keeps getting worse. One look at the tip of the approaching spear is enough to reveal who it is. Even Lucas realizes they've just encountered someone they absolutely didn't want to face. Then Nanus appears in full combat gear, calmly remarking that this day somehow keeps getting worse. Kurosaki immediately starts panicking. He warns Lucas to be extremely careful around Nanus and urges him to get out of there before it's too late. Then, without warning, clang, a pair of handcuffs lands right at their feet. It's Nanus, looking completely unfazed as she calmly tells them that if they surrender now and put them on, nobody has to get hurt. Feeling cornered, Kurosaki grabs a nearby civilian and warns everyone to stay back, saying the hospital is already full of injured people and things will only get worse if anyone forces his hand. The next instant, Nanus launches a devastating flying kick straight into his chest. Kurosaki is sent hurtling down the hallway before crashing into the wall, coughing up blood from the impact. Poor Lucas can only stand there thinking, well, that escalated quickly. Nanus calmly calls out to Lucas and tells him they can still resolve this peacefully. Lucas glances to the side and sees Kurosaki unconscious against the wall. He immediately realizes he'd probably end up in the exact same condition if he tried resisting. His mind drifts back to the moment Midshield entrusted him with the Yggdrasil seed when he asked why he had been chosen. The elf explained that the seed was contaminated by mana corruption, making it impossible for ordinary humans to even touch. But Lucas, just like Kurosaki, was different. When Lucas asked why, Midshield finally revealed the truth. Kurosaki had violated international law by using abilities fueled by black mana, and that same cursed energy was exactly what the Yggdrasil seed required to function. That's when Lucas finally realizes the truth. To the Hunter Association, he's no different from Kurosaki. For a moment, it seems like he he might try to negotiate, but Lucas shakes his head. No, there's no peaceful way out of this. He slowly unsheathes his sword, declaring that he needs Kurosaki and that he'll take him away no matter the cost. The instant Lucas draws his weapon, everyone recognizes it. Morgrant immediately identifies the rapier Angelus, an incredibly rare weapon, passed down through generations of Britannia's greatest heroes. Only one exists in the entire world. It stands alongside the legendary Dragon King's sword in prestige, but unlike that blade, Angelus was forged purely for thrusting attacks. In the next instant, Lucas launches straight toward Nanu's. She raises her spear to block, but Angelus pierces right through the weapon and drives directly into her chest. Haruto instinctively reacts in alarm, yet she remains perfectly composed, telling him not to interfere. Looking at Lucas, she calmly remarks that they're about to destroy the entire hospital if this continues. She casually pulls the rapier out of her body as though nothing happened, leaving Lucas completely stunned, unable to understand how she survived the strike. Nanu's immediately counters with a thrust of her spear. Lucas barely evades it, his mind still occupied by the mystery of how she withstood a direct hit from Angelus. But while he's busy overthinking, Nanu's spear comes hurtling straight toward his face, and this time the attack appears to connect cleanly. But Lucas barely manages to knock it aside with Angelus at the last possible moment. Even so, it's obvious that Nanu's is on an entirely different level. The sheer force of her attack sends Lucas flying backward. Despite never taking a direct hit, he immediately coughs up blood. The impact alone leaves him with internal injuries, and he quickly realizes his odds of winning are practically non-existent. Now he finally understands why Nanu's is considered one of the 10 strongest hunters in the world. Growing desperate, he begins activating a hidden function of Angelus, something he had hoped never to use inside a hospital. But before he can finish, someone suddenly shouts Nanu's name. Kurosaki, who has gotten back on his feet while holding the corrupted Yggdrasil seed in his hand. He laughs triumphantly, declaring that the very hospital everyone has been trying so hard to protect is about to disappear from existence. Without hesitation, he slams the seed into the ground, and even Lucas immediately realizes this is a disaster. Kurosaki only smiles wider, saying the closer it is to the center of Tokyo, the better. And this hospital, standing right in the heart of the city, is the perfect location. Haruto has no idea what Kurosaki is talking about, but Morgrant immediately recognizes it: black mana, a corrupted and incredibly rare energy source, and the amount contained within that single seed is beyond belief. Haruto instantly activates Control plus V2, use both Shadow Step and Spiderweb at the same time. In the next instant, he appears behind Kurosaki once again, wrapping him in the web just like before. But Kurosaki only smiles and says it's already too late. Before Haruto can stop him, a gigantic tree suddenly begins sprouting from the ground. Enormous branches erupt into the sky as the entire hospital starts breaking apart. Patients are literally being thrown into the air as a colossal tree engulfs the building. As terrifying as it is, the scene has an eerie, almost beautiful appearance, like nature itself has unleashed an apocalypse. Unfortunately, the people trapped inside aren't appreciating the view. They're falling through the collapsing structure, screaming as many of them plunge towards certain death. One frightened girl loses her grip and begins falling, but before disaster strikes, Haruto arrives just in time, catching her with his spiderweb. "Are you all right?" She nods, saying she's fine. Then, with another swing of the web, he safely sends her away. By this point, Haruto has already rescued numerous patients. The problem is that no one can escape the area anymore. Nanu's and Morgrant work together to evacuate as many people as possible. However, the entire hospital has become engulfed in an overwhelming concentration of black mana. Elsewhere, Satoru orders one of the golems to lift a massive slab of concrete so he can rescue people trapped beneath the rubble. Just then, Haruto arrives, and Satoru immediately asks what on earth happened. Haruto's first concern is whether everyone is safe. Satoru nods, saying they managed to hold things together thanks to Eris. Naturally, Haruto immediately asks where she is. They make their way to her location, only to find the entire area sealed behind towering walls of ice. Haruto places a hand on the frozen barrier and asks what this is. Eris casually answers that it's exactly what it looks like, an enormous wall of ice. She explains that she created multiple ice barriers throughout the hospital to stop the building from completely collapsing. Unfortunately, even that wasn't enough to block the spread of the black mana. Haruto thanks her, relieved that at least the situation has been stabilized for the time being. He immediately turns to Erida and explains that whatever Kurosaki unleashed destroyed the entire hospital. The fastest way to save everyone would be to restore everything to its original state. He asks if she can do it. Erida confidently says yes. She's restored entire dungeons before, and with Haruto supplying unlimited mana, running out of energy isn't something she has to worry about. A short time later, everyone stands before the gigantic gigantic tree. Apparently, Kurosaki and Lucas managed to escape during the chaos, and for now, everyone has accepted that pursuing them will have to wait. Satoru asks where the massive tree even came from, and Haruto explains that Kurosaki was responsible for creating it before disappearing. Hearing that only makes Erita even angrier. Her parents were inside that hospital, and Kurosaki nearly killed them both. Eris quietly studies the tree's enormous roots, while Haruto tells Erita it's time to begin the restoration. She starts channeling her radiant mana into the massive trunk as she places her hand against it. The earth begins to tremble, and the countless branches shake along with the tree as Erita's restoration ability finally takes effect. The enormous roots begin retracting back into the ground. Everyone watches the scene in complete silence. Slowly, the gigantic tree starts shrinking before their eyes. A massive portal suddenly opens in front of them, drawing all of the black mana into its center. But then, Erita suddenly loses concentration, and the restoration comes to an abrupt halt. Haruto instantly realizes that the portal itself is the true source of the black mana, and Erita is standing directly in danger. Once again, it's time for Haruto to step in. He immediately activates Ctrl+V, creating a gigantic spiderweb barrier to block the spreading black mana. Whether the corruption is repelled or simply redirected, no one can tell. The next moment, Erita has already collapsed safely into Haruto's arms. Satoru rushes over and asks if they're alright. Haruto answers that they are, but one fact is undeniable. Erita failed to completely restore the tree. Haruto immediately orders everyone to evacuate the hospital. He's convinced monsters could emerge from that portal at any second. Somehow, everyone naturally accepts his command as if he were the leader of the operation. Without questioning him, they immediately begin moving. Haruto then turns to Eris and asks whether she knows what that portal really is. Eris explains that, according to the knowledge passed down by her mother, it's connected to a corrupted seed from the cosmic tree, Yggdrasil, originating from another dimension. Its purpose is to gather and concentrate every trace of corruption from that world into a single point. That may also explain why Erita's restoration ability failed. You can't restore something to its original state if it never belonged to this world in the first place. And the worst part? According to the ancient records, a corrupted seed is normally activated only when 3 or 4 of them are used together. 10 minutes later, outside the hospital, emergency crews are desperately searching for survivors among the wreckage. Low-ranked F-class hunters do everything they can, raising fragile magical barriers in an attempt to suppress the black mana surrounding the tree, but their efforts barely make a difference. The Hunter Association president can hardly believe it. Once again, Tokyo is facing an invasion linked to another dimension. Nanus apologizes, explaining that an emergency alert has already been issued to capture both Kurosaki and Lucas. Taikuchi seizes the opportunity to criticize her, saying he never expected someone of her caliber to let those two escape. If Lucas is involved, perhaps it's finally time to confront Starfield directly. Shirasaki disagrees, saying it would be pointless. Starfield would simply insist that Blood Tower is Japan's problem and refuse to intervene. That doesn't bother him, though. He confidently declares that he'll personally capture Kurosaki sooner or later. Suddenly, the ground begins trembling once again, and the damaged hospital looks ready to collapse completely. A hunter comes rushing over, shouting that there's another emergency. A second enormous tree has begun growing in another part of the city. Haruto immediately realizes Kurosaki has struck again. This whole disaster happened because they chose to capture and rehabilitate him instead of eliminating him when they had the chance. Before long, every news broadcast is reporting the same shocking story. 2 mysterious trees have appeared in the center of Tokyo, both radiating an overwhelming amount of black mana. Naturally, panic begins spreading among the citizens as they wonder whether life will ever return to normal. Meanwhile, somewhere else in the city, Kurosaki calmly rides inside a car, convinced there's no way anyone will catch him amidst all the chaos. He even looks at Lucas and remarks that he's far more ruthless than expected. Kurosaki admits he never imagined Lucas would use black mana to brainwash people like that. People have already begun evacuating the city, and honestly, it's hard to blame them. Prolonged exposure to black mana can cause the same devastating condition that left Erita's parents in a coma. Inside the car, Kurosaki keeps making jokes about Lucas's mind control abilities, until Lucas finally loses his patience and tells him to shut. Kurosaki only laughs, insisting he meant it as a compliment. He points out that the authorities are undoubtedly searching for them everywhere, but as long as he stays with Lucas, no one will ever find them. Why? Because the last place anyone would think to search is a police vehicle. With only 3 corrupted seeds left to plant, the next phase of their plan can finally begin. Back at Hunter Association headquarters, the president's office is beginning to realize that more of those trees could appear at any moment. Eris shares everything she learned from the records left behind by her mother. According to those documents, once the corrupted trees begin emerging merging, Tokyo will face a catastrophe because the trees function as both dimensional gateways and anchors. In other words, they're about to unleash an invasion of monsters from another world. Morgrant visibly pales as he realizes this is exactly how the great disaster 15 years ago first began. Meanwhile, Haruto suddenly starts remembering something. 15 years ago, when those same enormous tree trunks erupted from the ground, he was riding in a car with his father. His dad was desperately shouting at him to sit down and fasten his seatbelt before they were thrown from the vehicle. As they sped down the road, they desperately tried to outrun the rapidly growing trees. Then, a massive trunk suddenly slammed into the side of their car. It seems Haruto had buried those memories deep inside his mind, but now they're rushing back all at once. Looking at the trees surrounding Tokyo, he finally realizes that these very same corrupted trees were responsible for his parents' deaths. Whoever orchestrated this tragedy, Haruto swears he'll never forgive them. Kurosaki admits he has no memory of the incident with the corrupted trees. At the time, he was occupied clearing dungeons in another region and never witnessed the disaster himself. Eris then explains that the trees do more than connect dimensions. They also create a unique type of subspace. Nanus looks puzzled, while Morgrant asks the obvious question: why would anyone go to such extremes? What purpose could spreading corruption from another world possibly serve? Eris explains that the corrupted trees generate a black mana subspace. By planting several of them, an enormous amount of corrupted energy can be concentrated in a single location. She warns that if the process reaches its worst possible outcome, an entire dimension could eventually collide with their own world. Haruto, however, quietly smiles to himself. An idea has already formed in his mind: combine the tree's subspace with the one inside his inventory to mass-produce an army of golems. The details are still fuzzy, but it's exactly the kind of reckless plan that somehow always seems to work for him. Meanwhile, Taikuchi completely dismisses the discussion, shouting that everyone is spouting ridiculous fantasy and calling the entire theory nonsense. Apparently, unless something happens right in front of him, he refuses to believe it. Then someone calmly produces a dimensional fragment, and the very same man who had been denying everything immediately changes his attitude, asking if they're really about to activate it. Eris explains that one fragment belonged to her mother, while the second is the one Haruto obtained after defeating the giant golem. Only then does Taikuchi finally accept that they're telling the truth, though he points out that 2 fragments still aren't enough. Eris agrees, but says she can sense another fragment drawing closer. She believes this disaster will reveal the remaining pieces, and collecting them will be the key to resolving the crisis. Needless to say, Taikuchi isn't particularly happy with how this situation is developing. The association president then reminds everyone that once the portal fully opens, this will no longer be Japan's problem. It will threaten the entire world. Finding the remaining 3 fragments has become their highest priority. That's when Shirasaki reveals a major surprise. His guild is already in possession of one of the missing fragments. A short while later, the group arrives at Future Guild's warehouse, where Haruto stands before a heavily reinforced entrance, genuinely impressed by how secure the facility is. Taikuchi remarks that he always knew Shirasaki was obsessed with collecting dungeon artifacts, but he never expected him to create an entire subspace just to safeguard a single item. Naturally, Haruto wants to know how Shirasaki managed to create a subspace like this in the first place. Meanwhile, Taikuchi quietly mutters that the fragment is probably a fake anyway, but Haruto's ability to detect the dimensional fragments clearly points to this location. The fragments are already resonating with each other. Shirasaki then taps a command on his interface, and the massive vault doors slowly slide open. Haruto had expected the room to be filled with priceless treasures, but instead there's only a single fragment resting at the center of an enormous crystal. Taikuchi can't help asking why anyone would build such extreme security just to protect something so small. Haruto cuts the discussion short, saying that from this point onward, only he and Shirasaki will handle the fragments. Naturally, Taikuchi immediately loses his temper and demands to know who Haruto thinks he is. Before the argument can escalate, Eris steps in and explains that combining the fragments is extremely dangerous, so it's safest if only the 2 of them proceed. Shirasaki agrees and orders Taikuchi to stand down, making it clear that only he and Haruto will continue. Taikuchi isn't willing to let it go, warning that if anything happens, he'll personally kill both of them. Haruto simply closes the vault door in his face, leaving the furious man outside. Once inside, Haruto confirms that the fragment in Shirasaki's possession is fragment number 4. He asks where Shirasaki found it, but Shirasaki coldly refuses to answer, saying it's merely a means to achieve his objective. Once all the fragments are combined, he intends to enter the dimensional barrier himself before anything can go wrong. Haruto, however, remains completely confident. With both Spiderweb and Shadow Step, he believes he'll be able to protect himself. But before he can even take the fragments out of his inventory, fragment number 4 suddenly begins begins reacting on its own. Suddenly, the fragment launches itself toward Haruto, triggering a violent explosion inside the vault. Everything happens so fast that Shirasaki doesn't even have time to react before the blast tears the vault door apart. Outside, Nanus immediately senses that something has gone terribly wrong. The reinforced door is blown open from within, and Shirasaki frantically calls out for Haruto. Then he hears a familiar voice saying that things almost ended very badly. Thankfully, Haruto managed to avoid the explosion by activating Shadow Step. Looking down at his inventory, now containing 3 fused fragments, Haruto quietly admits that he never expected them to combine automatically. Shirasaki, however, is furious. As if Haruto's countless strange abilities weren't enough, he also possesses an incredibly rare movement technique. Haruto tries to calm him down, saying he can explain everything. Instead, Shirasaki grabs him by the throat and violently hurls him into the floor. Demanding answers, Shirasaki declares that using Shadow Step without black mana should be impossible, insisting Haruto explain himself immediately. Haruto has no idea how to answer. At this point, he's doing everything he can to suppress the urge to knock Shirasaki unconscious. Obviously, revealing Control plus V is out of the question, so he simply insists that there's no way he's using black mana. Shirasaki refuses to accept that explanation. If Haruto isn't using black mana, then how is he capable of performing a technique that should require it? A moment later, Shirasaki releases a surge of crackling black lightning toward Haruto. The others immediately panic, shouting at him to stop. Have they all forgotten that Haruto is the master of frost? But Haruto quickly realizes he can't simply escape. This black lightning possesses a special property that directly counters Shadow Step. Shirasaki continues pressing Haruto, accusing him outright. He says he's been suspicious ever since the incident in the Blood Tower dungeon. He demands to know who Haruto really is, what happened on Giant Golem Mountain, and what kind of connection he has with Kurosaki. Haruto can't believe Shirasaki actually thinks they're working together. Just because they possess similar abilities doesn't make them allies. Still, now he's finally standing face to face with the enraged guild master. Shirasaki completely loses his composure. It's as if he's inviting Haruto to stop holding back and fight with everything he has. The thought alone pushes Haruto over the edge, and he immediately activates Control plus V, flooding the room with countless strands of spiderweb while mocking the absurd accusation that he's somehow allied with the very man who's trying to kill him. Enjoy getting wrapped up in your own web. Haruto instantly switches into his compact furball form and charges forward, but the moment the attack connects, he realizes he made a mistake. His transformed body is torn apart almost instantly. In the blink of an eye, Shirasaki breaks free, forcing Haruto onto the defensive as the counterattack comes crashing in. Shirasaki coldly declares that the only reason Haruto refuses to answer is because he's hiding something, and that secret is going to get him killed. At that moment, Haruto remembers a terrifying fact. He has challenged a hunter around level 500, while he himself has barely reached level 300. If he wants to survive, he'll have to win by any means necessary. Without hesitation, he pulls out a top-grade recovery potion capable of restoring 95% of his health. Shirasaki's next attack comes rushing straight toward him, and Haruto desperately braces himself to block it. Then he suddenly understands what's happening. He intentionally allowed his HP to fall below 25% in order to activate a special effect. Callous Berserker activates. The instant he endures Shirasaki's attack, Haruto draws his sword and launches a fierce counterattack. "Take this, you fake Harry Potter," he yells as the dimensional barrier begins to crack, leaving everyone stunned that it's actually breaking. A blinding flash suddenly erupts, and violent explosions engulf the entire area. "Enough already, you idiot," someone shouts. Just as the chaos reaches its peak, Haruto is struck by a vivid flashback. In his memory, Shirasaki is talking with his younger brother. Together they dream of becoming the strongest hunters in the country, which is exactly why they chose the name Future Guild. The cheerful young man beside him is Shirasaki's brother, Sada, wearing the same innocent, almost childlike smile he always had. 10 years earlier, the two brothers stood together against a terrifying monster while Sada fought using numerous talismans, and on that very day they even succeeded in defeating the so-called Demon Lord of Hell. No matter how fearsome their enemies were, neither brother ever backed down. Standing before the entrance to a dungeon, Sada admits he has a bad feeling, as though a few unexpected hunters have somehow slipped into their expedition. Shirasaki, however, confidently insists it's the perfect opportunity to claim a dungeon controlled by Minus. Capturing it would be the breakthrough Future Guild needed to rise into the nation's top 10 guilds. After all, as long as his brother was fighting beside him, he believed there was nothing to fear. Meanwhile, Sada silently keeps his eyes eyes on the mysterious mummy-like man nearby. The next thing he sees is a nightmare. The dungeon boss is dead, and every hunter has been ripped to pieces, their bodies scattered across the floor. Standing among the carnage, the mummy-like man has already killed Sada, and Shirasaki desperately demands to know what happened. The stranger calmly tells him to abandon any hope. Sada had been consumed by black mana addiction, a corruption that eventually transformed him into something even more horrifying than a ghoul. Shirasaki immediately orders the man to hand over the cure. The mummy-like figure replies, "Give me your shadow step ability, and I'll tell you how your brother can be saved." With no other choice, Shirasaki reluctantly transfers the ability to him. In this world, abilities can actually be passed from one person to another as if they were ordinary possessions. Once the transfer is complete, Shirasaki demands the cure, only for the stranger to explain that the only possible treatment requires the legendary sword known as Brillhands. It is supposedly the sole weapon capable of curing mana poisoning. Shirasaki is left stunned. He asked for a cure, not another impossible objective. Then the man delivers an even harsher truth. There is no true cure for black mana addiction. But in the end, none of it matters. The dungeon is already collapsing, and both of them are going to die anyway. Shirasaki, unable to accept it, accuses the stranger of planning to kill them from the very beginning. As the mummy-like man slowly fades away, he says the world is not yet ready to learn about black mana or the powers born from it. At that very moment, the entire dungeon begins collapsing around them. Just then, Sada shows Shirasaki an item he discovered inside the boss chamber. Shirasaki has no idea what it is, but it looks unlike any artifact he has ever seen. In desperation, Shirasaki tells his brother to forget the item and focus on escaping. They need to use an ability to get out while they still can. Sada quietly replies that there isn't enough time to save them both, and he activates a forced return skill on Shirasaki instead. Shirasaki screams in desperation, refusing to leave his brother behind, begging to know why, but his brother could only apologize. The next instant, Shirasaki found himself back inside Future Guild's headquarters, weeping uncontrollably while tightly clutching the dimensional fragment. Back in the present, during his confrontation with Haruto, Shirasaki reveals that he spent the next 10 years searching countless dungeons, hoping to find that same fragment again, but he never did. By then, he had almost given up hope that his brother was still alive. Haruto finally understands why Shirasaki became obsessed with conquering every dungeon he could find. Meanwhile, Haruto drinks a recovery potion, knowing that although Callous Berserker grants incredible power, its drawbacks are equally severe. Shirasaki explains that discovering the truth behind Shadow Step was what drove him to investigate black mana and forbidden abilities despite the consequences. Aside from the mysterious bandaged man, no one else should have been capable of using such an exceptionally rare skill. Haruto then offers to explain how he was able to use Shadow Step, but Shirasaki stops him, saying there's no longer any need. After seeing Haruto wield the Dragon Sword of Callous, he has already figured it out. The only explanation is that Haruto possesses an ability capable of copying or stealing other people's skills. Shirasaki apologizes for misunderstanding him and admits everything finally makes sense. Haruto immediately objects. "No, it doesn't. I'm not working with Kurosaki." The two continue arguing for a while before Shirasaki finally says that once the dimensional key is complete, he wants to accompany Haruto. He also insists that Haruto should be the one to personally defeat Kurosaki. Haruto simply replies that his feelings toward Kurosaki no longer matter. While they're talking, Kurosaki is already somewhere else in Tokyo, spreading even more destruction. Suddenly, the shattered vault door swings open, and Morgrant, seeing Haruto covered in injuries, immediately asks what happened. Haruto explains that the explosion was simply caused by the dimensional fragments combining together. Nanus urges everyone to move quickly, reminding them that while they were inside the vault, the corruption continued spreading across the city. Shirasaki knows Kurosaki is responsible for everything, and he's already determined to hunt him down personally. Just then, Eris says that based on Kurosaki's movements, she believes she can predict where he'll strike next. According to her, the next target will be Ginza. Nanus immediately agrees, pointing out that with Ginza packed full of people, the casualties could be catastrophic. Haruto wants to protect the district as well, but he knows even his spiderweb won't be enough to contain a portal capable of releasing millions of monsters. Shirasaki declares that Future Guild will move out immediately to eliminate Kurosaki, while Nanus announces she'll contact every major guild for reinforcements. She also suggests that Morgrant and Haruto return to the Hunter Association to coordinate the defense, but Haruto refuses. He insists he'll prepare everything himself. Unable to understand his reasoning, Nanus asks why he insists on handling this alone. Haruto answers that the subspace will likely be enormous, so victory will ultimately come down to overwhelming numbers. Nanus sighs and asks if he actually intends to explain this mysterious plan of his. Shirasaki, already leaving, simply tells Haruto Haruto he'll be looking forward to seeing what he can accomplish. At that moment, Haruto says he'll need Morgrant's assistance. For once, Morgrant is finally being appreciated. Haruto explains exactly why. Morgrant is the perfect person to carry the mountain of supplies he'll need. Meanwhile, at Starfield's headquarters, the elf Haruto despises announces that Japan's request for assistance has finally arrived. In other words, everything is proceeding according to plan. Michael doesn't look pleased, pointing out that the dimensional barrier still isn't fully complete. He asks whether the subspace will actually open as intended, but the elf confidently replies that it will. The area is already filling with orcs and goblins, and everything is falling into place. A helmeted man remarks that relying on nothing but goblins and orcs is foolish. Against hunters like Taikuchi and Nanus, Japan would wipe them out almost immediately. Even the rest of Starfield's officers begin questioning the strategy, but the helmeted man confidently assures them not to worry. Their master, and he himself, will make sure everything goes according to plan. Midshield reminds everyone that the countless corrupted trees were planted for a reason. This time, the subspace they've created is far larger than before. One of the Starfield members excitedly points out that with a subspace of this scale, not even American reinforcements would be enough to stop it. Midshield confidently declares that once this enormous curse spreads through central Tokyo, the city will have no chance of surviving. Michael proudly swears in the name of his homeland and Yggdrasil that this time their plan cannot fail. Already preparing to leave, he calmly tells the others not to worry. After all, this isn't the first time he's opened a subspace in Tokyo, revealing that he was behind the disaster 15 years ago as well. Meanwhile, at the White House in the United States, President Biden is visibly disturbed after hearing that the same dimensional catastrophe has begun unfolding again in Japan. On the other end of the call, CIA Director Logan Bowman explains that the situation closely mirrors the disaster that occurred 15 years earlier. The president naturally becomes concerned that something similar could eventually happen on American soil, but his advisors reassure him that the crisis is currently limited to Japan. Remaining relatively calm, Biden asks how the International Hunter Organization is responding. Logan answers that Michael from Starfield is reportedly heading to Japan to provide assistance. A nearby official finds that suspicious, wondering why a hunter with Michael's wealth, fame, and influence would voluntarily involve himself in another country's disaster. But Logan admits he has no explanation. Suddenly, the woman receives an urgent call. It's a video transmission from the president of the American Hunters Association. When the screen turns on, Simon DeFree appears, announcing that they've encountered a major problem. Biden assumes it's about the events in Japan, saying he's already been informed. DeFree replies that it's related, but the situation has become far more dangerous than anyone expected. The reason is simple. The Ouroboros Guild is on its way to Japan. The news catches Logan off guard. He asks whether Turner isn't planning to deal with the crisis personally. DeFree explains that the situation is even stranger than that. Turner has already taken nearly all of the equipment from the American guilds. Logan calls the decision reckless. Turner alone possesses military-level power, and sending someone like him into another country could become a disaster if he ever lost control. He then asks what the Hunters Association plans to do next. DeFree simply answers that, realistically, there's very little anyone can do to stop someone like Turner. Biden quietly remarks that the crisis has grown far beyond Japan alone. He orders the government to secretly prepare America's strongest hunters for deployment while keeping the operation out of the public eye. Meanwhile, throughout the city, more corrupted trees continue erupting from the ground. Elsewhere, Lucas reflects on how, just as Kurosaki said, he has become no different from that man. He keeps telling himself everything he does is to protect his family and his father, but deep down he knows that's only an excuse. All began on the day he awakened the Control Plus F ability. Suddenly, countless streams of information from every corner of the world flooded into his mind. He could even perceive the lingering consciousness of dead monsters. For an entire week, he remained unconscious, drowning in an endless ocean of information. The unbearable mental strain became so overwhelming that he even attempted to take his own life to escape the curse of Control Plus F. Ironically, that moment became the reason he chose to keep living. Among his family's inherited treasures was the legendary Angelus rapier. The instant he held the sword, the effects of Control Plus F were completely suppressed. For the first time, he had a way to understand and control his cursed ability. From that day forward, he never let the sword leave his side. But Angelus wasn't an ordinary weapon. It was a national treasure that countless people coveted because of its immense power. When a series of disasters struck Shiera, the hunter responsible for sealing the portals begged Lucas's father to lend over the sword so it could be used against the invading monsters. His father refused every request in order to protect the family's heirloom. As a result, many lives were lost that might have been saved, and because the Cooper family withheld such a powerful weapon, they gradually lost both their influence and their status. Determined to restore his family's former glory, Lucas devoted himself to mastering Ctrl+F. During that process, he discovered that absorbing black mana was one of the few ways to stabilize the ability. While researching black mana, he eventually crossed paths with Midshield and Michael. Through their support, the Cooper family regained the power it had once lost, but the cost was staggering. The moment Michael realized Lucas possessed Ctrl+F, he began exploiting that talent to locate valuable targets. Once Lucas identified them, Michael would eliminate them himself and steal their abilities. For years, Lucas convinced himself that he was only following Michael's orders to protect his family and restore his father's honor. But deep down, he knows the truth. He obeyed because he was afraid of being killed. In the end, he was nothing more than a coward. And now his greatest fear is that Haruto's Ctrl+F might eventually fall into Michael's hands. He quietly stores the Angelus rapier inside his inventory, and the very next instant, an overwhelming torrent of information crashes into his mind. He begins searching for traces of Haruto until he finally locks onto Ctrl+C. So he wasn't searching for Haruto's identity after all, he was tracking his exact location. A little later, high above the clouds aboard a private jet, a young man is revealed to be none other than Turner Miller, the strongest hunter in the entire world. Not just America's #1, the undisputed strongest on the planet. Even the system refuses to measure his level, labeling it simply as immeasurable. His companion asks why they're flying all the way to Japan instead of using teleportation, but Turner responds by asking whether Richard has forgotten their creed. Richard immediately answers that he never has. Their motto is simple: the moment you let your guard down is the moment danger strikes. As Turner Miller gazes out the window, he recalls the catastrophe that struck Japan 15 years earlier. Back then, he was merely an ordinary low-ranked hunter, and it was Nishihara who saved his life. Soon afterward, Turner awakened his transcendent ability. From that moment on, he rose with unbelievable speed until he became one of the strongest hunters in existence. It seems someone entrusted him with something important just before that disaster came to an end. Turner quietly wonders whether fate is placing another opportunity before him, because this time it's his turn to make a move. After waiting 15 long years, the dimensional fragment has finally begun resonating again. Whatever is happening in Japan now can't be ignored. Meanwhile, in Ginza, Tokyo, just as Eris predicted, the dimensional subspaces begin opening while black mana steadily contaminates the surrounding area. Nanus is doing everything she can to purify the air with specialized magical equipment, but it's obvious that she can't suppress the corruption created by the gigantic tree on her own. The rest of the Hunter Association is also giving everything they've got as the desperate battle continues. Meanwhile, Taikuchi patrols the streets of Ginza, waiting for the first monsters to emerge. The association president asks for an update on the other guilds. Nanus explains that they're busy evacuating civilians, although not everyone will be able to escape before it's too late. He then asks where Haruto has disappeared to. Nanus replies that Haruto claimed he had another mission that was even more important. The president is left baffled. What could possibly take priority over preventing the destruction of all Tokyo? Nanus admits she's wondering the same thing, but she's convinced Haruto has a good reason and isn't acting out of selfish motives. Nearby, another hunter asks why everyone keeps bringing up Haruto's name. At this point, it feels like every time someone mentions him, another person immediately becomes curious enough to join the conversation. Meanwhile, inside a hunter supply store in Ginza, Satoru returns carrying an enormous pile of backpacks, proudly announcing that he managed to gather everything Haruto requested. The only problem is that they may have collected far too much, and Morgrant can't help wondering what they're supposed to do with all of it. Haruto attempts to use Ctrl+V on the Dragon Sword of Callus, but the system immediately warns him that he doesn't have enough mana. Apparently, even copying that sword has its limits. Satoru then announces that they've already collected more than 1,300 items, yet Haruto says it's still nowhere near enough. Morgrant asks whether Haruto is really confident in this strategy, and Haruto replies that it's currently their only chance. What he truly needs now is access to the dimensional subspace so he can begin copying everything. Just then, Midshield appears directly in front of the group. Morgrant starts to say something, but Midshield immediately cuts him off, saying he's only interested in speaking with Haruto. His first demand is simple. Haruto must immediately put down the incredibly dangerous sacred sword. Haruto can't help smiling. If there's one thing he appreciates, it's an incredibly powerful sword. After all, with Ctrl+V, obtaining another amazing weapon is always an enticing prospect. Without warning, he drops all of his bags and instantly teleports behind Lucas, confident that now his level has increased. Copying the sacred sword should be much easier than before. Lucas immediately jumps backward, warning Haruto not to come any closer with that Ctrl+C ability. Naturally, Haruto is stunned. How could Lucas possibly know about his keyboard abilities? He quickly plays dumb, pretending he has no idea what Lucas is talking about. Lucas isn't fooled for a second. He calmly says there's no point hiding it because he already knows the truth. The next strike comes flying straight toward Haruto, but Shadow Step lets him evade it with incredible speed. He instantly reappears behind Lucas. However, Shadow Step is a black mana technique, and that makes it especially vulnerable against a sacred weapon. Lucas suddenly drives Angelus into the ground, releasing a blinding burst of holy light that illuminates the entire city. Watching the light spread, Haruto immediately recalls Shirasaki's black lightning. The radiance is so overwhelming that it completely erases every shadow around him, making Shadow Step impossible to use. Lucas calmly remarks that the reason Haruto can't move freely anymore is because nearly every ability he's copied so far belongs to the black mana attribute. Haruto sarcastically thanks him for the advice, joking that he'll make sure to copy a different type of ability next time. For now, though, his biggest problem is figuring out a reliable way to get his hands on that sacred sword. As Haruto weighs his options, Lucas says that everything happening right now can be traced back to Haruto's Control plus C ability. Haruto immediately becomes suspicious. He asks if Lucas also possesses some kind of keyboard ability, and whether that's why he joined forces with Kurosaki to kill him and steal his power. Lucas immediately loses his patience and attacks, shouting at Haruto not to compare him to someone like Kurosaki. His strike lands squarely in Haruto's chest, and even Lucas looks surprised that it connected so easily. In reality, Haruto had deliberately remained calm and accepted the hit. At that exact moment, he activates Control plus C on the sacred sword Angelus. However, the system immediately warns him that if he copies and absorbs the weapon, he will lose the ability to use Shadow Step. After hearing that warning, Haruto quietly retreats, then pulls out another recovery potion from his inventory. He had assumed that because Control plus C itself isn't a black mana ability, he'd be able to keep both powers at once. Lucas quickly realizes Haruto intentionally took the attack just to activate his copying ability. He asks one final time what Haruto actually intends to do with Control plus C. Haruto answers without hesitation. He plans to become the strongest hunter in existence, even surpassing every transcendent hunter. While weaving around Lucas's relentless attacks, he explains that from the moment he obtained this ability, he has been racing against time. At first, he didn't know about the curse attached to it. He has only 5 years before the coming catastrophe. Lucas is completely bewildered. When he awakened his own ability, the flood of information was so overwhelming that he couldn't make sense of any of it, let alone understand talk about a future disaster. Haruto hesitates over whether he should copy Angelus, fearing that doing so will permanently cost him Shadow Step. Then the system informs him that the sword can no longer be copied. Left with no other option, Haruto decides he'll simply endure another attack and look for another chance later. Suddenly, a brilliant bolt of lightning tears across the sky. Everyone instantly realizes that the nightmare they've been fearing has finally begun. The system announces that part of another dimension, the realm of the black spirits and the corrupted subspace, has opened above Tokyo. The affected region will be contaminated, reducing every hunter's HP and MP by 30%, while also limiting both their mana output and the number of abilities they can use. The dimensional invasion has begun. A few minutes earlier, as the enormous corrupted tree continued tearing the city apart, it finally completed its transformation. The dimensional subspace fully stabilized, and every hunter within the affected area received the same system warning. Kurosaki couldn't stop smiling. Once the subspace had fully opened, Tokyo's fate was sealed. The city was about to become a living nightmare, and his mission would be complete. Just then, someone shouts that they won't allow that to happen. A deafening bolt of lightning crashes from the sky, and Shirasaki appears, declaring that today Kurosaki will die. Kurosaki simply laughs, saying it no longer matters. The contamination has already begun, and Tokyo's destruction is now inevitable. Shirasaki couldn't care less. His only objective is to kill Kurosaki, no matter what happens afterward. One major advantage is that the black mana contamination has no effect on him. Since both Shirasaki and Kurosaki wield black mana abilities, neither of them suffers from the dimensional debuff. Kurosaki grins, warning Shirasaki that he isn't the only person capable of controlling black mana. Meanwhile, every hunter stationed throughout the city receives the system notification. The overwhelming debuff sends shockwaves through their ranks, leaving many unable to activate several of their strongest abilities. One hunter repeatedly tries to activate his skills, but every attempt fails. Even a healer reports that her recovery magic has stopped working properly. Nanus immediately informs the association president that the situation has become far worse than expected. He agrees, admitting that fighting powerful monsters with most of their abilities sealed is going to be an enormous challenge. Then, without warning, a violent cyclone tears across the city, ripping buildings into the air. High above Tokyo, the dimensional rift widens, and the first thing to emerge is a gigantic foot. Everyone instinctively instinctively looks toward the sky to see what terrifying creature is coming through. The colossal figure that steps through is none other than Midshield. The hunters are left wondering why the elf himself hasn't appeared until someone points toward the ground. Of course, countless monsters are already flooding into the city below. The hunters barely have time to prepare for battle before the sheer size of the invading army begins crushing their morale. Meanwhile, Midshield calmly apologizes for his 15-year absence, saying that now he's finally returned. Elsewhere, on a bridge, Taikuchi waits calmly for the monstrous army to arrive. He scoffs at the idea that numbers alone are enough to win a battle. His stone armor activates, and the charging monsters are greeted by a devastating punch the moment they reach him. The massive beast is sent flying like it weighs nothing. Taikuchi remarks that he almost feels sorry for them. The best part of his armor ability is that it doesn't consume mana, giving him a major advantage despite the dimensional debuff. The only real problem is that he's standing alone against an entire army of giants. Then again, that hardly seems to matter because, in the very next instant, he wipes out huge groups of enemies with a single sweeping attack. His overwhelming display of raw strength reignites the hunters' fighting spirit, giving them enough confidence to charge forward and start taking down even the invading goblins. Meanwhile, Nanu's steadily carving a path through the invading monsters. Out of nowhere, a gigantic ogre charges from behind, aiming straight for the association president. The president calmly fixes his gaze on the monster and raises his enormous shield. The ogre crashes into it with full force, and its massive club instantly shatters on impact. Without missing a beat, the president turns the shield itself into a weapon, cutting down not only that ogre, but 3 more rushing in from behind. Nanus can't hide her admiration. It's no surprise such a powerful artifact is considered incredibly rare. She decides to leave the giant-class monsters to the president and Taikuchi. The real concern now is the ordinary hunters. With their abilities heavily restricted, their combat strength has plummeted, while monsters continue pouring endlessly out of the portal. Then, something enormous streaks across the sky. At first, it resembles a phoenix, but Nanus narrowly dodges its dive. As she turns to face it, she realizes it's not a phoenix at all, but a griffin-like creature. A level 150 boss-class monster. Any harmless appearance disappears the moment it enters an aggressive stance. Nanus immediately rushes toward it, and the beast responds by unleashing a torrent of flames. Meanwhile, Haruto and his group also receive the system's debuff notification. Morgrant immediately realizes how serious the situation is. Hunters who depend on their abilities have almost no chance of fighting effectively anymore. Haruto tells Lucas there's no more time to waste. If they keep fighting each other, this entire city will fall. Above them, the skies are already filling with countless dragons. Satoru and Morgrant sprint through the streets carrying their overloaded backpacks, while Haruto sticks firmly to his plan. Lucas unexpectedly ends up running right alongside them. For Haruto, that isn't necessarily a bad thing. It means Angelus remains within reach. Right now, though, his greatest priority is strengthening Earth's defenders. Elsewhere, Nanus remains locked in a fierce battle against the boss monster. Without hesitation, she charges straight at it, prepared to take the hit if that's what it takes to bring the creature down. Just then, a massive figure rushes past her. The association president steps forward with his gigantic shield, blocking the attack and telling Nanus that he'll keep the monster occupied while she goes for its head. Nanus silently nods before launching herself forward. The griffin begins sweeping its massive claws across the battlefield. The monster tears across the battlefield, but Nanus suddenly leaps into the air, lands directly on its back, and swings her spear. The boss isn't careless, though it narrowly evades the strike. She hadn't expected the creature to be this intelligent. The massive beast immediately lunges in an attempt to crush her beneath its weight. With no choice, she raises her spear to block the attack. The monster continues its relentless frontal assault when the association president suddenly hurls his shield like a giant boomerang. The incoming shield forces the beast to evade. Nanus thanks him, and he admits these monsters are proving far more dangerous than he'd anticipated. The boss has become extremely cautious now, making it nearly impossible to catch it off guard. Instead of slowing down, the creature immediately prepares another attack. The president starts thinking of a new strategy, but Nanus interrupts him, telling him to throw the spinning shield again and leave the rest to her. Without hesitation, he does exactly that. As the shield sails through the air, Nanus uses it as a stepping stone, launching herself straight onto the monster's back. Her blade finds its mark, and with one clean strike, she finally severs the monster's head. But that victory is only the beginning. If this was one of the first creatures to emerge, countless more are certain to follow. Elsewhere, a gigantic steel-armored monster is rampaging through the battlefield, crushing unfortunate hunters in its path. The surviving hunters desperately try to come up with a strategy. One of them suddenly suddenly pulls out a mysterious scroll. The instant it's activated, an enormous slash tears through everything in its path, slicing the monster apart. The scroll proves to be far more powerful than anyone expected. Just as the hunters begin celebrating, one of them suddenly coughs up blood and collapses. A second hunter suffers the same fate, and within moments, the entire group is on the ground. That's when Midshield appears, calmly explaining that they realize the truth too late. Every monster born from the subspace releases an enormous amount of black mana the moment it's killed. They had no alternative. If they hadn't defeated the monsters, the city itself would have been destroyed. Spreading his arms wide, Midshield summons even more creatures and warns them that this invasion has only just begun. A nearby hunter immediately realizes the horrifying truth. Tokyo may already be beyond saving. Then a voice suddenly cuts through the despair. It's not over yet. Haruto finally arrives after hauling those countless bags all over the city, confidently declaring that the real battle is only beginning. The stunned hunter immediately recognizes Haruto. Somehow, he's become famous before anyone even realized it. Without wasting a second, Haruto hands out recovery potions, saying there's no time for explanations. The hunter, still confused, insists Haruto should get to safety first, but Haruto simply tells him to relax because he'll take care of everything himself. He throws the backpacks onto the ground and says the first priority is getting rid of this devastating debuff. A flood of system windows suddenly appears. Ctrl+C has finally been activated. Mana begins spreading throughout the entire battlefield, and hunters gradually regain the ability to use their skills. The debuff hasn't disappeared completely, but the situation is far better than before. Once again, people begin recognizing Haruto, remembering the hunter who once restored everyone's mana. The restored mana even reaches Nanu's and the association president, spreading across the entire city. One hunter excitedly realizes that with this much mana available again, they finally stand a chance. The hunters immediately launch another counterattack against the monsters. The only one clearly displeased by this turn of events is Midshield. The moment he looks at Haruto, he immediately realizes who's responsible. It has to be Ctrl+C. Even after recovering their mana, many hunters complain that the battle is still overwhelming because the monsters vastly outnumber them. At this rate, they know defeat is only a matter of time. Then Haruto walks straight past them carrying his pile of backpacks. The surrounding hunters think he's completely lost his mind for charging directly toward an entire army of monsters. Tvordiznak. Haruto's group comes to a halt directly in front of the advancing monsters. Satoru is already panicking, but Haruto tells him to stay calm and start unloading everything from the backpacks. Morgrant begins scattering dozens of strange red spheres across the ground. The little golem follows suit, leaving the surrounding hunters completely bewildered as they try to figure out what Haruto is planning. Then Haruto orders the golems to begin leveling up. He starts using Ctrl+V on the monsters' cores. Nanus is watching from nearby along with the blonde hunter, and neither of them has the slightest idea what this crazy plan is supposed to accomplish. Suddenly, countless tiny golems begin emerging from the ground. Nanus can't understand how Haruto managed to summon so many at once. Then one of the boss monsters crashes into them, smashing dozens of the tiny golems apart in a single blow. The nearby hunters immediately assume Haruto's strategy has already failed, but the monster army is endless, and the surviving little golems begin climbing up the monsters' bodies. The first one to reach a monster's head transforms its hand into a sharp blade and repeatedly stabs the creature, finally bringing the giant down. Without stopping, the golems immediately leap toward their next target. Then they move on to the next monster, repeating the exact same process. The hunter's confidence begins to return as they realize these tiny golems are giving them a real chance to fight back. Seeing the tide slowly turning, Satoru and Morgrant decide it's time for them to join the battle as well. Haruto's golems continue gaining experience at an incredible pace until every one of them reaches level 3. That unlocks their fourth skill, allowing Haruto to issue detailed commands to each golem individually. Their second skill also evolves, greatly extending the range over which they can share their senses. Then Haruto activates their third skill, enabling multiple golems to regenerate into an entirely new form. 3 of the small golems merge together, their bodies erupting in a brilliant explosion, and from the blast, a massive new golem emerges. Haruto declares that it's finally time to bring down the wyverns. To everyone's surprise, the newly created golem takes the form of a giant dragon. It immediately soars into the sky, leaving every hunter staring upward in complete disbelief. One of the wyverns responds by unleashing a torrent of flames straight at the golem dragon. It looks like it's about to fly through the attack without slowing down, but instead, the wyvern catches the golem in midair and violently slams it into the ground. The golem dragon is completely shattered on impact. Just as Haruto expected, a direct clash slash against a wyvern was never going to work, so he immediately uses Control plus V again, and this time countless smaller dragon golems begin emerging from the ground. The nearby hunters remain skeptical. If the giant dragon couldn't win, what chance do these tiny ones have? A wyvern unleashes another massive wave of flames, engulfing the entire swarm. Even Nanus thinks the strategy is hopeless. If they keep charging in like this, they'll only end up destroyed again. But then, one of the little dragon golems suddenly begins spinning like a top, creating a blazing vortex around itself. The spiraling flames transform into a concentrated attack, drilling straight through the wyvern's chest. And it isn't just one wyvern, multiple flying monsters are pierced in the same way. No one understands how Haruto's golems developed such a bizarre technique, but everyone can tell they're evolving at an incredible speed once again. The hunters can only stare in disbelief, and Nanus shouts at them to stop watching and help finish off the remaining monsters. Haruto orders the golems to dive back underground and eliminate everything else while continuing to level up automatically. Nearby, Taikuchi is still battling without slowing down. As Taikuchi watches the tiny creatures fighting, he realizes that despite their small size, they're unbelievably effective on the battlefield. Suddenly, one of the little golems jumps onto his back, and before long, several more climb on, practically clinging to him. Taikuchi can only stare at them in confusion. Satoru explains that because of his stone armor, the golems probably recognize him as one of their own. Taikuchi asks whether Satoru's shield is a golem as well. Satoru proudly answers that it is. In fact, it was the very first gift Haruto ever gave him, and if it keeps leveling up, it'll eventually evolve into a complete suit of armor. Naturally, Taikuchi isn't thrilled to hear that. As another monster charges toward him, he mutters that his armor has nothing in common with those little creatures. He cuts through several enemies in a single motion, insisting nobody should compare him to them. Satoru quickly apologizes, saying that wasn't what he meant. Elsewhere, Lucas stands among the fallen wyverns, deep in thought. For the first time, he truly understands the terrifying potential of Control plus C. Haruto had practically wiped out the wyverns by himself. The thought that frightens Lucas most is what would happen if Michael ever obtained that power. Just then, Haruto walks over and calls out to him. He asks Lucas who was responsible for opening the subspace, but Lucas refuses, saying his family's lives are at stake and he can't betray them. Haruto replies that he's known from the very beginning Lucas has been hiding something important. Lowering his head, Lucas finally says he'll explain everything, but first, Haruto needs to understand that the real disaster hasn't even begun yet. Suddenly, the ground beneath everyone begins to split apart, and enormous tree roots burst up from below. Haruto is almost swallowed by the twisting roots, and Lucas immediately recognizes the technique as one of Midshield's abilities. If Midshield is already forced to use something like this, then the situation must be far worse than they realize. Lucas knows that with the power of the sacred sword, he and Haruto could purify this place together. Before he can move, however, thick roots wrap around his arms and legs, pinning him in place. His sword arm is left completely exposed, making it look like the roots are about to steal Angelus from him. The roots continue growing until they tower above every building in Tokyo. The hunters have no idea what's happening, but Nanus is convinced that whoever is controlling this phenomenon must be somewhere nearby. A moment later, she comes face to face with Midshield and wonders what the elf is doing there. Meanwhile, the battle between Shirasaki and Kurosaki is still raging. Shirasaki is visibly confused because his abilities aren't behaving the way they normally do. Kurosaki explains that no one can truly control black mana until they first overcome their addiction to it. Shirasaki has no idea what he's talking about, but he charges forward anyway, crashing straight into Kurosaki's barrier. The barrier doesn't even last a second before shattering into pieces. Even so, Kurosaki somehow manages to redirect the attack back at his opponent. Shirasaki is stunned. This man actually knows a way to survive black mana poisoning. If that's truly possible, then maybe, just maybe, his brother Sada is still alive somewhere. He instinctively retreats, and Kurosaki tells him that whatever he's thinking can wait. Right now, he needs to focus on the battle. He also warns that absorbing and controlling black mana isn't something an ordinary person can accomplish. Eris notices something unusual, and Shirasaki realizes his black lightning mana has been absorbed. Kurosaki immediately retaliates by unleashing a massive purple slash toward both of them. The attack appears to pass straight between them, and they dodge it with ease. The building behind them is sliced to pieces, but neither of them is injured. Kurosaki smirks, convinced their abilities have become completely useless. He rushes forward once more, when his sword and legs suddenly begin freezing solid. It was Eris who cast the ice. Shirasaki asks whether she somehow restored everyone's mana despite the debuff. Eris replies that not entirely, but Haruto is flooding the battlefield with an endless supply of mana. She's still fighting with only a about half of her normal strength, yet even that is enough to hold Kurosaki back. The moment Kurosaki hears the words infinite mana, his expression changes. He instantly shatters the ice surrounding him, and Eris realizes that fighting with only half her strength won't be enough. Even so, she launches another spell without hesitation. Kurosaki tells her to stop wasting her time with such half-hearted attacks because the result will never change. He casually walks straight through her magic, declaring himself the guild master of the Blood Tower Guild. Then he closes the distance and strikes directly at Eris. She quickly deploys multiple magic circles to block the attack. Kurosaki warns her that ordinary human-made barriers are useless against him. He can absorb any form of mana and grow even stronger. He tears through the barrier with ease and even drags Eris toward him, but she refuses to give up. She pulls out a magic scroll, tears it in half, and instantly creates another defensive barrier. Kurosaki admits that this barrier is incompatible with his mana absorption, but simply destroys it through brute force with a single strike anyway. At that moment, Shirasaki rejoins the battle, charging forward while unleashing another barrage of black lightning. Even though he already knows Kurosaki can absorb his power, the lightning still manages to knock him back before it's completely absorbed. That brief opening allows Eris to unleash another massive ice explosion. Surprisingly, Kurosaki is gradually being pushed onto the defensive. Even with his absorption ability, he's struggling against two opponents who aren't even fighting at full strength. Shirasaki coldly tells him it's far too soon for a low-ranking thug to call himself a guild master. He demands that Kurosaki reveal where he obtained the Shadow Step ability, warning that otherwise death will be the least of his worries. Kurosaki simply smiles, saying he finally understands why Shirasaki has been searching for him all this time. Shirasaki's expression turns icy as he repeats his ultimatum: answer or die. Kurosaki ignores the threat completely and says he recently heard something very interesting from Lucas. Before he can finish his sentence, he suddenly unleashes a burst of purple energy mixed with ice, instantly trapping Shirasaki. Shirasaki crashes to the ground, frozen in place, and when he looks down, he sees a vision of his younger brother Sada, poisoned and slowly dying. Just as the flashback reaches its emotional peak, the scene cuts back to Midshield approaching the bound Lucas. Midshield asks whether Lucas really ended up becoming friends with the owner of Control Plus C. Before Lucas can answer, someone suddenly snatches the sacred sword from his grasp, explaining that they've been waiting a long time to obtain it because it's essential to their plan. Only then does Lucas realize the heartbreaking truth. He had been kept alive from the very beginning solely because of the sacred sword. Midshield calmly replies that, of course, Lucas was chosen for that reason. The power of Control Plus F is indispensable for supporting Control Plus C. Only by combining Control Plus C with the sacred sword can he hope to save his homeland. Now that he has what he came for, Midshield decides to reveal the truth. Every elf in his dimension is afflicted by a terrible curse, including himself. A confused Lucas asks if that means Midshield intends to steal Control Plus C from Haruto. Midshield explains that, unfortunately, he can't absorb a curse that originated in another dimension. However, if Haruto dies now, Control Plus C will automatically transfer to Lucas. When the host of a control curse dies, its power passes to the nearest person who possesses another control type ability. Once Lucas inherits Control Plus C, Michael will appear, kill him, and absorb both powers. Lucas is devastated as he realizes he was nothing more than a disposable pawn from the very beginning. At that very moment, a cloud of smoke suddenly erupts behind Midshield. Haruto steps out, saying he just overheard something very interesting. He immediately launches an attack, but Midshield blocks it with ease. Midshield retaliates by attacking with giant vines, remarking that it's amusing Haruto copied the Shadow Step ability. Haruto fires back, declaring that he already knows Midshield is the one responsible for opening the portals across Tokyo. He immediately unleashes his sand-based attack, but Midshield barely reacts, saying, "Haruto is wasting his incredible talent." Webs rush toward Midshield, yet he shields himself with massive branches, claiming attacks like these won't even leave a scratch. Haruto calmly replies that true strength doesn't come from the ability itself. It comes from how the ability is used. With those words, he activates his next technique. Haruto combines the power of the Callous Dragon Sword with the Bear Claws technique. The reinforced webs slice straight through the massive roots, but Midshield escapes before they're able to trap him. He admits he's impressed, though he expected Haruto to be more desperate considering he's carrying the strongest curse of them all. In the next instant, Haruto appears above and behind him, asking if he's finally run out of words after witnessing his true fighting style. Midshield dodges the surprise attack and calmly replies that, if anything, it only makes him want to steal Haruto's power even more. Haruto grabs him by the shoulder and reveals that this was exactly what he had been aiming for from the beginning. His real target was Midshield's subspace, but when the system attempts to locate it, finds nothing. No subspace can be detected. Midshield seizes Haruto's arm and explains that nothing belonging to him can be copied. He then throws Haruto away, like a rag doll, before smashing him across the face with a massive tentacle. Meanwhile, Lucas stares blankly at his own hands, still struggling to accept that he'd been manipulated from the very beginning. Now that he's lost the sacred sword's power, he can no longer control Control plus F. As a result, an overwhelming flood of information begins pouring into his mind. In that instant, he starts questioning why Midshield and Control plus C are connected in the first place. What exactly is Midshield trying to accomplish? And is that enormous structure before him the subspace under Midshield's control? Lucas feels as though he's finally beginning to perceive Midshield's hidden subspace with his own eyes. He wonders why the subspace is so unbelievably massive. Then it suddenly hits him. The subspace and the sacred sword seem to share the same nature. Maybe Midshield is using a completely different type of artifact. That would explain why Haruto was unable to copy it. Haruto had been trying to imitate an ability when, in reality, that was never the correct target. Meanwhile, the battle with the man who stole the sacred sword continues. Kurosaki tells Shirasaki that he'll remain trapped in the abyss forever, at least until someone finally kills him. He immediately shifts his attention and attacks Eris, asking whether she's Nishihara's daughter. Eris extends her hand and instantly raises a massive wall of ice. Once again, however, Kurosaki shatters it with ease, remarking that he'll simply need to change his approach. On his next attack, he moves with incredible speed, but Eris narrowly avoids the strike. Unfortunately, Kurosaki had already predicted her dodge and appears beside her, swinging his sword again. Eris responds by pouring an enormous amount of mana into yet another ice barrier. Kurosaki comments that her determination to find her mother is almost enough to move him to tears. Eris ignores the taunt completely, declaring that the most dangerous people are often the foolish ones. She insists she won't lose today because true strength belongs to those who devote themselves to mastering a single path. She has spent her entire life perfecting one thing alone, her ice magic. Now that lifetime of training reveals its true power. A gigantic meteor of ice, large enough to rival a building, crashes straight down onto Kurosaki. The impact detonates in the middle of the city with a massive explosion. A raging snowstorm spreads across the battlefield, turning the entire area into a frozen wasteland. Even Kurosaki is stunned, asking if Eris has lost her mind by unleashing an attack like that in the middle of a city. But when he tries to stand, he realizes half of his body has already been frozen solid. Eris walks toward him and calmly tells him not to worry because every civilian had already been evacuated. She adds that, just like her master, Shirasaki also specializes in mastering a single ability. Kurosaki's expression instantly changes when Shirasaki steps forward. For the first time, Kurosaki realizes there's no escape. Shirasaki's eyes glow with a deep purple light as he begins using black mana. Kurosaki demands to know how he absorbed the abyss's power without losing himself. Shirasaki simply replies that he made a promise. He would be the one to kill Kurosaki. In the next instant, he swings his blade, releasing a devastating slash that cuts straight through his opponent. Kurosaki is split cleanly in half. Eris asks whether there wasn't something Shirasaki still wanted to ask Kurosaki, but Shirasaki calmly replies that he already learned everything he needed. Sending him into the abyss had been Kurosaki's greatest mistake. While trapped there, Shirasaki discovered the secret to overcoming black mana addiction. The very dark abilities Kurosaki possessed became the key to finding that answer. He remembers Sada once bringing him a book that described a forbidden black mana technique, suggesting it might prove useful one day. Back then, Shirasaki rejected the idea because tampering with black mana seemed far too dangerous. But now he believes Sada was clever enough to uncover the same answer and somehow survive. With that conviction, Shirasaki launches into the sky and tells Eris they need to help Haruto immediately. He promises he'll explain everything later. For now, having even a small glimmer of hope is enough to keep moving forward. Meanwhile, Haruto is still locked in battle against the elf Midshield. Growing increasingly frustrated by Haruto's constant teleportation, Midshield declares that he'll seal that annoying ability once and for all. He drives the sacred sword into the ground beside Haruto's feet and the blade begins to glow. After releasing its power, Midshield announces that every black mana ability has now been rendered useless. Haruto charges forward, assuming that if Midshield sealed black mana, his own techniques should be affected as well. Instead, Midshield calmly explains that controlling mana after it's been nullified poses no problem for him, and immediately grabs Haruto around the waist. He prepares to finish the battle, but Haruto narrowly manages to block the incoming strike. His sword is completely destroyed in the process, shattering into pieces, but that isn't enough to stop him. He immediately activates Control plus V. In an instant, Haruto pulls out the Callous Dragon Sword. Mid-shield recognizes it at once, realizing it's a copy of Frederick's legendary blade. Haruto simply confirms it before unleashing a brilliant beam of light straight at his opponent. Mid-shield blocks the attack while calmly declaring that, just as he expected, the power contained within that sword is truly extraordinary. Haruto charges forward again, refusing to believe that's enough to stop him. Just as he swings down with a powerful overhead strike, Mid-shield's expression suddenly changes. Portal opens behind him, and in an instant, he disappears right before Haruto's eyes. The very next moment, he reappears behind Haruto and drives his blade into Haruto's shoulder. Mid-shield calmly remarks that simply leveling up with the sword doesn't mean Haruto has the experience needed to use it properly. Haruto pays no attention to the taunt. The only thing on his mind is figuring out how to steal Mid-shield's abilities. He quickly pulls a healing potion from his inventory, but the system immediately displays a warning. Wounds inflicted by the sacred sword cannot be healed. Mid-shield laughs, saying he knew those potions would be useless. After landing another strike, he asks Haruto what else he plans to copy. "Aren't you the owner of Control Plus C? Don't tell me you've already run out of tricks." Haruto simply smiles and replies that the real battle is only beginning. Then suddenly, a brilliant slash cuts across the battlefield. A sudden slash flies in from Mid-shield's blind side. He tries to block it, but the impact sends him flying across the battlefield. To make matters worse, the sacred sword slips from his grasp. Before he can regain his footing, a storm of hellfire crashes down from above, forcing him to raise a wall of vines to shield himself. And with blue flames like those, there's only one person it could be. It's Nanu's. Haruto thanks her, and she replies that thanks to his army of golems, nearly every monster in the city has already been eliminated. Haruto isn't surprised. He never stopped gaining experience throughout the entire battle. At that moment, Lucas steps forward and picks up the sacred sword. He declares that today Mid-shield will finally pay for everything he did to him and his family. Nanu's hellfire continues burning away the vines, so Mid-shield retreats into a portal, muttering that her flames are far more troublesome than he expected. Even so, he insists they won't last forever. He retaliates by sending a wave of gigantic roots toward Haruto and Nanu's. Nanu's immediately answers that burning a few corrupted trees won't be difficult. Mid-shield refuses to back down and launches an even greater barrage of roots from above, trying to overwhelm them. He attempts to imprison Nanu's inside a massive cage of twisting vines, but she effortlessly cuts through it with a single swing of her witch's blade. Before Mid-shield can even think of a counter, Haruto suddenly appears right behind him, announcing that he's far from finished. His sword lands what seems to be a devastating slash, but when the smoke clears, Mid-shield calmly steps out of yet another portal. "I'm done playing around," he declares. "It's time for the final chapter." The ground beneath them begins to split apart, and countless seeds from the corrupted trees start sprouting across the battlefield. Nanu's immediately attacks them with another burst of flames, but the instant the seeds are destroyed, a thick purple mist spreads in every direction. Mid-shield announces that this fog is 10 times more toxic than before. Anyone who comes into contact with it will immediately become addicted to black mana, and the more mana they use afterward, the deeper that addiction will become. Haruto briefly wonders if he should have copied the sacred sword after all, even if it meant sacrificing Shadow Step. At that very moment, Lucas drives the sacred sword into the ground. A brilliant pillar of light erupts outward, and the poisonous mist begins fading away as it's purified in every direction. Lucas stands firm. Lucas stands resolutely, holding the radiant sacred sword as it shines with overwhelming power. Nanu's and Haruto watch in silence, while Mid-shield completely loses his composure, shouting, "What do you think you're doing?" He unleashes another storm of vines toward them, but Lucas keeps advancing without slowing down. He declares that Mid-shield betrayed him first, and he no longer cares about anything else. As Lucas approaches, the elf mocks him, asking whether he no longer cares about his own family. Lucas, however, leaps forward, shouting that he's tired of living as someone else's pawn. He activates Angelus's spear technique, but Mid-shield blocks the attack once again. As always, he tries to escape through another portal, arrogantly claiming that no attack can ever reach him. Lucas shouts after him that he isn't getting away because he wants to see what happens when a black mana user is pierced by the sacred sword. Lucas is forced to dodge Mid-shield's counterattack, but in the process, the sacred sword shatters the very portal Mid-shield was using. Even so, the elf follows up by driving a massive root straight into Lucas's chest. Despite that, the portal has truly been destroyed. Nanu's realizes Mid-shield has nowhere left to escape. This is his final stand. For the first time, Mid-shield's expression fills with genuine fear as he realizes that if Nanu's hellfire reaches him in his current condition, he's in genuine danger. He desperately raises uses more roots to defend himself, but Nanu's hellfire has already spread across the city, raging completely out of control. At that moment, Lucas calls out to Haruto, saying he finally understands why Control plus C was never able to copy Midshield's powers. It's because they aren't abilities at all. They come from an item just like the sacred sword. Most likely, it's an artifact that connects Midshield to another dimension, which would explain how someone not from Earth can remain here. Nanus asks how Midshield is even able to survive in this world. Crossing over during a dungeon break should require an enormous amount of mana just to stay alive. Lucas says he's already considered that. That means Midshield must be relying on some kind of item, or perhaps another unique power, to anchor himself in this dimension. Haruto is delighted by the revelation. He finally understands why copying failed all this time. He had been targeting the wrong thing. Then another question comes to mind. Why is Lucas suddenly helping them? Lucas replies that it's out of respect because Haruto had every opportunity to kill him and steal Control plus F, yet chose not to. Haruto quietly thinks to himself that he'd never take someone's life just to obtain a power. After overhearing the entire conversation, Nanus demands an explanation about these mysterious control abilities and copying powers. She also asks why Lucas is wielding the sacred sword when it was originally supposed to be delivered to Eris. Haruto freezes, unsure where to even begin explaining. Before anyone can say another word, the blazing flames suddenly part as huge branches erupt from within them. Midshield emerges once again, barely alive and badly battered, but still standing. The problem is that something about him has changed. Midshield has absorbed the mana from the corrupted roots into his own body. Completely unhinged, he screams that the real disaster begins now as Haruto narrowly avoids his first attack. Haruto narrowly avoids Midshield's frenzied attack and immediately shouts for Nanus to strike him with her hellfire. Lucas says he's ready to unleash the sacred light again whenever it's needed. Haruto rushes in first, telling them to block Midshield's line of sight. Nanus releases a towering wall of hellfire, sealing off the battlefield. While the elf's vision is obstructed, Haruto concentrates, trying to determine which item is actually granting Midshield his powers. He places his hand on one of the corrupted roots, and the system announces 2 additional fragments are required to absorb the ability and vitality of Yggdrasil. Haruto immediately activates Control plus V, and another notification appears, target HP 15%. Haruto realizes Midshield is probably seeing the exact same warning, meaning his opponent is already on the verge of collapse. He uses Control plus V on the first group of corrupted roots, instantly turning them gold. Midshield is completely stunned. Did he really just copy my corrupted tree? Before he can process what happened, Lucas dives in from above, shouting that now isn't the time to be distracted. Midshield attempts to activate the trunk ability, but the system rejects the command. Roots of Yggdrasil unavailable. Confused by the error, he almost gets struck across the head by Nanus's blazing whip. He narrowly dodges the attack, but the flames still slam directly into his chest. With his free hand, he desperately tries to open his subspace, but Lucas immediately shouts to Haruto not to let him activate it. Haruto instantly combines the copied root ability with his spiderweb and bear claws techniques, completely restraining both of Midshield's arms. Nanus then declares that anyone who crosses into this world from another dimension becomes humanity's enemy, and it's her duty to eliminate them. She says that's exactly why she can't allow him to survive. The blonde elf scoffs, calling it absurd that he's being treated like nothing more than a monster. Nanus smiles and calmly replies that she actually prefers monsters that die quickly. With those words, she unleashes another wave of hellfire that engulfs the entire street in blazing flames. The inferno completely consumes Midshield, leaving it impossible to imagine anyone surviving. Nanus even remarks that she's impressed he still has enough strength left to scream. But then Midshield's expression suddenly twists into madness as he declares that if he can't purify his own homeland, he'll make sure this world is destroyed as well. Lucas desperately begs him to stop, but in the next instant, a gigantic pillar of light erupts into the sky. Midshield calmly announces that now all of Tokyo is in danger, and he doesn't care in the slightest. Right before Haruto's eyes, an enormous subspace begins to materialize. Haruto realizes this may be his only chance to obtain a power like that, so without a moment's hesitation, he charges forward and drives his weapon straight into Midshield, straight through Midshield's abdomen. The impact is so powerful that Haruto loses his balance and falls into the rift along with him. His companions call out in panic, but Haruto is already drifting through a mysterious darkness filled with countless floating stars. Looking around, he wonders if this strange place is the subspace hidden inside Midshield's artifact. He kneels down, thinking that direct contact might be enough. The instant his hand touches the ground, the system announces, Control plus C available. It informs him that he can copy the subspace, but immediately issues another warning. Exact duplication application is impossible. This item is connected to another dimension. Haruto is left confused by the mention of another dimension, but he still succeeds in copying part of the subspace. However, he can only access a limited area unless he obtains a dimensional key. As the copied subspace synchronizes with the system, Haruto suddenly realizes he can open it just like his inventory. Ctrl+C, Ctrl+V, access levels, subspaces. The entire system is beginning to connect piece by piece. Everything is finally starting to come together. Midshield can't believe Ctrl+C is capable of copying even artifacts from another dimension. Then he realizes why. It works because dimensional fragments are technically classified as items. Haruto ignores his surprise and instead demands to know why Midshield has done all of this. Midshield finally begins explaining his past. His homeland is on the verge of extinction. He stole the dimensional key from the fallen spiritual king. Haruto immediately asks if that's the person he must defeat to completely copy this subspace. Midshield tells him to forget that idea. The spiritual king was the one who brought their world to ruin. Just before Midshield was killed, he managed to steal a fragment and escape through teleportation, the only reason he's still alive today. Haruto then asks how what was once an ability became an item. Midshield explains that he used a curse similar to Haruto's, except it originated in his own dimension. That curse is known as Shift, and with that revelation, just then Taikuchi arrives wearing his fully evolved armor, followed by an army of tiny golems. Mizadu rushes over from behind, calling out to everyone. Nanu smiles with relief, and soon the association president joins them, reporting that every monster in the surrounding area has been eliminated. Taikuchi is about to mention that something still remained in another part of the city when Shirasaki steps forward and calmly says it's already been taken care of. Nanu's immediately asks what happened to Kurosaki. His purple eyes still glowing, Shirasaki replies that Kurosaki refused to be captured, so he had no choice but to kill him. Nanu senses something unsettling about him, but she still praises him for finishing the job. Mizadu quickly asks where Haruto is. Nanu's explains that he's inside the dimensional space together with the elf. Mizadu warns that it's far too dangerous, but Nanu's reassures him that Midshield was already on the verge of death, so Haruto should be alright. Lucas, however, insists they need to seal the portal immediately before even stronger creatures emerge from it. Taikuchi turns toward Lucas and asks, who exactly is this blonde guy, and why is he holding the sacred sword? The situation instantly becomes incredibly awkward for Lucas. Nanu's immediately explains that Lucas had been working alongside the elf. Taikuchi doesn't take that lightly. He grabs Lucas by the throat and demands to know why a hunter from a prestigious family would cooperate with someone from another dimension. Lucas calmly answers that he'll accept full responsibility for everything he's done. Taikuchi glares at him, then throws him violently to the ground. He warns Lucas that once this battle is over, his entire family will have a great deal to answer for. Lucas silently gets back to his feet and rushes toward the dimensional portal, insisting they have to seal it before that creature appears. Meanwhile, inside the subspace, Haruto is shocked to learn that other worlds possess their own curses. Midshield admits he was just as surprised when he first discovered it, adding that its unfortunate shift only works on abilities. Then he asks whether Ctrl+C can steal something that exists exclusively in another dimension. At that moment, everything finally clicks for Haruto. Now he understands why they were hunting him all this time. Midshield reveals that once Michael obtains Ctrl+C, he'll open a permanent gateway between the two worlds and bring the Great Calamity to Earth. The plan had nearly succeeded 15 years ago if Nishihara hadn't interfered. Haruto points out that the plan failed back then, and now it's failed again, so why is Midshield acting as though he's already won? As Midshield's burning body begins to fade away, he calmly replies that his own death changes nothing. Suddenly, a gigantic claw bursts from the darkness and crushes his body without warning. The shockwave throws Haruto backward, and when he stands up and looks ahead, a colossal dragon suddenly towers over him. Haruto freezes in shock, unable to understand why such a creature exists inside the subspace. He spots Midshield's lifeless body lying in a pool of blood. There's no doubt about it, the elf is truly dead. But if that dragon escapes into Tokyo, the consequences will be catastrophic. The dragon swings its massive claws at him. Haruto narrowly dodges and starts running, desperately searching for some kind of exit. Suddenly, a brilliant light erupts from below as Lucas appears, telling Haruto not to panic. He insists that creatures inside a subspace are much weaker while raising the sacred sword. Haruto asks what Lucas plans to do, but before he can answer, the dragon lets out a deafening roar, sending Lucas flying with a single strike. The sacred sword slips from his grasp and crashes onto the ground, proving his confidence was badly misplaced. Haruto watches Lucas get completely overwhelmed while the sacred sacred sword lies, just a few steps away as the dragon closes in, preparing to crush him beneath its foot. Haruto charges forward and instantly activates Ctrl+V. Now he has to make a choice: reach for the sacred sword or risk everything without it. But before we continue, let's go back to the moment when Lucas was struck by the sacred sword's recoil and sent flying backward, while Haruto could only watch as the enormous dragon advanced toward both of them. Now let's rewind the story by about 10 minutes. Back then, Nanus was gaining an unbelievable amount of experience. She couldn't understand it because a hunter of her level shouldn't be receiving experience this quickly. The only explanation was that the elf had actually died. What puzzled her was that, before dying, he muttered something about being treated like a monster. Then the system displayed a notification: mid-shield, elf from Gedrosi, level 345. It also showed that Nanus had contributed 75% of the damage. She finally understood. Because mid-shield came from another dimension, the system had classified him as a monster. A moment later, Morgrant walks over to the others and asks where Haruto is. Nanus sadly replies that he's still trapped inside the dimensional space. Worse yet, the energy surrounding it continues rising without any sign of stopping. Then the entire portal explodes and someone is violently thrown out. It's Haruto, crashing back into the real world while carrying the unconscious blonde youth in his arms. Everyone stares at the scene in shock as the two of them slam into the ground. Everyone immediately rushes over, calling out to Haruto. Without hesitation, Haruto shouts for everyone to get back and throws himself toward the portal once again. He reaches straight into the dimensional rift and activates Ctrl+V, desperately trying to force the subspace closed. He keeps pushing with everything he has, begging the portal to finally disappear. Even so, the unstable energy continues expanding. Nanus suddenly notices that the subspace is actually beginning to shrink and realizes Haruto is really managing to affect it. Then a Crimson System message appears: subspace cannot be closed due to the force contained within. Haruto watches in horror as the portal suddenly tears back open. A gigantic dragon's head slowly begins emerging from the rift. The moment everyone sees it, they instinctively start fleeing. Morgrant recognizes the creature immediately. It's the very same dragon that destroyed England 15 years ago. If that monster fully escapes the portal, humanity won't stand a chance. Yet despite the hopeless situation, Haruto is the only one who refuses to give up. Then he realizes the dragon's enormous head has already forced its way through the portal. Haruto knows they have to stop it somehow before the rest of its body emerges. Haruto immediately activates Ctrl+V, summoning the roots of Yggdrasil. A massive root erupts from the ground at incredible speed, wrapping itself around the dragon as everyone watches in complete confusion, unable to understand what's happening. The dragon is quickly bound by the enormous roots, and Haruto briefly looks relieved, but he knows it won't be enough. Satoru wears a hopeful smile, while Nanu senses that something isn't right. She can't feel any hostility coming from the dragon. On top of that, the roots resemble the very same power Midshield used, making her question Haruto's new ability. The other hunters, unaware of any danger, begin celebrating. Morgrant, however, immediately realizes something is wrong. There's no way a dragon powerful enough to destroy an entire country could be restrained by a few roots. As everyone desperately hopes they'll hold, the dragon tears itself free. It opens its jaws and begins charging an enormous blast of fire. Taikuchi orders everyone to get behind his shield. At the same time, the association president tells everyone to stay within range because he's about to deploy his strongest barrier. A gigantic protective sphere rapidly expands around them, and a moment later, the dragon's flames crash into it. Sometime later, the survivors slowly look around and realize they're still alive. Against all expectations, they made it through the attack. Taikuchi's shield successfully protects everyone. The entire street is devastated, but somehow every hunter inside the barrier survives. Cheers immediately erupt across the battlefield. Satoru's first concern, however, is finding Haruto. It turns out Haruto protected himself by surrounding his body with Yggdrasil's branches. Brushing the remaining flames from his clothes, he calmly says that attack was impossible to stop completely. Just then, something unexpected happens. Haruto notices Lucas nearby and asks what he's doing there. Lucas explains that he was simply thrown out of the subspace as well, then insists they should immediately begin evacuating the lower-ranked hunters. The fact that they're discussing a full retreat shows just how desperate the situation has become. Lucas warns that even if every S-rank hunter gathered here, they still wouldn't be able to defeat that dragon. Its scales are harder than anything they've ever encountered. Neither ordinary weapons nor magic will be able to harm it. Haruto realizes this was their enemy's true objective all along, to unleash this monster and destroy everything. Lucas then says there may still be one solution. Michael's curse could erase it. Like Haruto, Michael is both a control-type curse user and a field master. monster. But Haruto points out the obvious problem: they have no way of reaching Michael. Meanwhile, aboard a helicopter, several people discuss how they're going to deal with the dragon. The man carrying the triangular artifact says that for now, they won't make a move until they've gathered more information about the monster. He calmly concludes that everything should be left in Michael's hands. He asks Midshield what the next step of the plan is, and Midshield replies that there is still a way for Michael-sama to become the one who opens the gate. He explains that Tomoko Nishihara had already laid the foundation for the first gate by attempting to connect Earth with the Elves' dimension after uncovering Midshield's true objective. Michael calmly responds that everything is proceeding exactly according to plan. Midshield then reveals a mysterious stone, explaining that it is the Guardian Stone passed down through the Elves. The moment it begins to glow, it signifies his death, and it also reveals who killed him. Watching from above, someone remarks that this is the perfect opportunity for Michael to make his move. Soon, the Guardian Stone begins emitting a faint light. The light identifies the one who killed Midshield, Nanus. Michael quietly swears that avenging Midshield is already part of his plan. Unlike many villains, he genuinely intends to repay those who fought alongside him. Meanwhile, the hunters continue being overwhelmed by the dragon. Even the lower-ranked hunters are desperately struggling to survive as chaos spreads across the battlefield. Shirasaki tries once more, firing another blast of black lightning. The dragon remains completely unharmed. Shirasaki grits his teeth, realizing that magic is utterly ineffective against it. He demands to know what they're supposed to do if magic can't hurt the creature. Are they really expected to stand there and watch? Someone explains that physical attacks can still inflict damage, but the dragon's defenses are on an entirely different level from anything they can overcome. Shirasaki says that if Master Taikuchi were here, he'd surely find a way to deal with the monster, then wonders where he disappeared to. Suddenly, a J-rank hunter points into the distance and asks, "Wait, is that Master Taikuchi?" The figure lying against the ground looks so battered that he resembles an ancient mummy pulled straight from the mountains. A young hunter assumes Taikuchi must have been caught in the dragon's breath and nearly melted alive, but there was no chance someone like him would go down so easily. The pile of rubble suddenly begins to crack, and Taikuchi bursts out from beneath it, protected by his stone armor. He survived the flames and is now absolutely furious with the dragon. The other hunters cheer, shouting that they knew Master Taikuchi wouldn't be defeated. Taikuchi, however, isn't celebrating. His first concern is figuring out how anyone is supposed to defeat a dragon of that size. Then he notices strange black metal fragments rising from the ground and wonders who's responsible for them. Meanwhile, Nanu swings her witch's blade and launches another spinning crescent slash toward the dragon's head, but it accomplishes absolutely nothing. The dragon simply roars in response. Haruto rushes in and activates Ctrl+V, summoning the roots of Yggdrasil once again. He tries to force the dragon's jaws shut, but the monster effortlessly bites through the roots and crushes everything beneath its feet. Haruto realizes the painful truth: his ability isn't affecting the dragon at all. Lucas suddenly asks Haruto to place the dragon inside his copied subspace. The others are confused by the unexpected suggestion. Lucas explains that if they can drag the dragon into the subspace, they'll be able to use the sacred sword against it far more effectively.